Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today I wanted to cover a what if that has been on my mind for a while now. Which that what if is, of course, what if Yuji had started out with blood manipulation, or what if Yuji awoke blood manipulation early? Now normally I would bring us immediately into the story, start out with narrating all that good jazz after explaining the scenario. However, there is one thing I do need to note, because this is a very weird occurrence that doesn't really happen in most of my videos, where I'm going to have to start out with a massive spoiler warning because there is several manga spoilers. Normally my what ifs is either pretty clear when it covers the manga parts, or just the fact that we're not actually in the manga yet. So yeah, spoilers ahead. Anyway, that should be long enough, so let's get started. Our story begins far before anything happened in JJK, far before our original timeline started, far before JJK 0, even far before Gojo had fought Toji. In this timeline, Kenjaku had done a little bit more research than he did on the death paintings, as he had an idea. He wanted to make sure this boy was a strong vessel and cage for Ryoma and Sukuna. However, he wasn't too sure if this boy was going to awaken a curse technique or not, so he decided to guarantee it. As not just did Kenjaku infuse one of Ryoma and Sukuna's fingers in him, he also infused several of the death painting parts inside of Yuji. As now a small part of every single death painting was present inside of Yuji Itadori, changing his body to be that of a death painting, as well as the physical strength buff that Yuji got from having one of the fingers sealed inside of him for so long. This also led to a situation that Kenjaku set up to make sure that the death paintings did get captured by Jujutsu sorcerers. As the death paintings were still alive, they just had a piece of them missing that they could recover easily later on. After Kenjaku was done, he left. As tempted as he was to train the boy from scratch, they wanted to see how far Yuji would go with blood manipulation. After all, 3 of the siblings seemed to have a natural talent for it, so he wondered if Yuji would be the same, since he has parts of all 9 siblings, and how this would end up developing. He wanted to see the power Yuji would naturally develop. This leads to some changes in the start of the timeline, happening rather early. The first change is pretty simple. Yuji can naturally see cursed spirits now, and already starts with cursed energy. Due to being born with a technique, he naturally awoke his cursed energy. However, he has no one to teach him properly how to use his cursed energy reinforcement to its utmost. So he has the natural usage of it already, but he's not too skilled with it yet. 2. Yuji sometimes can sense and talk to people in his dreams, people that have told him that they are his 10th sibling, which he doesn't actually know even if these dreams are real or just something of his subconscious. Unknown to him, he is accidentally using the blood connection ability to talk mainly to Choso, Eso, and Kechizu, but he does also end up talking to his other brothers as well. While Yuji does try and tell his grandfather about them, his grandfather just tells him it's a kid dreaming thing. Finally, there are abilities we need to discuss. Which abilities would Yuji have access to? Well, for the sake of not making him too busted in the start, he is only going to have Flowing Red Scale Stack, Blood Meteorite, and Blood Edge. Mainly just hand-to-hand techniques, as that seems to be Yuji's main talent. Furthermore, while Yuji is trying to learn more about his gift, he doesn't like using it too much. A mix of him not really having much desire to be a fighter, as well as his grandfather wanting to make sure that his curse technique was more hidden. Not much changes in the rest of the timeline. Hidden inventory and JJK 0 all go pretty similar to canon. However, where things start to change is JJK itself. Megumi is sent out to get one of Sukuna's fingers that has been spotted recently. Gojo, of course, was with him, which was the reason why they didn't send out more sorcerers besides Gojo, of course. However, Gojo was getting food, so yeah, he was of no help really. When Megumi first met Yuji though, he was immediately able to sense the curse energy Yuji had. Not just the residues from the finger, but also the fact that Yuji was a sorcerer, and unregistered one at that, which did confuse him. After all, not just did he have immense physical strength that surpassed even Maki without curse energy, but he had a curse technique too. This was a first. Before Megumi could even reach Yuji though, Yuji had already ran in quite a hurry to get to the hospital, using his curse technique Flowing Red Scale to get there even faster because of the hurry he was in. Megumi was already somewhat confused. He also had noticed a grade 2 curse around and wondered if this was because of Sukuna or not. Yuji had went to visit Wasuke, hearing that this was his last words. While Wasuke was able to tell Yuji about his parents, Yuji told him already that he didn't care. This was when Wasuke gave his final words. However, he did make sure to add one more thing before he left, which was telling Yuji his siblings in his dreams were real and they wanted nothing more than to help it. Call it an old man's instinct. This left Yuji both feeling sad about this while also feeling curious. He wanted to go to sleep soon, see if he could reconnect with those dreams. However, after signing a form, he met with Megumi. This led to eventually Megumi and Yuji going back to the school, while Megumi on the way there gave a brief explanation on cursed energy. He had to admit he was surprised that Yuji, despite having a curse technique, doesn't actually know what cursed energy is. He also told him that his technique was blood manipulation. However, this time when they arrived, they saw what was shock to them. A massive cursed spirit that was in the shape of a serpent around the school that seemed to be chasing two people down in hopes of getting a finger. A grade 1 level cursed spirit that Kenjaku had sent out in order to make sure that what was going to happen would happen. Both members of the occult club were currently trying to hide and run for their lives, having already unsealed the Sukuna finger, which was what the cursed spirit seemed to be after. Sakashi was already injured and Setsuko was running out of stamina and getting tired. This was when Nue slammed into the cursed spirit, while at the same time Yuji hopped into the building, picked up the both of them, and jumped out, taking them out of the building and leaving both Yuji and Megumi to have to fight against the cursed spirit. Unlike in canon where Megumi told Yuji to stay outside, in this timeline he saw Yuji as a necessary ally, mainly thanks to his ability to use blood manipulation and curse energy already. While Yuji wasn't experienced in combat against higher-end cursed spirits like this one, so was Megumi, so they both needed to make sure that they were going to win and have each other's backs. As Yuji immediately started out by using Flowing Red Scale with his immense amount of physical strength and speed to jump at the cursed spirit with a massive amount of speed, one that exceeded Megumi by a long shot. As Yuji went for a punch on the cursed spirit's eye, while at the same time Megumi summoned Orochi in order to slam the cursed spirit into the wall. However, with a whip of its tail was able to launch Yuji and Orochi away from them, as Yuji was quickly able to get back up, with Megumi summoning both of his dogs in order to back Yuji up. Yuji and the wolves ended up jumping onto the spirit's head and beginning to punch down the spirit's head. Yuji at the same time used Blood Edge to make a sword of blood to repeatedly stab at the cursed spirit. While Megumi tried to use Nue in order to launch a burst of lightning and slam down on the cursed spirit, trying to force it to stay still so Yuji could try and repeatedly land hits on it as well as his dogs. But even with those strikes, while they did do damage, it wasn't enough to put this thing down, as Yuji quickly stood in the way in order to defend the dogs while using Blood Meteorite to heavily amplify his durability as they were all launched down into the ground. This is when the serpent attempted to do a charge on Megumi to try and slam into him, but Yuji was quick enough to activate Flowing Red Scale Stack and slam into the cursed spirit, slamming it into a wall. Now that speed was inhuman. Megumi was pretty sure in that instance that Yuji might have actually been the same speed, if not a bit faster than Nanami Kento. However, Yuji very quickly deactivated Flowing Red Scale Stack, explaining that he can only really use that in bursts, he can't actually use that all the time. However, this cursed spirit was far from done, as it wrapped its tail around Yuji and slammed him into the ground hard, before slamming him into Megumi and breaking the wall of the school. The cursed spirit was about to try and charge on the wolves as well, but Megumi was quick to deactivate them, as it knew if that actually succeeded then the wolves would end up dying. He also deactivated Nue and Orochi. Megumi began to attempt to think of a new plan, but they didn't have that time to think, as that cursed spirit instead decided to slam its massive body weight right down on Yuji and Megumi. This led to Megumi summoning Orochi once more, with a mix of Yuji uppercutting the cursed spirit, launching the cursed spirit away. However, while they were able to launch it away, the damage they did to the cursed spirit was only minor. Furthermore, even though it was being launched, it was able to counterattack by wrapping its tail around Megumi and slamming him into the ground as well, as it began to coil its tail around Megumi even tighter, aiming to end Megumi's life right here and now. Yuji didn't have enough power. He didn't have the power necessary to free Megumi or save him, as he was thinking on what he could do, trying to find some solution, but there was one solution that came to mind. He needed more power, and he himself was not strong enough to do so yet. He himself wasn't strong enough to save Megumi. So this led to Yuji consuming the finger of Sukuna, becoming the new vessel of Ryomen Sukuna. As Ryomen Sukuna has now reawakened in this modern era, with the cursed spirit immediately letting go of Megumi and rushing at Sukuna, seeing Sukuna as the immediate threat. They wanted to kill Sukuna, but when they tried, they were sliced apart into pieces before being disintegrated into ashes. But it didn't take long until after Yuji had regained control over his body, forcing Sukuna back down. He was doing so even faster than he would do normally, but that was because of a mixture of the fact he had a stronger body while also having curse energy right off the bat. Sukuna in that moment had to question who this Yuji Itadori brat was. However, he was a bit more suspicious about this than he would be normally. Not just did Yuji have better physicals than most humans, but he also had a body that was a mix of a curse and human. This had Kenjaku written all over it, but Sukuna decided to stay quiet about this. Before Megumi could summon Maharaga, Gojo had arrived, as Gojo was even more curious about Yuji thanks to his circumstances. In Gojo's confidence, he decided why not let Sukuna challenge him for a bit. He wanted to see how strong Sukuna was and to see if Yuji could really control Sukuna. Megumi questioned for a moment if this was really a good idea considering Yuji also had a curse technique already, but Gojo said it would be fine. Yuji then gave control back to Sukuna for a moment, for 10 seconds, as Sukuna immediately activated Flowing Red Scale Stack. Mix that with Sukuna's curse energy and he was significantly faster than he was normally. In terms of speed, he would be even faster than when he fought Megumi back in the detention center. However, this speed wasn't a problem for Gojo. As Sukuna went for a Clawed Strike on Gojo, however Gojo was able to spin around the Clawed Strike, causing Sukuna to trip as he moved to sit down on Sukuna's back. This caused Sukuna to launch out a wave of slashes towards Gojo as Gojo hopped back, moving his hands into his pockets in the process as he avoided the slashes, looking pretty cool in the process. But Sukuna clapped his hands together, remembering a technique he had seen back in the Heian era, Piercing Blood, as he fired out a burst of compressed blood right at Gojo. However, this wasn't really an issue to Gojo, as Gojo's Infinity stopped the Piercing Blood, as he blinked to himself thinking that was fast. While he started to count down as Yuji retook control over his body, Gojo had to admit he was impressed that Yuji could actually manage to take control back from the King of Curses of all people. After this fight, it didn't take long for Yuji to faint, being completely exhausted from everything that had just happened today. As Yuji reawoke in a picnic area, one that he had been in so many times. However, this time, it was a little bit different, as there wasn't actually all 9 of his brothers, but just one of them there, which was Choso. At first, Yuji was confused at why it was only Choso, as every single time he had one of these dreams, it had always been with all of his brothers, so why only Choso? Why was Choso the only one here, as Choso explained something to Yuji? Choso explained that he wasn't too sure if Sukuna could interfere with the connection or not. Even at one finger of power, he was still too strong for most of them. He might have even been too strong for Choso, but just by sending out Choso, they wanted to be careful. They wanted to make sure that most of the brothers wouldn't be harmed, and Choso was pretty certain that he would be the one who would take the least amount of damage. Or at least that he would be able to take the damage the best in case Sukuna could interfere. However, it did seem like Sukuna couldn't really interfere in this mindscape. At least based on what they could tell, Sukuna could not interfere. Unknown to them, Sukuna was stealthily listening in that moment, as he was always listening and he was curious where this was going to go, but he also just made his presence not known at all, mainly because he did want to see, but he didn't want to interrupt. As Choso explained to him that Yuji was a death painting, and that Yuji was now going to become a Jujutsu sorcerer, however he could not tell the other sorcerers that he was a death painting. If they knew not just was he the vessel of Sukuna, but also that he was half curse, half person, they would more than likely want to execute him significantly more than they already do. In truth, Choso didn't really want Yuji to become a sorcerer. He did not want that world for him. He wanted Yuji to have a somewhat normal life. Of course, Yuji was going to have blood manipulation and get better and stronger, but all he really wanted was for Yuji to have a normal life. After all, Choso and his brothers wanted what was best for them. Of course, Choso and his brothers at first thought they would have to work with curses because a cursed world was more better for them than a human world. However, their brother Yuji was one that lived in a human world, and a human world was much more fitting for them. So if a human world was more fitting for Yuji, then of course they wanted the best for Yuji. This was when Choso then explained to Yuji that he was going to need to get much stronger from here on out. The issue was that Choso couldn't really help him that much. One of the biggest things that Choso always wanted to do was teach Yuji how to fight, teach Yuji how to use these techniques. However, he got them too instinctually. While he could somewhat help with the hand-to-hand techniques that Yuji had picked up, he couldn't really help too much with the other range techniques that he really wanted to teach Yuji, other than maybe Supernova, but even then that wouldn't work considering the fact that Yuji had not picked up on using Convergence yet. So he told Yuji that he was going to have to find his own path of blood manipulation as well as curse energy, and he was going to have to get stronger on his own, and maybe one day they could actually end up meeting properly. As he dropped a final secret, which was the fact that his brothers were actually stored in the vault in Jujutsu High. However, currently they were in containers, and it wouldn't be best to actually tell Gojo or the others that that was the case, mainly because they didn't want them to be aware of the fact that they were there. Since this would make it very clear that Yuji was a death painting after all, and that would be the worst case scenario for Yuji. And Sukuna, upon hearing the confirmation that Yuji was a death painting, was able to immediately confirm his suspicion that Kenjaku was behind Yuji's existence. However, there wasn't really much more to discuss over the dreams, so instead the two of them began to discuss how Yuji really felt about what had happened today. Yuji had felt a mixture of emotions. He was of course still sad about his grandfather dying. After all, that was his only family member left aside from his brothers. He was still shocked to learn about the entire world of Jujutsu sorcery. After all, he was aware of curse energy, but he just thought he was a normal person. He didn't think there was anything more to this world, and he just thought he was a normal person with special gifts. However, no, there is an entire world of Jujutsu sorcery, but most of all, he wanted to learn more so he could help give people good deaths. And that was what he was going to drive himself to do, which Choso was proud of his brother for deciding that was his goal, and he was going to encourage him as best he could. This then leads to Yuji waking up and getting the whole explanation from Gojo, with that entire part going the same, as well as the Repugnite curse with Nobara battling against it, mainly because that was made for Nobara to show off, so Yuji doesn't really change that much about it. However, Nobara won't call him a clueless normie, mainly because of the fact that Yuji's not a clueless normie since he starts out with blood manipulation, he knows what curse energy is, and he knew what curses were. It was the fact that he didn't know what the Jujutsu system was and how it functioned. However, the next change comes at the detention center, when Yuji and Megumi encounter the Finger Bearer. I still see Yuji telling Megumi to run in order to get help, while he himself fights against the Finger Bearer in a 1v1. The battle started with Yuji activating Flowing Red Scale right off the bat. After all, he could already sense that if he weren't to go all out, then he wouldn't stand a single chance against the Finger Bearer. Yuji started the fight by attempting to go for a punch straight on its face before going for a kick on its chest, trying to start out with some initial damage. However, the punch on its chin wasn't blocked, and the kick on its chest also wasn't blocked either. And while the chest and the chin of the Finger Bearer was moved back a slight bit by the punches, the Finger Bearer had barely moved from those strikes. Even the grade 1 curse spirit that Yuji and Megumi had fought a while ago did move and was staggered a bit by Yuji's strikes, but this thing, this special grade curse, it was on a completely different level. This was when the curse began its counter-strike by launching out a wave of curse energy, launching Yuji back, and while Yuji was being launched, the curse spirit appeared behind Yuji and grabbed him by his head before slamming him hard into the ground. Yuji was able to just barely on time activate Blood Meteorite on his head in order to minimize the damage, but even with that said, he ended up taking some damage and the Blood Meteorite shattered. However, the Finger Bearer wasn't done with its assault yet, as it grabbed Yuji by the leg and began to repeatedly slam Yuji on the ground with his leg, slamming him down over and over again with each of those strikes hurting, and Yuji hated this. He hated the fact that he wasn't able to do anything at all. He felt so weak, so pathetic, before the cursed spirit finally finished its attack and slammed Yuji into a wall before launching out a small burst of curse energy as a final finishing blow, thinking that that would have killed Yuji. And in that moment, several emotions began to flood into Yuji as he began to question how was he ever supposed to accomplish his goal if he was just so weak. But Yuji did still have access to one more move. It was risky to use, but he was going to make sure to give one final last stand, as he focused all of his curse energy towards his arm, while at the same time activating Flowing Red Scale stack. As Yuji had sped up even more, rushing straight towards the curse spirit in an attempt to punch it in the chest. However, the curse spirit ended up catching the fist, before releasing a wave of curse energy, this one much stronger, and destroying Yuji's arm completely. While Yuji was previously feeling determination, now he was feeling two emotions, pain and fear. A fear that he was about to die, as it hit for Yuji. In that moment, he was about to die, and there was nothing else he could do. He didn't even get close to accomplishing his goal. But he had another option, as in that moment, Yuji gave in. He gave up control, allowing Sukuna to have control over his body, and then most of this ends up going the exact same. However, Sukuna was able to notice that his hand regenerated even faster than he was expecting. Of course, Sukuna already had unnatural RCT speed, but even with that being said, he had an even faster RCT when it came to Yuji in specific, before he realized that it was more than likely because of the fact that he didn't need to spend as much energy because his body naturally converted CE into blood. This does lead into the rest of the detention center going the same, including the conflict with Megumi. However, Megumi is also able to note that Sukuna is able to move as fast as he was when he fought against Gojo without even using blood manipulation, as Sukuna chose not to use blood manipulation in his battle against Megumi, mainly because it wasn't really necessary. This does result in Yuji needing to fake his death and making the same binding vow that he made with Sukuna originally. Even though he does try and use blood manipulation in their fight, it doesn't really change that much. This does lead into Yuji and Gojo doing the movie training, however Yuji does it significantly faster in comparison to what he does in canon. Like, around the time they are done the first movie, he is already going to be completed with the entire training. This is mainly because of the fact that Yuji already had some curse energy training beforehand, as well as training with his curse technique. However, there is one more important thing that Gojo does note, which is it's more than likely possible that Yuji is going to end up awakening Shrine. After all, he already saw through Sukuna that it was possible for Sukuna to use 2 curse techniques, being his own, as well as the one that Yuji had, so we believe it should be possible that Yuji should also be capable of awakening Shrine eventually as well, and just being able to wield the 2 curse techniques. However, Yuji does spend the rest of the time continuing to train to control his curse energy and emotions. He needed to get stronger, and he was going to make sure he got it perfectly. That was until Gojo showed up, grabbed Yuji, and teleported himself over to Jogo. This also leads into the confrontation with Jogo going nearly the exact same as well. However, Yuji in particular is more interested about the aspects of a domain, mainly because of the fact that he already has a curse technique that he is rather experienced with, so Yuji wondered if it was possible for him to eventually learn how to awaken a domain himself, while he also set Jogo as a goalpost even more. The rest of the confrontation ends up going the same, with Jogo escaping, and eventually Yuji being dropped off to Nanami in order to learn even more about curse energy from him before the start of the Goodwill Festival. While Yuji did have good techniques, it was clear that his fundamentals needed more and more time to train and flourish, which he figured a mission with Nanami would help a lot with. Now, most of this arc does end up going the exact same as well. Of course, there is some part of Nanami that is questioning why Yuji was brought to him and not some other blood manipulation user. However, that part was quickly answered, as it was pretty clear they wanted to make sure that Yuji being alive was kept a secret from now, and they knew that if the Kamo clan knew about it, then the higher-ups would certainly know about it as well. However, the part of this that really begins to change everything is when Yuji ends up battling against Mahito out of anger after Junpei had just been killed. Sukuna and Mahito were laughing at him for caring about a life, laughing at him for wanting to reach out to Sukuna and being this desperate. They couldn't help but find it funny, and the worst part about it all was Mahito was spouting about how the fact that Yuji couldn't hurt him. However, a moment before Mahito could even start his sentence, almost as if Yuji had teleported, he appeared right in front of Mahito and punched him in the chest, and this was a hard-hitting punch, as Mahito was launched back and launched into the wall, causing a crack in the wall to form. Of course, Mahito at first thought that he was going to take no damage, until he suddenly felt something that caught him off guard. Pain. He felt quite a bit of pain from that strike. Furthermore, in front of him was Yuji Itadori with a massive amount of curse energy surrounding his body from his rage. But not just that, he also had markings on him. Markings from flowing red scale stack. As Yuji was now on the offensive, not giving Mahito a single moment to recover, as he immediately closed the distance again and punched Mahito in the head, or at least aimed a punch for his head that ended up breaking the wall completely. Mahito was just barely able to change his form on time to make a form more fitting for speed by changing his legs to be more horse-like. He was just narrowly able to avoid the strike from Yuji, and he realized just how outmatched he was in this moment. Not just was Yuji a natural predator already, but Yuji had a curse setting that allowed him to amplify those physical strikes. However, to be put in such a disadvantageous position was something that was genuinely inspiring to Mahito. He wanted to have more fun. As the two opponents began to strategize, Mahito realizing that he would need to keep a distance, and Yuji realizing he was going to need to close that distance and fast, which allowed Yuji to make the next move. Unfortunately for Mahito, making an opponent that was this much faster than him was going to be a difficult task, as Yuji immediately went in for a punch on Mahito's gut, which was followed up by a punch on his chest as he began to land a barrage of strikes on Mahito. Each of these strikes hit like a truck, and they were causing so much damage to Mahito's soul until Mahito got an idea, as he predicted the next spot that Yuji was about to go for on his body, and instead changed that spot to be a spike. However, Mahito was unaware of one of the advantages that flowing red scale stack offered, which was amped up perception, as Yuji was able to see it coming, and instead he ended up changing what he was going for, which resulted in Yuji punching Mahito straight in the jaw, launching him out of the building. As Mahito was being launched, Yuji attempted to activate a move that he had explained to him in the past by his brothers, which that move was Piercing Blood. However, even in this rage state, he wasn't actually able to fully launch out of Piercing Blood, just launching out a beam of blood that wasn't anywhere near as fast as it needed to be, allowing Mahito to actually give himself a moment to breathe. This resulted in Mahito shifting both of his arms to be like spiked balls that he attempted to throw at Yuji, which Yuji caught both of them before they could even reach him. However, even though Yuji had caught them, spikes ended up rising out from those arms that he had caught in order to try and impale Yuji, and normally someone would feel that pain and let go. However, Yuji was Yuji Itadori. As then Yuji used his arms to pull Mahito towards him, allowing him to punch Mahito in the face before grabbing him by both of the legs and throwing him down and slamming him down into the ground. But Mahito saw this as the perfect opportunity as he attempted to use Idol Transfiguration on Yuji, but that didn't work. Not because of Yuji, but because of Sukuna. Furthermore, to make things even worse, Mahito had just made a mistake, as he allowed Yuji to have an opening, which Yuji very much took advantage of by landing a hard punch on Mahito's gut. But Yuji wasn't quite done yet, as Yuji followed that up by punching him repeatedly in the chest and face while he was being launched before he jumped back himself. As Mahito began to think on what he could use as inspiration for this, he knew a domain wouldn't work, not against someone like Yuji. Yuji right now was just too strong for him thanks to flowing red scale stack. However, he then began to see something interesting, which was the marks actually began to change on Yuji. Instead of being flowing red scale stack, they were just normal flowing red scale. Yuji couldn't use flowing red scale stack for long. Of course, he had figured out how to use it for longer than he was able to use it for originally, but he couldn't use it for too long, even in this angered state. But with that being said, Yuji had certainly left his mark by this point, and then Nanami also showed up. This wasn't good. He felt like he was about to die. Mahito needed to escape, and now, which led to Mahito begin to expand his body, almost like he was gonna blow himself up, but when he did, he popped like a balloon, which allowed him to escape through one of the sewers. And Mahito in that moment made sure of one thing: the next time he saw Yuji, he was going to break his resolve and break him completely. After all, Yuji had humiliated him, so he was going to make sure he returned that favor tenfold. After the battle against Mahito, a flame spawned in both Yuji and Mahito. With Mahito, he felt embarrassed due to his loss to Yuji and how much Yuji was able to pressure him in their fight. However, with Yuji, he felt an immense desire to avenge Junpei and, more importantly, to kill Mahito. And while this sense of rage was going to seem to fade, in reality it was going to remain there and only strengthen with time. Yuji was just good at hiding it. However, his brother was able to catch on as Yuji re-entered into the dreamscape and the two of them talked for a bit, with Choso actually being able to help coach Yuji through this quite well. Now, he couldn't really help with Yuji's rage, but there was something he could definitely help with, which was teaching Yuji how to convert that rage into raw amounts of curse energy. Now, of course, there was still the issue of his curse energy lagging behind him, especially when he was using flowing red scale and flowing red scale stack. Mainly because of how fast Yuji's body actually moved, his curse energy could barely keep up. However, Choso didn't really see that as a bad thing if he was being honest, mainly because it was a unique quirk for Yuji that most people wouldn't expect. After all, how many people really expect a lagged curse energy, especially from a sorcerer like Yuji, who has access to this many blood manipulation techniques? And while Yuji certainly agreed with that, he believed now that he had to work on his fundamentals. After all, his physical strength as well as his blood manipulation was really good, especially his usage of flowing red scale stack. While he couldn't pick up on how to use piercing blood yet, he was getting better and better. However, he felt that his curse energy control was lacking a bit in comparison. Now, it wasn't that bad in comparison to other sorcerers, and he was actually better than where he was in his cannon placement, but he wasn't as good as he wished he could have been. This leads into the Goodwill Festival eventually happening, where the other students are all introduced to each other, and there's actually something a little bit different in comparison to normal, because one of the students from Kyoto High ends up approaching Yuji. And that student was named Kamo Noritoshi, which actually led Yuji to immediately being on guard around Kamo. The main reason for that was because of all the things that Choso had told him about his Kamo. However, he just figured that the two of them had similar names, mainly because Kamo was not that old. Though if he was being honest, he did feel a little bit bad for Kamo, mainly because of that name. Like, could you imagine being named after the most evil sorcerer in history? Granted, he had no idea how many people actually knew who Kamo was, so it could all just be really lucky coincidence, but still. The reason why Kamo was properly introducing himself was because he found Yuji to be an interesting person. Not just was Yuji the vessel of Sukuna, but they were also a member of the Kamo clan that he had no idea about, but from what he could tell, they were really strong. Now, in terms of blood manipulation skill, he was actually worse than Kamo. However, in terms of physical power, Kamo was actually much weaker than Yuji. As a part of Kamo had to wonder what would Yuji be like at his full potential of skill, and how terrifying of a monster could Yuji end up becoming. There was also the fact he was friends with a member of the Zenin clan as well, which made it all the more interesting, and he wondered who could have been behind this and how could he have not known about a member of the Kamo clan for this long. This ended up spawning a conflict in Kamo. Kamo originally was of the opinion that they needed to kill Yuji, however right now he actually wasn't too sure, mainly because of the fact that Yuji did have blood manipulation and could be related to him. He wasn't too sure if he wanted to kill them or keep Yuji around as an ally for what he had planned. At the same time, orders were orders, however there was also another part of Kamo that had to question if he was even capable of killing Yuji as well. This then leads into Yuji battling against Todo, as well as him battling against Kyoto High, which goes mostly the same. While Yuji was really tempted to use blood manipulation and flowing red scale, after all he was pretty confident with flowing red scale he could actually match Todo in terms of physical combat, he really wanted to work on his base. He wanted to make his base as strong as Todo, seeing Todo as the core example. Sure, physically he was stronger than Todo, but in terms of curse energy control, Todo was significantly better than him. And when all of Kyoto High chose to jump Yuji, that was when Yuji actually decided to use Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack, being able to easily deal with them. Of course, he didn't actually end up beating them, mainly because it was a really short encounter, but he was able to beat all of them until Todo ended up showing up and telling all of them to leave, as he and Todo began their sparring session. During this little spar of theirs, Todo made comments on how he had heard about Yuji's blood manipulation and blood manipulation abilities, and how reliant he had been on them because they were that good. However, he told him that just relying on that technique won't be enough to beat special grades, not like Mahito and not like others that exist as well. Sure, he might be enough now to beat the Finger Bearer, but he's not enough to beat what Mahito will become. After all, he was allowed to live. And with that statement, as well as Todo explaining the core of curse energy to Yuji, Yuji was able to properly flow his curse energy. As both Todo and Yuji decided from here on out they were going to go all out, as Yuji activated Flowing Red Scale and the two of them began their spar. When the two of them were sparring, Yuji realized he had massively underestimated how strong Todo actually was. However, with this new control of curse energy, Yuji and Flowing Red Scale was actually on par with Todo, if not a slight bit better than him. If Yuji were to activate Flowing Red Scale Stack, he would actually be much stronger than Todo, but he didn't want to use that technique, mainly because he felt he could only use it in bursts, and he was trying to figure out new ways to use it, both to make it his own as well as to make it stronger and better. However, the two's battle is interrupted as they hear Hanami in the distance battling against the other students, and Yuji and Todo both arrive in order to back them up. However, Yuji immediately activated Flowing Red Scale Stack just to make sure he could get there faster, mainly because he could sense Megami in danger. However, Todo was still able to arrive with Yuji swapping place of Megami's sword. Unknown to Yuji, he had actually used his curse technique to get there. And with that, Todo was able to move Maki away from Hanami's attack, while at the same time Yuji landed a hard punch on Hanami's gut. And this punch did a noticeable amount of damage to Hanami. After all, from everything they had taken so far, this was by far the most hard-hitting attack. Keep in mind, Yuji in Flowing Red Scale is already on par with Todo, who Todo is strong enough to hit Hanami and hurt Hanami. Now you have Flowing Red Scale Stack Yuji, who's even stronger than that. However, that was when Todo chose to take a step back, and he told Yuji that he wasn't going to help Yuji until Yuji could land a Black Flash. And upon hearing the description of the Black Flash, it actually gave Yuji an idea on how to advance his Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack. Which the theory was quite simple for Yuji. If by applying his curse energy within a millionth of a second would offer him a much greater level of control of his curse energy, as well as make that hit much stronger, wouldn't it be possible to do the same with blood manipulation, since blood manipulation is also ultimately based on curse energy? As Yuji was now forcing his heart to work overtime at the same time that he was going to land that curse energy. He was going to try and combo with both. And while he was able to increase the flow of Flowing Red Scale Stack and increase the speed that it activated, it did do a bit more damage, but it wasn't the Black Flash that Todo was looking for, as Todo clapped and Yuji appeared beside him before Todo slapped Yuji and explained to him that he needs to calm down and that his anger was not helping him. As Yuji then suddenly gained a very heavy look of focus on him, and they could also hear what sounded like a heartbeat. Hanami realized in that moment they can't let Yuji get close to them, as they launched out a large amount of branches towards Yuji, trying to prevent them from reaching him, as Yuji began to break through each of those branches while activating Flowing Red Scale Stack. He was moving insanely fast, way too fast for Hanami. As the sound of that heartbeat got louder and louder as Yuji appeared right in front of Hanami and punched Hanami, landing a Black Flash while also activating Flowing Red Scale Stack at the same time he landed the Black Flash. Wait, no, this wasn't Flowing Red Scale Stack. This was something beyond it. Something much, much stronger. And with that strike, not just was Hanami's arm completely destroyed, but also a large part of Hanami's chest was destroyed as well. This move we're going to call Flowing Red Scale Burst. And I don't think I need to tell you guys that this battle goes really, really poorly for Hanami, considering the fact that Yuji and Todo were already doing really well against Hanami in canon, and now we have a severely stronger Yuji, as well as Todo who's going to be there, and yeah, Hanami gets absolutely destroyed. However, something else interesting does happen too, which is the fact that Todo is most certainly going to land a Black Flash himself in this battle as well, mainly because of the fact that Todo doesn't want to feel left behind by his brother, similar to what happened when Yuji and Todo were fighting against Mahito back in Shibuya. But even with that, Yuji's the one to put down Hanami. After Yuji lands those 4 Black Flashes, that is enough to kill them. This also leads to Gojo being very, very heavily impressed with Yuji's growth as well. After all, he had been able to take out a special grade curse that was most certainly stronger than the Finger Bearer. Compare this to the Yuji at the start of all of this, who was being throttled around and toyed with by a Finger Bearer. However, we aren't quite at the end of the Goodwill Festival yet, mainly because Yuji is approached by somebody else. He is approached by Kamo Noritoshi, as Kamo asks if it could be possible that him and Yuji could train together, mainly because he feels that there are things that both of them could learn from each other. While Yuji was skilled in blood manipulation, a lot of it came from people who weren't really the best teachers in comparison to Kamo, who naturally was really good as a teacher, while Kamo himself was lacking in a lot of power and he wanted to get stronger. The both of them could help refine each other. Kamo could help Yuji work on his technique as well as his skill, while Yuji could help Kamo work on his power and his strength, which Yuji was more than okay with agreeing to, especially because he still felt that anger and hate towards Mahito. So this was a pretty good day, as all of their siblings celebrated Yuji being able to take out a special grade curse like Hanami, as well as celebrated their success. Of course, they were still ultimately cautious about Kamo Noritoshi, but from what they could tell from what Yuji said, they definitely weren't the same, and they weren't as cautious in comparison, since this guy just seemed like they were unlucky to have the same name. In truth, Choso also felt bad for him. About a week had passed since the Goodwill Festival had ended. He was planning to start his training with Kamo Noritoshi next week. However, he wanted to go to sleep, see what his brothers were up to, and see what he could talk with them about. He wanted to catch up with them a little. But this time around, when he went to sleep, only 6 of his brothers were currently present. Choso, Eso, and Kechizu were not there, as Naranzo, the 4th sibling, explained to Yuji what had happened, which was Eso, Kechizu, and Choso had all been incarnated into vessels. They had also explained what the real purpose of the Goodwill Festival was, which Yuji had already known about by this point, but it was confirmed now, which the purpose was to get the 10 fingers of Sukuna Jujutsu High had present. Of course, he did know that the siblings were there, but he was never really told about their status or the fact that they were there to begin with, but now it was confirmed for him. However, before Naranzo could say something else, he also disappeared from the dreamscape, and then another of their siblings, and another, until all of them had disappeared. All 9 of the death paintings had been incarnated. Kenjaku felt a little bit more of a need than normal to actually get some more allies, mainly because of the fact that Hanami was dead, and the fact that Shibuya was 2 months away. He wanted to get some strong allies just in case. And Kenjaku was actually unaware of the fact that Yuji and the other siblings had a dreamscape that they connect with him. He just thought up to this point that Yuji had been able to develop naturally and develop like this, maybe with the help of Gojo, but he thought that that was likely. He had no real way to know that the siblings could connect with each other, which that was something that they all agreed to keep secret for now. Of course, if they wanted to reconnect with the dreamscape with Yuji, it would just take them all falling asleep, but this would be significantly harder now, mainly because of the fact that they would have to time out their sleeps with Yuji and try and predict when he was going to go to sleep. Though Choso was pretty confident they could do this. After all, Choso knew his bedtime schedule by this point. He knows his little brother well. However, in the next arc, we have 2 little differences that are going to happen. Number 1, Kenjaku is going to send out cursed spirits instead of the siblings, mainly because he wants to keep the siblings around since they can get stronger, unlike his cursed spirits who cannot get stronger other than more cursed energy he funnels into them. Of course, he doesn't send out anything too strong, just a couple grade 1s that are amped up by his cursed energy, thinking that he's not going to need more than that in order to take the finger. But the other difference that does happen is the fact that Megumi and Nobara actually get sent out on their own rather than Yuji going with them. This is mainly because of the fact that Yuji had made a massive gap in distance between them, and Nobara and Megumi both wanted to prove themselves as well as catch up. After all, Yuji had executed 1 special grade cursed spirit and had been able to throttle and embarrass another special grade cursed spirit before that one. This also finally enough leads to Megumi and Nobara taking their training significantly more seriously, mainly because they want to close the gap between themselves and Yuji, especially Nobara. Now, Megumi doesn't feel that desire as much, mainly because Megumi isn't as into being a Jujutsu sorcerer in comparison, but the both of them are going to get much stronger as a result of this. This also includes Nobara actively asking Gojo to give her tips on how to improve, as well as to actively train her, which Gojo is more than happy to do. This leads into Nobara and Megumi getting separated, with Nobara fighting against the Cursed Spirits, while Megumi fights against the Finger Bearer, and both of them are ultimately able to win their battles, with Nobara landing a couple Black Flashes, as well as Megumi activating his domain expansion for the first time. So to go over how strong that these two characters are as a result of this, Megumi is now about as strong as his Shibuya counterpart, which keep in mind that's a pretty good amount of growth for Megumi. And Nobara is right beside him in terms of power. Now of course Megumi would win in a fight mainly because of versatility as well as domain expansions, but the two of them are now on the same level, which puts them both at a grade 1 level. Still not as strong as Yuji yet, but they are on the path to catching up to him. Or at least catching up to the Goodwill version of Yuji, mainly because Yuji is now going to train with Kamo as well. And Yuji is actually not going to get as big of a buff as people might think. This is mainly because of the fact that Kamo was mainly focused on teaching Yuji how to use some blood manipulation techniques and how to make sure that Yuji can be as skilled as possible. Kamo was more so working on Yuji's form as well as his skill rather than his actual raw power. However, while Yuji didn't get that much stronger from this did result in some really good benefits. For example, Yuji is now able to use Flowing Red Skill Stack for significantly longer. Furthermore, Yuji has also picked up on Piercing Blood as well as the disc variant of Slicing Exorcism. He doesn't have the Fred variant that Choso was using in Shibuya, but he does have access to the Slicing Exorcism. This also leads into a conversation between the two of them, where Kamo tells him about the Kamo clan, blood manipulation, and their history, as well as Kamo's ambitions to become the leader of the clan so he can take his mother out of exile. On top of that, he wishes to build a bond between the Zenin clan as well as his own clan, just to make sure that his family can be safe and that they can have good lives. Which that was something that Yuji could honestly respect. He didn't really know much about Kamo as a person until now, but he definitely liked who Kamo was. And while Yuji mainly gained in skill, Kamo had gained a lot more in power, now having a significantly stronger partner to train with that wasn't going to beat him half to death like how Todo would. As a result of this, Kamo was actually pretty strong. He is about the same level that Yuji was at in Flowing Red Scale after landing a Black Flash on Hanami, and some of you guys might think that is an insane amount of growth for Kamo, but I want to keep this in mind that during the culling games, Kamo had shown off the ability to actually perform feats on Cursed Naoya. Now, while we don't know how Kamo was able to get this strong, it should be remembered that Kamo is now training with a significantly stronger training partner as well, who is going to very heavily help push him, and Kamo is definitely going to be feeling useless and pretty weak, mainly because of the fact that Yuji is just that much better of a blood manipulation user in terms of pure raw power. So if I were to rank the students right now in power, the student ranking would go somewhat like this. Number 1 is Yuji, who is the strongest. Then Todo is behind him, then Kamo is behind that, and then Megumi, and then Nobara. However, Yuji is by far and away the most motivated to train for one very core reason that was extremely important, which was the fact that his brothers in Between the Dreams were able to tell Yuji that Mahito had gotten significantly stronger. They were now even stronger than Hanami was, which meant that they were a massive threat. Now, Yuji didn't have that many people he could actually talk to this about. After all, he didn't want to give away that he was a death painting, but there was one person he at this point felt bonded enough that he could talk to that was near him. Todo wasn't really near him right now, but he would probably have told Todo if he was. However, he decided to tell his current teacher, and the one who had taught him the most. He told Kamo Noritoshi that he was a death painting. And that explained everything to Kamo. The fact that Yuji was so skilled at blood manipulation, that he never ran out of blood, mainly because he had curse energy that he could convert into blood. He always found that a little bit weird, but he just assumed that Yuji was a mutation in the blood manipulation technique. After all, techniques get stronger with time, so that could very well be possible. But no, it was because of Yuji's physiology. However, over these 2 months, Kamo had gotten to know Yuji much better. After all, Yuji was basically a cousin to him, and this just confirmed that he was. Though there was one more terrifying part of this all, which was the fact that it confirmed for him that somehow Kamo Noritoshi had been alive even now. He wasn't sure if he was alive in the modern era, but he was alive 15 years ago for Yuji's birth to create him, and he was more than likely still alive now, which Yuji later on confirmed. Now, for the sake of the rest of the what if, I'm going to call Prime Kamo as in modern Kamo, just Kamo, and I'm going to call Kenjaku by Kenjaku's name, mainly because of the fact that I don't want to get confused for my own sanity. And with that being said, he was really tempted to tell the higher-ups about all of this, but he had no idea who was in Kenjaku's court. They needed to be careful and cautious about this, and they had to be very careful who they told. They weren't even certain if they could tell Gojo about this yet. However, they did eventually decide that Gojo was certainly one of the people they could trust most, mainly because of how against the higher-ups that they were. However, Gojo didn't seem to be too concerned, mainly because he was the strongest. What Gojo seemed to actually be more concerned about was the fact that Mahito was still alive. He also told Yuji that he knew that he was a death pain the entire time, he just wanted to wait for Yuji to actually tell people himself. But more importantly, he told Yuji that he trusted Yuji to take out Mahito, and worst case scenario, he would handle it. And now we head into the Shibuya incident, which is where we're going to leave this part. Find out what happens in the Shibuya incident on the next part of What If Yuji Got Blood Manipulation Early. The Shibuya incident began, with everybody inside of the barrier calling out for Satoru Gojo to arrive, and the normal teams we have still arrive alongside two additions that weren't there previously, those two additions being Kamo Noritoshi as well as Aoi Todo. As not just were they warned a bit ahead of time about the Shibuya incident even happening, but they were also much stronger, so they were allowed to go. After all, their assistance would be very helpful in the Shibuya incident in order to prevent it. This resulted in a third team spawning, which that third team was Yuji, Itadori, Aoi Todo, and Kamo Noritoshi, probably the strongest team out of everybody here. As Gojo went into the subway preparing to fight and also being a bit more on guard. After all, Gojo was aware of the fact that their plan was to seal him away, but he didn't know how they were planning to seal him away. However, unlike original canon, instead of it being Jogo, Hanami, and Choso, it is instead Jogo alongside another cursed spirit that was present, mainly because of the fact that Hanami was dead and Kenjaku was a little bit suspicious of Choso. Not suspicious enough to call him a traitor, but suspicious enough to know that there is a potential chance that Choso might not be against Gojo and the others, especially because he didn't have the blood rage that he had originally against Yuji, so he decided not to put them in. That and Choso's rather uncaring attitude was probably not the best to put in, since he didn't have that desire for revenge like he did in canon. Instead, there were two additional cursed spirits that Kenjaku had released through his cursed spirit manipulation. Up first was the cockroach curse Kurorushi, and second was special grade curse Akuro, the same one that was used in his battle against Takaba. And even though Gojo went in fully aware of what their plan was and goal was, unfortunately it didn't really change much. After all, Gojo wasn't aware of how they were going to seal him away, just that their plan was to seal him away, so he still entered in with the same bloodlust and confidence that he would have entered in with normally. And there was no way to really predict for him that Kenjaku was taking over Geto's body, which leads to Gojo getting sealed in the prison realm like normal. However, he does take out both Kurorushi and Akuro. This also leads into the mini Mechamaru arriving towards Yuji, Kamo, and Todo's group in order to inform them that Gojo Satoru has been sealed. However, Gojo currently is unable to be moved, and when Yuji asks why, Mechamaru says it's because he's Gojo, of course. This then leads to Yuji jumping on a rooftop to explain to everybody that Gojo has been sealed and the group splitting up, with Kamo deciding to stay behind with Megumi, while at the same time Todo and Yuji head into the subway. I'm not going to go over the Yawasaka battle, mainly because I believe a stronger Megumi and a stronger Kamo, who Kamo definitely has the battle intelligence to figure this out as well, are definitely going to be able to take out Awasaka, and it's not really going to be that interesting of a battle. However, this does lead into something else, which is the fact that Kamo is going to join Megumi as backup in order to fight against Dagon inside of his domain. However, we'll get to that in a minute. As we return back to Yuji and Todo, who are now entering into the subway, and as they enter, they actually see a familiar face, or at least it's a familiar face to Yuji. Todo was at first on guard, however, Yuji himself tells Todo it's fine and he can let his guard down, as he explains to Todo that that is his brother Choso. As Yuji and Choso embrace each other in a hug. After all, they had known each other for a total of 15 years now. Basically, Yuji's entire life he had known about his brother and had connected to his brother through the dreamscape, and now we actually got to meet him in person. This was something that the both of them had wanted to do for so long. They actually wanted to talk properly for once, and while Yuji did want to know where the rest of his siblings were, Choso was pretty quick to explain why they weren't here, which was during the entire battle, Choso found a way to escort them out, and they are currently in a safe place. After all, while Choso was rather confident that he would be able to survive since he was the strongest of the siblings, he did not want to put his brothers under the same risk, especially because they were all weaker than him. And if he was being honest, there was a part of him that really wanted Yuji to leave as well, especially with the risk of both a stronger Mahito, Jogo, and Kenjaku all here, but he knew that there was no chance in convincing Yuji, especially seeing the look of determination on him, to get Gojo out of the box. So because of that, Choso just figured, instead of trying to convince him, he was going to do the best thing he could do in this scenario, which was help Yuji get him out the box and be right by his side. However, even with this being said, this was going to be a very dangerous endeavor, mainly because of the fact that they were still pretty certain that Jogo would offer a great amount of difficulty for them to fight, as well as Mahito, and they weren't even certain if they could beat Kenjaku by this point, but they were hopeful for themselves as they needed to figure out a plan, but Todo was actually pretty quick to figure out a plan. After all, there was still one advantage that Choso and Yuji weren't accounting for that they had, which was the fact that they were not aware of the fact that Choso had swapped sides yet. So what if they just had Choso approach him with Yuji and Todo wasn't present, with Todo hiding his cursed energy, and then they could catch Jogo off guard? They could pretend that Choso had convinced Yuji to consume the fingers and become the vessel of Sukuna for their plans. After all, they would be aware by this point that Choso and Yuji were brothers, so they could end up having found out that they know, and Yuji just immediately swapped sides due to that brother loyalty that was so clearly evident on all of them. Though Todo then explained that it might actually be better instead for Choso to hold Yuji in a blood binding instead. After all, there was no way they were going to properly convince Jogo that Yuji was okay with becoming the vessel of Sukuna, but instead making it look like Choso had beaten Yuji in a fight, with Todo prepared to clap Yuji out of the blood binding so they could start the fight, would be even better, and it wouldn't likely trigger any red flags for Jogo if they did that instead. This would also basically give them fingers for free from Sukuna that they could consume, and the moment that Yuji feels that Sukuna is starting to get some chance at waking up, Yuji could lead a signal for Todo to join in the attack, while also swapping them around in order to cause some confusion for Jogo so they could land their strikes. They felt even more confident in this when they found out that Jogo wasn't anywhere near as durable as Hanami was. And while Jogo's speed would most certainly be an issue for most sorcerers, a mix of Yuji being able to use flowing red scale stack, as well as being much better at flowing red scale burst, with Todo being there on the scene too, would be pretty helpful for them, especially if they could get some blood binding on Chogo as well while he wasn't looking. This did also lead into Todo asking how well Yuji could use that technique he figured out how to use back when they were fighting against Hanami, and Yuji told him that while he had gotten better at it, he isn't able to fully use it at will yet and requires a bunch of focus. At least to get it at the exact amount of speed that he used when he first landed that Black Flash against Hanami, it's going to take some focus. But he still believed it was possible, and he was just trying to get better and better with it, which Todo was more than happy to hear. He also explained to Todo, though, when he was using it when he was training with Kamo, there was this weird energy that was coursing through him that almost made him feel like he was high for a couple seconds before he went back to normal, and he hasn't really been able to grasp it fully, and he was meaning to ask Todo about what that was, but he kind of forgot until now. And while that did sound somewhat familiar, he wasn't too sure what that was, so he was going to ask someone about that later, or he was just going to think on it in order to try and figure out what that energy was. However, while the group began to travel, this also led to a surprise visit from two people that they were not expecting and had no way to expect, which were Mimiko and Nanako. While originally they were hoping that Yuji and Choso were going to fight and that Yuji would be put on the brink of death so they could feed a fingers to get Sukuna to come out, that didn't happen. So instead they wanted to approach them directly and ask them if they could help with killing the person who was taking Suguru Geto's body. Choso and Yuji were more than open to. After all, they both felt this immense hate for Kenjaku, though it was Choso who felt a significant greater amount of hate for him than Yuji did. Yuji just felt hate by proxy because of how much his brother really hated him. And Todo actually remembered reading reports about these two from the Night Parade of 1,000 Demons, and he was going to keep them in mind, as this did alter his plan a little bit, but it was going to make it go that much more smoother. As they were now on a hunt in an attempt to find either Jogo or Mahito, but hopefully Jogo first. While they didn't know where Kenjaku was, they knew that it would be best in order to eliminate all the curses first and then go for Kenjaku, so they all would have their best chance against him, mainly because the best chance and shot they had against him would be all the sorcerers together. However, before we go over what happens next with them, we're going to go over to the Dagon battle and what happens there, as there are actually a couple of changes that happen. Nobara ends up actually beating Haruta in this what if. This is mainly because of the fact that Nobara and Megumi did get much stronger than they would have normally, mainly because they felt like they were being massively left behind by Yuji. So they both asked Gojo to train them a bit more seriously while also taking in those negative emotions of jealousy and feeling like they were being left behind, and yeah, Nobara got quite a bit stronger. This actually leads to her basically being able to deal with Haruta with the same amount of difficulty that Nanami dealt with them, if not even less difficulty. Keep in mind, Nobara is about the same strength as Megumi right now, who this is a stronger Megumi than the one that was able to perfectly match up with Yuji against Awasaka. Yuji in canon at this time was considered to be just as strong as Nanami, if not a bit stronger by Ino's own statement. So this, funnily enough, actually makes Nobara the second strongest of the group between herself, Nanami, Nobito, and Maki. She is still weaker than Nobito though. In spite of that, she is actually mainly in the background, mainly because of how her curse technique functions. So best keep Nobara in the background as backup to allow her to set up traps and activate her techniques. Before Dagon had arrived, Nobito had also scattered out a bunch of Nobara's nails at Nobara and Nanami's request, while Nobara was hanging out in the background. This led into Dagon falling into their trap, because while Dagon was on the ground about to activate his domain expansion, suddenly several hairpins end up going right through Dagon's body and causing quite a bit of damage to him. However, in spite of that, he still ends up causing his domain expansion through the sigil on his stomach. As a result of this, while Nanami, Maki, and Nobito all take damage from this domain, they actually take a little bit less damage than they would have normally due to Dagon being weakened from the damage he had taken so far. This results in Nobito not losing his other arm. Eventually, Megumi then comes in order to back them up, activating his own domain expansion to begin clashing with Dagon. At the same time, a piercing blood goes right through Dagon's hands before a punch lands on him right after. And with that punch, something was stabbed into him as well, as 3 people had entered into the domain, those 3 people being Megumi, Nobara, and Kamo in flowing red scale. Furthermore, Kamo had just punched one of Nobara's nails into Dagon, resulting in Nobara activating Hairpin and landing it on Dagon's body as they all began to try and rush out the domain. They could sense that even in this weakened state that Dagon was in, Dagon would still win a domain clash against Megumi. All Megumi could really do was hold for time. But someone else came, someone else that none of them could have expected. The one who was set free from the chains of curse energy had entered into domain, that person being Toji Zenin. With Toji basically wiping the floor with Dagon. After all, we already know how Doji versus Dagon would go normally, so now we have Toji versus a much weaker Dagon because he's much more injured. That's also going to have Nobito and more than likely Kamo there as well to support him. And with that, Dagon's domain ends up breaking as all 6 of them are stuck staring at Toji, not sure if this guy was an ally or an enemy, or who they would go for next. And it actually took Toji a little bit longer than normal in order to analyze who was the strongest one here between Kamo and Megumi. But in Toji's battle-hungry state that he was in, he decided why not both, as he threw both Kamo and Megumi outside of the window and chased after the both of them to fight the 2 of them in a 2v1. As the battle started with Kamo taking the offense by clapping his hands together and firing a piercing blood. This was something that Toji was able to counter rather easily by kicking one of the cars next to him and using that as a shield, as he picked up and threw another car towards the 2 of them. Kamo and Megumi couldn't help but notice the inhuman strength that Toji possessed, as they believed that it might even surpass Yuji in this moment. And while Kamo and Megumi were able to move out the way in order to dodge the attack, Toji had closed distance and landed a punch on both Megumi and Kamo's gut, sending them flying. Megumi in particular was able to note how impressive this man's speed was, and with Kamo noting that it surpassed Yuji's speed even when he was using flowing red scale stack, and Megumi noting that his speed had surpassed Sukuna's speed when he battled against Gojo a while back, which was even faster than when Sukuna had battled against Megumi back in the detention center. As Megumi activated with Rabbit Escape in order to get both himself and Kamo out, using the rabbits as a distraction in order for them to sneak into a building, being carried away by Nue. As Kamo and Megumi began to think and began to focus, they needed to find a way to ascend their limits and surpass Toji. That was the only way they were really going to stand a chance, as Megumi began to think, trying to think on a way he could win, while Kamo was cursing himself for being so weak. After all, while he was able to train Yuji, all he really did was help Yuji's form. He wasn't able to make Yuji stronger while Yuji had made him stronger. And Kamo felt that he needed to do more. After all, he was the one who was supposed to be the head of the Kamo clan, and how could he make his dreams come true with this little amount of power? How could he make his dreams come true if he couldn't beat this sorcerer? As both Megumi and Kamo felt a large amount of determination, with curse energy flaring off of their body and getting stronger and stronger, as they converted their negative emotions, their feelings of not feeling good enough, into curse energy. They would need as much power as possible to amp themselves, as Kamo began to take a gamble. He actually wasn't capable of using flowing red scale stack normally, unlike Choso and Yuji, mainly because there was one weakness that he had that they didn't have, which was the fact that he was still a normal human, which meant that had a lot more risk for him. However, in that moment, Kamo said screw it. After all, Jujutsu sorcerers were willing to give away everything, willing to give away their lives. Look at Megumi, look at Gojo, look at Yuji and Todo, who are all willing to risk their lives and take risky techniques. If Kamo wasn't willing to take that same risk, he had no chance of making his dream come true, and he was going to make that dream come true no matter what. During that time, Toji had locked in on the 2 of them, and he was about to begin approaching them before suddenly a piercing blood was shot out at him, and noticeably, this one was a bit faster than the one before, as Toji was able to dodge it still pretty easily. However, this one was still noticeably faster, as Toji first threw a truck in the building and then hopped into it right after. Kamo and Megumi were able to avoid the strike, with Toji deciding to go for Kamo this time, as Toji and Kamo entered into a hand-to-hand scuffle, where Kamo was mostly on the defensive. However, noticeably, Kamo was just barely able to block most of these blows. As Kamo had pulled it off, Kamo had pulled off using flowing red scale stack, and through that he was just barely able to keep up with Toji's physical speed and be able to block him. Now of course he wasn't matching Toji's speed or anywhere close, but he was able to block the attacks.
While the two of them were battling though, Kamo was scattering some blood throughout the ground, as suddenly through the window, purple lightning went right into the building, shattering the glass and using the blood as a conductor in order to hit Toji while Kamo jumped out the way. Megumi had summoned Nue. And while Toji was able to dodge the lightning, suddenly a swarm of rabbits came running at Toji, each of them carrying dried up blood that was shaped like knives. Megumi and Kamo were now fighting in sync as they were trying to land cuts on Toji, trying to at least land one with this mass amount of numbers. But even with that, it wasn't enough. Toji was able to deflect each of them with relative ease, while Kamo attempted to go in for a punch on Toji's gut, but Toji was able to catch it and throw him out the way. Megumi attempted to take advantage of this chance while trying to summon Nue once more to land a shock on Toji, but Toji was able to avoid it and punch Megumi in the face, while also launching Nue away. Megumi was just barely on time able to summon Nue out the way as well, preventing Nue from dying to Toji's strike. As Megumi began to come up with a new plan, as he summoned Rabbit Escape once more, beginning to fill the room massively with rabbits, and he was doing this in order to give Kamo an opening. As Kamo took advantage of this chance, he knew he couldn't use Falling Red Scale Stack for long, so he was going to try and do something that he had seen Yuji do so many times. He was going to try and land a Black Flash, and as he rushed towards Toji, about to land a punch on him, Toji was able to deflect the punch and elbow Kamo in the face. But in spite of that pain, Kamo kept moving forward, and he kneed Toji in the gut, and with that strike, he had landed a Black Flash, as he hopped back towards Megumi, preparing to join him despite being in quite a bit amount of pain. However, even with that Black Flash, he had to deactivate Falling Red Scale Stack and just going back to Falling Red Scale. As Toji dusted himself off with that hit, he had to admit that did quite a bit of damage before he hopped back, avoiding two large Curse Energy spikes that were coming at him, as out from the ceiling, Nobara hopped down, landing next to Megumi and Kamo. At the same time, Naobito entered into the building as well. Nanami and Maki decided they were going to head off elsewhere to deal with some more transfigured humans. They figured they wouldn't be of much help against someone like Toji, so they wanted to make good use of themselves instead. As Toji was staring at them for a moment before he asked Megumi a question, he asked Megumi what his name was, with Megumi replying Fushiguro. As Toji was happy to hear that his last name was not Zenin, before he took his own life, and Naobito looked at him for a moment, as Naobito very much knew who Megumi was and knew the familial connection, and for a moment he debated on if he should tell Megumi who Toji was, but he chose not to. After all, if Toji wanted Megumi to know who he was, he would have said so in that moment, but he clearly chose not to. As we then return to Jogo, who Jogo was being approached by Choso, carrying around a Yuji that looked to be somewhat damaged in the side of a blood bind. With Jogo having a pleased expression on their face. After all, they still hated Yuji quite a bit, considering it was Yuji who put down Hanami, and he did want to hurt him, but considering Choso had won the battle, then this would be more than enough to suffice. As Jogo asked the question of what happened, with Choso telling him that Yuji attacked him, mainly considering him an enemy, and he thought that they would recognize each other, but it was clear that Yuji did not, so, of course, he did what was necessary and took out Yuji, before telling him that he was ready to make Yuji into Sukuna. Currently inside of the subway, Choso was present holding up a tied-up Yuji through a blood bind. Yuji's clothes were somewhat dirty in order to give the impression that Yuji and Choso had fought, when in reality they actually hadn't fought, but this was in their attempt to fool Jogo. As Jogo was preparing to force-feed the fingers to Yuji. And as Jogo took out the fingers, they could all hear a laugh that was coming from Yuji's body but not Yuji himself. No, the laugh was Ryoma and Sukuna's laugh, as Todo realized the error in his plan. Despite all he had planned out and all the circumstances he had prepared for, there was one circumstance he wasn't ready for, which was the circumstance of Sukuna telling Jogo the plan. In Todo's mind, he didn't think that it would be likely that Sukuna would tell them at all, mainly because this would still mean that he was going to get the fingers, but then he realized that was foolish mainly because how they were planning to do it would have spread out the time for the fingers, would have made it much more likely for Yuji to resist. If Jogo was still awake and could significantly damage Yuji, this would end up heavily helping Sukuna's chance of taking over the body. As Todo then told Nanako to take a picture of Jogo and fast. As Sukuna told Jogo that Choso was a traitor and they were lying to him. And if he can knock out Yuji and reawaken Sukuna, then Sukuna will help Jogo in this battle. Jogo was able to see immediately how serious this was. Not just was Choso an enemy, but he also had Yuji here, who Yuji was the person who did most of the primary damage against Hanami. With Sukuna also revealing that Todo was here as well, which the knowledge that Todo was here made him even more on guard. After all, he was aware that Todo was one of the bigger reasons that they were able to defeat Hanami. Sure, yes, Yuji was the one who was much stronger and had gotten stronger from that point, but at the same time, Todo was the one that was able to facilitate a lot of those hits. He wasn't too sure if Yuji would have beaten Hanami on his own or the other way around, but he was sure those two together were a pretty good match for him. Not to mention Choso also being here. Now Sukuna didn't mention Mimiko and Naniko, mainly because he did still want this to be a fun fight, plus he didn't think they were going to actually be able to contribute much at all anyways. As Yuji and Choso activated flowing red scale stack, Jogo began to put his hands together in order to attempt to make his domain expansion. He had no time to waste, as he attempted to cast his domain expansion, but suddenly, his hands were forced apart from each other. And every time he tried to force his hands back together, they went right back to that position. Naniko's curse technique was photo manipulation. Whatever she captured in her phone, she was capable of manipulating, however there were some costs. While in theory she could definitely rip Jogo apart through her phone, it would require a great deal of curse energy. The further she wanted to move someone and control their body through her phone manipulation, the more and more curse energy it would take. Even separating his hands right now was quite strenuous on her. However, because the distance was quite minimal of how much she would need to move Jogo, being just forcing his hands to not come together, it was something that she was capable of accomplishing. But even then, she had to admit she underestimated how powerful Jogo actually was, because she thought she'd be able to do this much easier, but she wasn't. Now, while she could have used her technique to give the others more mobility as well, that would also cost her a great deal of curse energy, and her focus was right now on making sure Jogo's hands would not come together. If Jogo was able to use his domain expansion, it would be game over for everybody. And Yuji and Choso were quick to take advantage of the fact that Jogo was caught off guard, as Choso fired out a piercing blood while Yuji went in, attempting to land a flowing red scale burst on Jogo. All the while, the blood from the blood binding that was around Yuji had now been removed, as that blood was now scattered all across the area. Jogo was just barely able to readjust himself on time as he created several ember insects that took the blow of the piercing blood. And while he did succeed in blocking Choso's attack, he suddenly heard the sound of a heartbeat behind him before a hard punch landed on his side. Yuji had taken advantage of the fact that he was focused on Choso in order to land a strike on his side. However, thanks to Yuji using flowing red scale burst with this strike, he actually ended up putting a hole in Jogo's side, one that Jogo's body began to regenerate from. As Jogo then thought, the hell? In terms of speed, he is close to my full speed, but in terms of power behind his strikes, no wonder he could damage Hanami with those hits. No wonder he could beat Manito all the way back then. As his side began to regenerate, but this was going to take quite a bit of time to heal as well as curse energy. After all, while this wasn't a Black Flash, he still was significantly less durable than Hanami, and Yuji had gotten a bit stronger since that point. Not by much, however in exchange his abilities had become a lot more refined, something Jogo was going to feel in this battle. As Jogo and Yuji entered into a hand-to-hand clash, punches were being thrown, but Jogo was on the defensive. After all, while the two of them were at the same speed, Yuji was more than making up for it in terms of his physical strength and his hand-to-hand natural ability. This was not something that Jogo was going to be able to keep up for long, so he lifted up his hand and fired out a huge burst of fire in that moment. He wasn't certain this would hit him, but he was certain this would at least make a bit of a distance. However, he heard a clap, as Yuji had swapped places with some of the scattered blood on the ground, and cursed energy engulfed Yuji's fists. The sound of his heartbeat increasing could be heard once more. He was attempting to use flowing red scale burst. And while he did land a punch on Jogo's back, this time was different. Noticeably, this one wasn't as potent as Yuji cursed himself. He was able to land a flowing red scale burst, but he wasn't able to land them back to back as easy yet. That was his current goal. He wanted flowing red scale burst to just be every single punch, but that was much easier said than done. And while Jogo did cough up some blood from that strike, it wasn't one that he was going to need to heal from, as he thought to himself, oh, he doesn't have full control. Alright, I can still win. The blood is the primary issue, so... As both Yuji and Choso clapped their hands together in order to use piercing blood, resulting in the piercing blood being fired at Jogo that Jogo was able to dodge, using lava to propel himself out the way. And once Jogo landed, he placed both of his hands on the ground. As the ground's temperature began to increase more and more, Yuji and Choso realized exactly what was about to happen, as Choso and Yuji both nodded to each other, able to communicate with each other without even needing to speak, as Choso clapped his hands together and fired out a piercing blood at the ceiling, while Yuji moved as fast as he could to pick up Nanako. Nanako was by far the slowest of the four present fighters, but they were also a very important piece of the battle. After all, they were the ones preventing Jogo from using his domain expansion. As Yuji hopped up to the ceiling carrying Nanako on one arm as he punched right through the ceiling. Both Yuji and Choso's hits would normally be enough in order to break through the ceiling, but them together easily was able to shatter it for them to escape, with Todo and Choso jumping after Yuji. They had just barely been able to avoid the lava burst coming at them as they landed. Jogo was sent flying out with that lava as a smile formed on Jogo. The side that was hit by the flowing red scale burst was now healed, but he knew he couldn't take too many of those attacks. Meanwhile, in the distance at a nearby building, Mimiko was inside of it with a total of 2 different stuffed animals. Mimiko's curse technique allowed her to hang people and make their bodies levitate through a ritual. However, thanks to a suggestion from Todo, Mimiko got an idea. Her technique allowed bodies to float in a way, so she was going to take advantage of that. And while Mimiko did want to use her curse technique on Jogo, she had nowhere near enough time to set up the conditions, plus it would take way too long for it to work on someone as strong as him. As Jogo could see all around him, several balls of hardened blood began to surround him, floating all around him. 10s of them from both Choso and Yuji, which meant they all had their curse energy signatures. However, while most of them were hardened blood, a few of them were rather unique, as 3 compressed blood orbs rose behind Jogo's back and exploded, as Jogo groaned in pain from the supernova about to turn around to try and fire a burst of magma. But when he turned around, he suddenly got a punch to the face, punching him off of the lava plume that he had caused for himself to stand on, which also resulted in Jogo being sent flying. This was a punch from Yuji, but there was something else that was quite notable. Not just did Yuji manage to jump up here, he wasn't falling. No, Yuji was floating right now. As 2 claps could suddenly be heard, as Yuji swapped places again to swap with one of the dry blood orbs, as the sound of his heartbeat increased once more. However, he suddenly remembered something else. There were 2 claps, not 1. But before he could try and figure out what the other clap was, or launch an attack, he was kicked in the back by Todo. Todo has now entered into the battlefield as Todo kicked Jogo into a punch from Yuji. While Jogo was sent flying, he lifted up his hands, beginning to send out rapid-fire bursts of lava towards both Yuji and Todo. This was when Yuji decided that he was going to show something else off, as he opened up both of his hands, creating 2 discs of blood. He was going to use Slicing Exorcism, as he began to throw several of these slicing discs toward the bursts of lava, cutting through each of them as they were sent flying at Jogo. Thanks to tips from Kamo, he was able to make the Slicing Exorcism significantly sharper in comparison to what it would normally be. All the while, Todo was repeatedly clapping in order to dodge each of the bursts of lava that were being sent towards him. Seeing that Slicing Exorcism wasn't going to work on someone like Jogo, Yuji clapped his hands together, preparing to cast a Piercing Blood. Todo was able to perfectly read what his brother was about to do. So the moment that Jogo dodged one of the Slicing Exorcisms, Yuji was swapped with that Slicing Exorcism as he fired a Piercing Blood right at Jogo's back. However, the Piercing Blood wasn't the most damaging thing. No, what it actually did was launch Jogo right into a Slicing Exorcism that Jogo was just barely able to dodge on time with a lava pillar launching himself into the air. And he did think for a moment that this might end up hitting Yuji, however Yuji ended up catching the Slicing Exorcism before throwing it right back at Jogo. This resulted in Jogo just barely dodging it, however he ended up with his left leg being cut off. This was a wound that he could regenerate pretty easily as his left leg grew right back in place. As Jogo began to attempt to summon several ember insects, he wanted to make a massive amount of explosions of fire just to make sure all of the blood would be gone, and a pretty good chance that it would hit Yuji and Todo. However, this was when Todo spoke, as Todo told him, "Aren't you forgetting someone?" as the same hand that was about to launch out the ember insects was pierced, right through by Choso's piercing blood. Choso was using Yuji and Todo as a distraction, as this was not just made to land a hit on him, but also trigger the ember insects before they could even be fired out. As Jogo groaned in pain from the piercing blood and the ember insects were about to explode, he looked up to Choso about to try and fire an attack on him, but the sound of a clap echoed throughout the area. As the explosion of the ember insects swapped places, all of them swapping with Yuji Itadori, as the sound of that heartbeat increased could be heard once more. Yuji was focusing curse energy as his eyes were filled with determination, as he landed a punch on Jogo's side, activating flowing red scale burst, pushing himself to the limit, and he landed the punch, sending Jogo flying right through a building, causing quite a great deal of damage to Jogo, as Yuji coughed up some blood for a moment while clutching his chest. Yuji looked to be in absolute agony as both Choso and Todo looked concerned at Yuji, Choso immediately going over to check on his brother, and they could see the amount of pain that he was in until it stopped, as Yuji lifted up a hand and told them that he was fine, just feeling a little bit woozy. Unknown to them and Yuji himself, every time Yuji used flowing red scale bursts several times in a battle, it gave him a heart attack. However, Yuji was now subconsciously using reverse curse technique in order to repair his heart. But even then, repairing the heart costed a great deal of curse energy from Yuji. As Choso smiled a bit, he was happy to see that his brother was doing alright, but Todo was a bit more of an observer, and this actually seemed familiar, as he told Yuji that he believes Yuji can subconsciously use reverse curse technique, at least on his heart, similar to how another student named Akari used it, or well, student that had been kicked out from Jujutsu High, but from what he could tell, Yuji could only use it on his heart right now. However, Todo also explained that unlike Akari who could only use it subconsciously, he believed it was fully possible for Yuji to actually learn how to properly use it. As suddenly they could hear the sound of a building collapse. Jogo had been using this time in order to heal himself, in order to recover, as two large lava hands rose up from the ground in order to grab two buildings and throw them right at the group. Jogo was pissed beyond belief, pissed that these 5 sorcerers, these 5 random humans, were doing this much damage to him, were toying around with him like this, and at this point Jogo was so bloodlusted he didn't even care if he killed Yuji or not. Besides, he was pretty certain that Yuji would survive this considering everything he had survived so far, but at the same time he no longer cared. After all, this was a situation like Satoru Gojo where the sorcerer was so much stronger than them, then he would be able to accept it. Sure, yes, he would hate it, but he would have to accept it. But this was different. This was 5 sorcerers that were getting the better of him despite being so much weaker than him. However, Todo had more than enough time to counter this, as he began to clap repeatedly, swapping Yuji himself, Choso, as well as Mimiko and Naniko out of the way of the building. Mainly because those buildings would definitely hit the building that Mimiko and Naniko were in. However, Jogo wasn't done yet. If he couldn't use a domain, then he'd use the second best thing. He hopped high into the air and activated Maximum Meteor. In another area in Shibuya, Kamo, Megumi, Nobara, and everyone else in that squad could see that massive meteor form, and sensed Yuji and Todo's curse energy. They really hoped they would have a way out of this. After all, there was no way that anyone would actually be able to survive an attack like this. Before they then saw what looked like 2 piercing bloods being fired out in the distance. Before they swapped places, it looked like 2 girls had landed where the piercing bloods were going to land. Todo was using Boogie Woogie to get them out and as far away as possible. A third piercing blood was fired to get Choso out as well. Yuji and Todo had one more plan though, as Choso began to scatter a large amount of blood in preparation for this plan where he was present. As the meteor got closer and closer to the 2 of them before Todo clapped and swapped his place with Jogo. Now Jogo was underneath the meteor and right next to Yuji. Jogo was caught off guard by this and very heavily confused, and he didn't have enough time, as Yuji focused one more time and uppercutted Jogo, sending him flying into the meteor while landing a flowing red scale burst. However, with that uppercut, Yuji did one more sneaky thing, which what he did was rob Jogo of the fingers that he was carrying. As Todo clapped with both Yuji and Todo appearing where Choso scattered the blood, as Jogo was hit and crushed by his own attack. It didn't take long for Mimiko and Naniko to join them as well, as they all began to rest a little bit. They had to regain their energy. After all, this was still a very hard fight, and they all had expended quite a lot of curse energy. Especially Naniko, considering the entire battle she had to make sure that Jogo was not capable of using his domain expansion. Fortunately for them, they did have a bit of time to rest, and while Yuji did really want to go immediately into the subway and try and find Mahito, he knew that he needed to rest, and he knew that if he were to try and battle Mahito, he would not stand a chance, especially with what he had heard from Choso that Mahito had gotten even stronger. As we return now to Jogo's meteor, Jogo was just barely alive. The lower half of his body was completely missing. He was also missing his left arm. If it wasn't for the fact that it was his own curse technique, this certainly would have killed him, but because it was his own curse technique, it ended up lessening the damage. He just barely managed to survive this. This was also because Jogo at the last minute was able to manipulate some of the earth, so the impact would be a bit less, but even then he couldn't fully remove it. However, someone began to approach him, and in that moment Jogo realized he should have let himself die with what was going to happen next, as the person that was approaching him was Kenjaku. While Kenjaku was really tempted to go on a monologue, he could see that Jogo was about to die, and if he didn't do something now, then he wouldn't get the chance. So, he activated Curse Spirit Manipulation, turned Jogo into a ball, and consumed Jogo. Now in truth, he was hoping that Jogo would evolve in this battle, that Jogo would get stronger. After all, Jogo ended up in a 5v1 against several incredibly strong sorcerers, including his son. Now, of course, Kenjaku was also hoping this would end up being a one-on-one battle between Jogo and Yuji instead of this massive 5v1 battle, but it is what it is. In truth, he didn't really care much at all about the reveal that Choso was a traitor. After all, in his mind, Choso couldn't really change what was going to come next. All that needed to happen now was the finishing touches, to make sure that Gojo was sealed, and that Mahito would evolve. Fortunately, Yuji had already somewhat served that purpose. After all, Mahito was pretty deep within his evolution already. All that Kenjaku felt was needed was one more push, and he would be able to absorb Mahito. As we return back to Yuji and the others, Yuji was able to see the level of physical exhaust that this entire battle put on Naniko and Mimiko, so he looked over to Choso and asked Choso a favor, to bring Mimiko and Naniko to where they were keeping their brothers. After all, he felt that was a safe place, and considering Mimiko and Naniko were previous enemies, they weren't too sure how the others would feel about having them on their side. Of course, he was pretty sure that things would be fine, but at the same time he didn't want to risk things, at least for now. He was going to wait until later. And the three began to leave, with Naniko thanking Yuji for saving her life back in the subway. And Choso also telling Yuji that he would be back as soon as possible in order to back up Yuji and Todo against Mahito. During this time also, Yuji had given the fingers to Todo. After all, he was pretty certain that if he opened the container that the fingers were in, that Sukuna would just find a way to immediately eat them all, and he would take control. After all, he was very certain that if he ate 10 fingers at once, there wouldn't be a chance that he could keep control over his body. So what Yuji was planning to do was effectively test how many fingers he could eat, and if he felt that Sukuna was starting to gain more and more ground in the control of his body, then he would stop and tell Todo to stop as well. However, Yuji was also pretty confident he would be fine. His body already adapted pretty fast, and considering how much stronger he had gotten in comparison to the start, he was pretty certain he could eat a lot of the fingers and be fine. This resulted in Yuji eating a total of 6 of the 10 fingers that Jogo had on him, so now Yuji has a total of 10 of Sukuna's fingers. Mainly because Mimiko and Naniko had given him 1, and coming into Shibuya he had 3 already. As a side note, the reason why Yuji came in with only 3 fingers and not 4 fingers was because Yuji was not present for the finger bearer mission, so Sukuna never really got the chance to snag the finger. This also leads to another side effect that Yuji wasn't fully expecting, which was his body was recovering even faster than it would be normally. And with their recovery done, with Todo not really needing to recover anything considering he didn't really get hit or barely fought in the fight, mainly just using his curse technique, the two of them believed that they were ready, as they head into the subway to begin to search for Mahito. Yuji and Todo begin to enter into the subway, however they are not the only two that are entering into the subway, as we return back to the other squadron. That being Megumi, Kamo, Nobara, Nanami, Naobito, as well as Maki. But not all of them were going to enter into the subway as well. After all, both Megumi and Kamo were still feeling relatively damaged from both of their battles. Megumi was still feeling very damaged from having to use his domain to clash against Dagon, as well as having to fight Toji. Even though he didn't take anywhere near as much damage as he would have in canon, he still was feeling relatively tired. Kamo on the other hand was feeling tired from all of the hits that he had to take from Toji up to this point. And there was finally Maki, who while Maki only took a kick from Dagon, she had to acknowledge the fact that she would not be of much help and be more of a burden to everybody else in the subway, mainly because of everything that she had heard up to this point. After all, in the battle against Dagon, she was completely useless, and now they were going to go up against Mahito, who from what Maki had heard was even stronger than Jogo, who Jogo was on a completely different level from Dagon. And this led to Maki feeling like she was a weakling, that she could barely help. She was going to need to get more weapons from the Zenin clan and find some way to get stronger, because she absolutely hated this. She felt like she stagnated. Meanwhile, all 3 of her lower classmen have surpassed her, as well as the person from Kyoto High. She couldn't accept this. This left the group of Naobito, Nobara, and Nanami going down. Of course, Nanami was also contemplating if he should have left and gotten healed himself, but he still felt there was more than he could do. He still felt he had enough stamina in the tank. But Nanami was primarily going down to help protect Nobara. Nobara was going to be their key to beating Mahito if they encountered him. After all, Nobara was probably one of the only few people that they knew could actually hit Mahito. Naobito was also there and present to help get the nails onto the opponents, just in case, thanks to Naobito's massive speed advantage he had on most opponents. They just hoped they could reunite with Yuji and Todo before finding Mahito. After all, they were at risk of dealing with Mahito's domain, but if they could find Yuji, they wouldn't have to deal with that. So they were now entering into the subway with a total of 2 goals. The first goal was to free Gojo, and the second goal was to kill Mahito, and they were on a bit of a clock to do so. Now, due to a battle between Mahoraga and Sukuna never happening, they actually did have a little bit more time in comparison to normal to find Gojo. However, Mahito did have a little bit more of a plan. Mahito was currently sitting inside of the security camera booth, as he was using the security cameras in order to watch everything that was happening. He got this idea from a video game that he played while he was bored named Five Nights at Freddy's, and he felt that this was a pretty fun idea. And while Mahito had grown a lot, he actually kept a lot of his power secret from Kenjaku and the others. As Mahito was already pretty close to reaching the point where he was evolved enough for Kenjaku to absorb him, but Mahito had been hiding his strength, mainly because he had no idea what Kenjaku truly wanted, and he never really trusted him to begin with. Plus, Mahito figured something else thanks to his battle with Yuji, and he was very excited to test it against him. as Mahito released 2 transfigured humans through polymorphic soul isomer while getting up himself. The first one was very heavily based on the design of a finger bearer. However, it was a little bit more armored, as this was the combination of 30 human souls, but there was one more soul to it that was rather unique. This was the soul of a sorcerer. This would allow this transfigured human to reinforce its body with cursed energy, as it was sent out to go fight Nobara, Nanami, and Nobito. Meanwhile, the other transfigured human was also a humanoid type of transfigured human, which was red. One that was towering over Mahito that also had a very unique trait about them. They had a total of 6 arms as well as eyeballs all across their body. As now they were going to go after both Yuji and Todo. While Yuji and Todo were walking through the subway, Yuji's body shook a little bit. After all, while Yuji did consume the fingers and thought that he had reached his limit, Sukuna was still able to somewhat fight against him currently. His body hadn't fully finished adjusting yet. As Todo looked over to Yuji, worried for a moment, but he knew it would be fine. After all, it would just take Yuji a bit more time in order for him to fully adjust. Plus, Todo would be here to help him no matter what. Yuji was still pretty strong right now and still winning the fight against Sukuna on the inside. It was just he had a little bit more resistance than he was actually expecting. However, suddenly both Yuji and Todo heard something odd, as they heard a wall collapse, and another, but more importantly, that sound was getting closer and closer to them. Before suddenly the two of them see a massive fist be flown right through the wall. As Yuji and Todo, thanks to the sound, were able to narrowly avoid that fist. However, out from that arm, Mahito rose out and rushed at Todo, but he didn't go for a grab on Todo. No, he robbed something of Todo. However, he went out of his way to make it look like he was attempting to go for grabbing Todo and just missing, mainly because he did not want to clue them in on what he went for and what he took. Though he also knew it would only be a matter of time until Todo realized, which is why he knew he needed to keep them distracted. As several more hands from the transfigured human went for Todo, with the transfigured human deciding to fight Todo in a one-on-one matchup. The transfigured human also choosing to enter into the room, while at the same time Mahito went for Yuji. As Mahito couldn't help but ask if Yuji liked the design of the transfigured human. He made it specifically to counter Todo. After hearing how Hanami battled against Todo, he realized in that moment that he really needed to find a specific counter towards that curse technique, which led to the creation of this transfigured human right over here. At the same time, he also didn't want anyone to interrupt their little 1v1, especially because Mahito had something he very much wanted to show Yuji. At the same time though, Yuji activated Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack, as a rage entered into Yuji. The specific person that Yuji wanted to kill most of all was now here, Mahito. And in a way, Yuji was also kind of happy that it was going to be a one-on-one between himself and Mahito. This would mean no one has a chance to get hurt, but most of all that he'd finally be able to put Mahito down once and for all. But he already could tell that Mahito was going to be a harder fight than Jogo would have been. Now, Yuji did feel that he was capable of beating Jogo in a one-on-one fight if it wasn't for Jogo's domain expansion normally, but he would have taken quite a bit of damage if he did try and fight Jogo one-on-one. Thankfully, he did have an entire team of people with him just to make sure that he didn't get that hurt. In fact, the battle had gone so well, Yuji hadn't gotten hit once by Jogo. And while Yuji still did feel a little bit stronger because he consumed Sukuna's fingers, he knew that taking on Mahito alone was going to be a hard task for anybody, especially because he was now completely alone. As Yuji was the one to make the first move, with him closing the distance immediately between the two of them and attempting to land a punch on his chest. In Flowing Red Scale Stack, Yuji's speed was immense, as he already had amazing physical speed in his normal state, and now that was being amplified by Flowing Red Scale Stack. However, Mahito just on time was able to catch the blow, which that ended up surprising Yuji. Even if Mahito got much stronger, so did Yuji. There was no way Mahito was able to get that fast until Mahito began to explain something else. You know, both of our curse techniques are rather similar. With yours, you're able to manipulate the blood within your body, and use that to make constructs. With mine, I'm able to manipulate my soul, and thus my body follows forth. Before Mahito went for the offense, attempting to punch Yuji in the face, but Yuji was able to redirect the punch, as the two began to enter into a clash of fists, but while they were entering into a clash of fists, Mahito continued to explain. So that got me thinking, is there anything I can do that is like you in order to close the distance in our physical bodies? So I did research on your techniques. Most of the techniques there was no way I could pull off. While I could shape my soul, I couldn't really manipulate it outside of my body in the same way you guys can do blood manipulation, so that was a no-go. There was one technique I could do. In order to utilize Flowing Red Scale, one must increase their heartbeat, increase the amount of red blood cells in the body, as well as increase the temperature, resulting in a much greater physical amp, as well as re-energizing the user. However, since this technique was completely internal, it was easy for me to mimic, as Mahito went in for a kick on Yuji's face, which Yuji was able to catch and threw Mahito to the side, with wings growing out of Mahito's back as they flapped in order to stop his momentum, or at least slow it down a bit. Mahito called this technique false red scale. Furthermore, now that he had explained it properly to Yuji, he ended up getting an amp towards this technique as well, the revealing one's hand binding vow. Before Mahito explained that he had one more trick he wanted to show Yuji, but that would wait for now. After all, that was something that he didn't really want to use unless absolutely necessary. But Yuji accepted this challenge as he opened up both of his hands, resulting in two slicing exorcisms forming that were both shaped like discs. At the same time, Mahito lifted up his own hands, while out from his back, two compressed polymorphic soul isomers were launched out before shapeshifting. Both of them taking on rather humanoid-like appearances. After all, Mahito knew Yuji did not like fighting humans, so he was going to take advantage of that. As the battle between the two began, Yuji making the first move, throwing both the slicing exorcisms at Mahito. However, one of the transfigured humans jumped in front of it in order to take the blow. Mahito told the other transfigured human jumped past the one that got killed by Yuji's attack, Mahito going for a punch on Yuji's head, while the transfigured human went for a kick on his chest. Yuji used one hand in order to deflect Mahito's strike, while using his other hand to create a blood spike and furrow it right through the transfigured human's head, launching them back, as Mahito opened his mouth, launching out a large transfigured human towards Yuji in the shape of a serpent. It opened its mouth, revealing several teeth as Yuji lifted up both of his hands in order to stop its momentum head-on. However, to surprise Yuji, Mahito rose out from the mouth of the serpent, with his hand shaped into a sharp point, as he was about to attempt to stab it into Yuji's head, but Yuji was quick to react as he turned his head slightly, resulting in the blood shard he threw at the transfigured human flying past his head and colliding with Mahito's attack. This all happened before the corpse of the transfigured human fell to the ground. Both Yuji and Mahito landed on the ground, making a distance from each other, before Mahito then turned both of his hands into spike balls and rushed at Yuji. While he was rushing at him, he opened his mouth and spat out two more transfigured humans that were really small, but then he had them shapeshift and they took on their original human forms. This made Yuji blink as he was caught off guard by this, and of course his natural instinct was to attempt to try and catch them. This was exactly what Mahito had wanted. As Yuji moved towards them, almost forgetting about Mahito turning his hands into spiked balls, Mahito hit right through both of the humans, attempting to slam both of them on Yuji's head. And while Mahito did pull off using Flowing Red Scale, he didn't pull off Flowing Red Scale Stack. A trait it had was an increased reaction time on top of physical speed, so Yuji was able to see this coming and lifted up both of his hands. Suddenly his hands turned more of a dark red in color, as he activated Blood Armor and caught both of the spiked balls. Then Yuji took advantage of this chance and kicked Mahito in the chest before following that up with a punch to the face after pushing Mahito's hands away. Yuji decided now was the time to try and push his offensive advantage, as Curse Energy surrounded his fist while he glared at Mahito. The strategy that Mahito had just attempted was extremely risky. After all, while this did succeed in catching Yuji off guard, it also made Yuji even more angry than he already was at Mahito. This resulted in the Curse Energy flaring around Yuji's fist getting even more potent. Yuji was funneling that rage into Curse Energy and doing it extremely efficiently, before Yuji began to hit Mahito with a combo, landing a right hook on his face to start. He then went for a punch on Mahito's chest, as he also internally apologized to all of the humans that had suffered from Mahito. He apologized to Junpei as well. After all, even now Yuji felt responsible. If he put Mahito down when they first fought, then none of this would have happened. No more people would have had to suffer from Mahito, but right now that didn't matter. He was going to take down Mahito even if it killed him. As his hands began to turn darker once more, turning into a darker shade of red. Now he was using Blood Armor to amp his offensive capabilities rather than his defensive capabilities. While Blood Armor wasn't anywhere near as good of an amp as Flowing Red Scale Burst, he wanted to save that for the finishing part of this combo. After all, Flowing Red Scale Burst would stop Yuji for a couple seconds, which he knew. This led Yuji into his barrage, as he landed blow after blow on Mahito, but Mahito began to have his own counterattack, as out from Mahito's body, several spikes from transfigured humans he was carrying on and rose out to try and stab Yuji. But Yuji was able to jump back just on time in order to move out the way of the transfigured human spikes. This led into Mahito's next plan, as both of his arms began to shapeshift into gun-like shapes. Out from both of them, transfigured humans began to fire like bullets towards Yuji. Yuji was able to avoid the transfigured human bullets, using one of the holes that Mahito had made on his entrance to move out the way. This caused a smirk to rise on Mahito as he snapped his fingers, and the moment that Yuji landed, a fist came out from the ground and uppercutted Yuji hard. Mahito had set up some transfigured humans to act as traps, as Mahito rushed towards Yuji while turning his fist to something more like a battering ram, in an attempt to strike Yuji's side. And while the strike did land, it barely knocked Yuji back, as Yuji smirked a bit, activating Blood Armor on his body in order to defend himself, before the sound began. The sound Mahito had been warned about, the sound of the increased heartbeat, as Curse Energy also surrounded Yuji's fist. He was going to attempt to use both of these moves at the same time once more. He was going to try and use the Black Flash and Flowing Red Scale Burst together.
something he was capable of pulling off against Hanami, but he wasn't capable of pulling off against Jogo in their battle, as he landed a strike right in the gut, taking advantage of Mahito being caught off guard. However, while he did land a flowing red scale burst, he did not pull off the Black Flash, but this was because of Mahito being able to defend themselves by sending out a transfigured human to be used as a shield. Even though Mahito was caught off guard, he was fast enough to be able to adapt. This resulted in the process of the Black Flash being interrupted. However, even with that, the transfigured human was torn through and Mahito was sent flying. Yuji was going to need more of an opening in order to properly land a Black Flash on Mahito. This made Mahito a little bit more confident. After all, he knew he could at least prevent the Black Flashes somewhat. The flowing red scale burst hit hard, quite a bit, but it wasn't anything as bad in comparison to the others. It was something he could definitely survive. So he believed he would be able to manage, as he quickly hopped out from the ground before seeing Yuji fly at him already, as out from Mahito's back, 2 large transfigured humans shaped like snakes flew out. Yuji then jumped back doing a flip in order to avoid both of the transfigured humans, which resulted in a crater forming on the ground from the impact. And the moment the transfigured humans landed on the ground, Yuji clapped his hands together and fired a piercing blood right at Mahito. The 2 transfigured humans barely moved on time in order to shield Mahito from the piercing blood, giving Mahito just enough time in order to move out the way. However, Yuji saw an opening and he decided to take it, as he closed the distance between the 2 of them. Mahito though was prepared, as this time he was going to meet Yuji head-on, as he focused curse energy towards his fist, with Yuji's heartbeat increasing once more to activate flowing red scale burst. Around Mahito's fist, a transfigured human curved in order to be similar to a battering ram. He was doing this so he would have a good chance at matching Yuji in this clash. As the 2 fists clashed, both Mahito and Yuji used a Black Flash at the same time, the impact causing a large chunk of the station to be destroyed from a shockwave as Yuji and Mahito were sent flying away from each other. The shockwave of the 2 Black Flashes could be felt all throughout the station and even past that, as Kenjaku in the distance was observing this, mainly using his sensory in order to sense the fight, realizing in that moment he very heavily underestimated Mahito, or more accurately that Mahito hid a lot from him. As he had to admit, he was very impressed, and now very intrigued to see how the rest of this battle would go. From Yuji and Mahito's clash, the moonlight entered into the subway. It was strong enough to destroy the ceiling completely, as now both Yuji and Mahito were operating at 120% of their potential. Mahito smiled a bit as well, as he realized that he had underestimated Yuji a bit, as Mahito said, "I think we are done warming up now, so let's truly begin." With Mahito repairing his arm as well, mainly because as a result of the Black Flash, his arm was actually completely destroyed by Yuji's attack. Yuji, on the other hand, was clutching his heart with one arm and felt the pain in his arm in the other, as he panted a bit, until his heart was repaired, but his arm wasn't repaired. It was still damaged as he began to focus on that feeling. He was trying to focus on that feeling of using what he now knew as reverse curse technique and replicate it. He wanted to see if he could pull that off and pull off healing his arm. But he did have a little bit of an advantage, as blood began to spread through his arm in order to find the injured parts that he needed to heal, as steam came off his body and he healed his injured arm. Now, he wasn't too fast with RCT yet. It was still going to take some time and it wasn't applicable in combat, but with practice he would be able to make it applicable. But now Yuji had figured out how to use reverse curse technique. However, once Yuji did look into the distance, he saw something odd, as Mahito revealed what he was talking about earlier, the ability he didn't feel like showing off before, as Mahito's body began to expand, being surrounded by flesh, before it all began to compress down. Mahito had now entered into his instant spirit body of distorted killing form. After battling against Yuji, he knew he wasn't immortal anymore. Yuji could hurt him and kill him. He almost did kill him, so he created this form specifically to battle against people like Yuji. Heavy durability and physical power. In exchange, he couldn't change the shape of his soul to avoid damage in this form. However, with how durable he was, he doubted he could actually get hurt by anybody. Furthermore, he still also had access to false flowing red scale, which he was using. And in this form, Mahito had access to a total of 4 arms, with 2 large armored flesh serpents connected to his body. As now the battle was entering into its second round between Yuji and Mahito. Yuji would have looked on wide-eyed as his gaze met Mahito. He could tell now just off that he was going to be in a pretty large disadvantage. Both he and Mahito had landed a Black Flash already and were fighting rather evenly, but now Mahito was showing off this. Mahito was showing off this powerful form, with 4 arms, more durable skin, and those 2 serpent heads. Even with that though, Yuji wasn't going to give up either.
He then heard a chuckle come out from Sukuna, as Sukuna's voice said, "Mockery truly is the best form of flattery." Though in truth, Sukuna partly wished that Mahito was a human and not a curse. If Mahito was a human, he would have taken him as a vessel, but because of Mahito being a curse, he wouldn't be able to reincarnate in him. It truly was a shame, but that was just how things were meant to be. And while Yuji did hear the comment from Sukuna, he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he focused on Mahito. He was going to need to think on a way to win. Think on how to win, as he clamped his hands together and activated a piercing blood, firing out at Mahito, going for his chest. And as the piercing blood flew at Mahito, Mahito opened up his own body, preparing to take it head on. And the piercing blood hit him head on, which ended up pushing Mahito back, as small cracks formed on his armor, but nothing too noticeable. Yuji did have some hope though. This was going to be a long battle, but he would just need to build up enough damage in one point, then hit it with a black flash and flowing red scale burst. If he did that at 100% of his power, he should have a good chance at this. However, this was when the two serpent heads began to speak at once, as they both began to say, "Flesh and bones, marrow, death god." And the moment they were done, the armor began to repair itself, the cracks fading as Mahito began to speak. "Did you know every sorcerer and cursed spirit has chance and hand signs they can do to upgrade their abilities? Most people don't use it because it takes too much time and is a real sign of lack of skill. But I find that a bit foolish of an approach. Granted, it is a bit different from me, considering I can make parts of my body to fight alongside those, so I don't really have any drawbacks from that." And that made Yuji gulp a bit. After all, before this, Mahito was already stronger than Jogo, but now, Mahito was in a completely different league than what Jogo was. While he already knew this was going to be a hard fight, he wasn't expecting it to be this hard of a fight. But in order for him to win, he needed to at least deal with the Serpent Mouths. If he could, then he would be able to actually start doing damage improperly to Mahito. This was when Mahito decided it was his turn to take the offense, as he quickly closed distance and attempted to punch Yuji in the face, not just punching him with one of his arms, but both of his arms, on his left side as Yuji just narrowly lifted up his arm in order to block. At the same time, he activated blood armor in order to take the blow, as he was launched back by the impact. Noticeably though, the blood armor actually broke from that punch. The true form itself wasn't actually that much of a power upgrade. It was stronger than his normal form by quite a bit, but the real power upgrade come from the fact that he now had 4 arms. After all, now he could hit Yuji with double the force, effectively making it so every single time he landed a punch, it would be like 2 punches landed rather than 1. Mahito wasn't done yet, as he didn't let Yuji get away that easy, as he used his upper right hand to grab Yuji by the face, his lower left hand and right hand to grab Yuji's arm, and finally his upper left arm to not just slam Yuji hard onto the ground, but also punch him hard in the gut. This resulted in a crater going even deeper in from Mahito's physical force as Yuji coughed up some blood. However, this was when the blood hardened as Yuji fired them at Mahito in a close range, while pushing Mahito off his body and hopping away, as Yuji coughed a bit. This was a first. For the first time he felt he might actually be outpacing close quarters combat. No, he wouldn't give up yet. This was something he could handle and he would have to handle. After all, no one else could. No one else in Shibuya could handle Mahito right now other than him, so this was a battle he would need to win. As the hardened blood hit Mahito head-on, doing no damage to Mahito, before Mahito slowly looked up to Yuji with a wide grin on his face, as the 2 serpent mouths opened while Mahito lifted up his 4 arms. Out from the mouths, hardened flesh spears were launched out at Yuji, while Mahito began to make hand signs through all 4 of his arms to amp the flesh spears that were being sent at him. As Yuji then compressed blood towards his feet and had it explode in order for him to hop out the way of the flesh spears, just barely managing to dodge all of them as one of them scraped past his leg and he just barely managed to avoid it as the scrape was healed. As Yuji then hopped out from the crater they were in, now returning to the surface as he thought to himself, "I'll need to use the buildings to my advantage," as he was thankful that they were still in a relatively abandoned area. He was going to take advantage of that as he hopped into one of the buildings. Mahito then jumped out from the crater while looking around, as it was then a piercing blood was launched out from the building in front of Mahito, going right for his face. Mahito slid underneath it though, dodging it before a wide smile rose on him as he looked to the building, as the serpent head began to chant once more, "Body, will, soul." Mahito had several chants. The one he used previously was to help prepare his instant spirit body of distorted killing. This chant, though, was made to give him a physical amp, amping his abilities for one move by 120%.
Under a normal circumstance, chance would not be able to help a sorcerer in terms of their physical body. However, because of the fact that Mahito was currently using his curse technique to amplify his physical body, he could use chance in order to make himself stronger. As Mahito then jumped at the building while causing the ground underneath his feet to crack, moving at a blinding speed and rushing right towards it, breaking right through it and causing the building to collapse as he did so while saying, "Whoops, still gotta get used to this." However, as the building began to collapse, several hardened blood arrows were sent flying down towards Mahito from the building, but it wasn't able to do any damage to him. But suddenly he heard the sound of a heartbeat increase from behind him as Yuji activated Flowing Red Scale Burst while focusing curse energy towards his fist as he rushed towards Mahito and landed a punch on Mahito's back. However, this punch was a black flash as Mahito was sent flying, and Mahito groaned, feeling his back crack quite a bit from that strike, some parts of his back also falling off as shards. But that pain that was on Mahito was replaced with a confident grin as he turned around to look at Yuji. He was very much going to enjoy this. As one of the two serpent heads began to chant once more, "Flesh and bone, marrow, death god," as they said that chant over and over again, Yuji then closed the distance and began to unleash a flurry of punches on Mahito. Thanks to the black flash, his heart was able to heal even faster than it was a minute ago. Furthermore, Yuji's punches felt even more refined, even sharper than they were before. Granted, he knew that was because of the black flash, but still, he had to admit it was impressive, as Mahito was able to deflect and block several of the hits. However, Mahito then took advantage of his four arms, as he used two of his arms in order to deflect two of Yuji's punches, while at the same time landing two punches on Yuji's chest. However, Yuji was quick to adapt himself, as at the same time he landed a kick on Mahito's gut. This resulted in a distance forming between the two of them and a smile forming on Yuji, after Yuji could sense it. During their little hand-to-hand scuffle, Mahito's back had not fully finished healing yet. It was going to take a while to heal off Black Flash wounds, which meant right now at least Mahito had a weak point being his back, and the more and more damage he could do to his back, the more and more time it would take to heal it properly. As Yuji then punched his fists together, resulting in them turning completely red, before activating Blood Armor, resulting in the fists darkening, as curse energy flared up around his hands as well. However, where most would be afraid of this confidence or be a bit more cautious, Mahito just seemed to be happier and gladly accepted Yuji's challenge. He could tell that he was more confident that he could win, and Mahito could tell Yuji had found the key to hurting him. But Mahito was not afraid. In fact, he was excited as he said, "Let's both be reborn today, Itadori. Find our limits and crack them wide open." Where normally most people would be worried about an opening like this, be worried about a crack in their defenses, Mahito saw this as exciting. A room for him to evolve, find new inspiration through Yuji. The two would have made for excellent rivals if it wasn't for the circumstances present today. If Yuji was a curse or Mahito was a human, then they would have gotten along well. But that was the simple nature of the world. As the two rushed at each other once more, Yuji and Mahito's eyes filled with determination. Yuji opened up both of his hands and created two slicing exorcism discs. He then threw both of them out at Mahito, aiming for his upper left and right arm, as Mahito blinked, questioning if Yuji really thought that he could cut off his hands that easy, as Mahito then punched right through both of the slicing exorcisms, getting blood all over his two hands. I was looking to see Yuji was now right in front of him, as he went for a punch on Mahito's gut, but Mahito met that punch head-on by countering with one of his own, as Mahito attempted to use his two fists on his right side to land a punch on Yuji, but Yuji exploded some blood underneath his foot in order to launch himself over the fist, taking advantage of Mahito's momentum while clapping his hands together and firing out a piercing blood at his back. At that same moment, one of the serpent heads turned around to meet Yuji and opened their mouths, firing a flash spear in the way, making the piercing blood hit the spear instead of Mahito's back. As Yuji landed, he was immediately backhanded by Mahito, while he also landed a punch on Yuji's side to send him flying. Mahito had to admit he was impressed by Yuji's ingenuity. This was when the serpent head that fired the flesh spear at Yuji began to rapid fire flesh spears at Yuji, all the while the other serpent head continued to chant, as the back began to repair itself more and more. The opening that Yuji had made with the Black Flash was fleeting and fast. Yuji was going to need to reopen that wound and do it with an even harder blow. As Yuji began to narrowly move out of the way of the flesh spears that were coming at him, dodging every single one that he could. Thankfully, they weren't being amped by the serpent head chanting because it was focused on repairing Mahito's back, which was one advantage that he currently had. Yuji wasn't fast enough. He needed to find some way to be able to reach Mahito's back and attack him before Mahito could counterattack. Flowing Red Scale, while fast, wasn't fast enough to handle someone like Mahito. He could only use Flowing Red Scale burst at the moment of attacking, so that was a no-go. He needed to find something else, some way to bypass this. As then, out from one of the serpent mouths, it opened wide, resulting in two small transfigured humans going into the ground, as the other continued to chant the healing chant. Mahito then said,
By the way, just cause I'm in this form doesn't mean I can't use my transfigured humans anymore. As the two small transfigured humans tunneled into the ground, while Mahito looked at Yuji, lifting up all 4 of his hands and rushing towards him. However, as he was running, Mahito himself began to chant rather than using one of the serpent mouths, as he said, "Body, will, soul," resulting in a speed increase for Mahito. Yuji decided to meet this head-on as well, moving his own fist to clash against Mahito. However, Yuji then did something a bit more subtle. He used the bloody landing from the slicing exorcism to move Mahito's upper hands out the way, just barely, while Yuji tilted his head out the way as well in order to dodge the punch. He was just barely able to pull this off, but he was able to deflect Mahito's 2 upper hands, so he would just have to deal with Mahito's 2 lower hands. And in that moment, he clashed fists with Mahito, before the two of them began to repeatedly clash, Mahito shaking the blood off in the process. However, Yuji right now was actually keeping up. Thanks to landing a Black Flash previously, he was now fast enough to handle 4 arms of Mahito. Not fast to completely overwhelm Mahito, but fast enough to at least handle clashing with Mahito repeatedly, as well as deflecting some of his blows. However, the Black Flash was not the only thing that could be thanked. With each punch Yuji landed, Yuji's defenses became sharper, his punches also becoming sharper. He was becoming better and better with predicting Mahito's movements. In terms of strength, Mahito was still stronger, but Yuji was able to keep up with him in hand-to-hand. As he then hopped over Mahito, his heartbeat increasing once more with a flowing red scale burst, curse energy surrounding his fist as he was preparing to use another Black Flash. But Mahito was able to turn around just on time and focus curse energy towards his fist. One of the transfigured humans also jumped out from the ground and wrapped around Mahito's fist like a large claw as the 2 clashed Black Flashes once more. As both Yuji and Mahito were sent flying away from each other, the armor around Mahito's arm was heavily damaged and broken. The transfigured human that Mahito made was killed in the impact as well. Mahito's back was almost finishing recovering, so he decided to allocate resources somewhere else, leaving his back at 80%. Now the serpent began to chant in order to repair Mahito's armor around his arm. Yuji, on the other hand, landed on the ground a bit away from Mahito. The blood armor around Yuji's arm shattered completely as his RCT worked to heal away the wounds to his arm and his heart, before the blood shards from the blood armor flew back towards Yuji's arm and used some more blood in order to substitute that blood armor that was missing. A heavy breath came out from Yuji as he looked towards Mahito. Yuji was now on his 3rd Black Flash while Mahito was on his 2nd. The two's clash could be felt all throughout Shibuya by the sorcerers present. However, as Mahito's arm was repairing itself, Yuji spotted something that horrified him. Mahito had 2 fingers of Sukuna present. That was what he stole from Todo, and this was bad. Yuji knew the stakes now of losing. His body right now was still fighting to adapt to Sukuna, and if he was fed those fingers, then Sukuna would take over. If Sukuna took over, no one on either side in Shibuya would be able to stop him. However, suddenly out from the ground, 2 massive hands rose out, followed by the face of a humanoid attempting to grab Yuji. He was able to jump out the way, and he recognized this as the transfigured human that Mahito had launched out earlier, as he clapped his hands together, firing out a piercing blood right down towards the transfigured human and shooting it in the head, killing it. But this was just made to be a distraction by Mahito, as Mahito had appeared behind Yuji saying, "Let me pay you back now for earlier," focusing curse energy towards his fist and landing a Black Flash on Yuji's back, causing Yuji to cough up blood as he was sent flying into the ground, rather injured from the blow as he clutched onto the ground for a moment. Mahito then closed his distance, attempting to go for a punch on Yuji's face. At the same time, Yuji had his own counter as he went for a punch on Mahito's side. He couldn't activate Flowing Red Scale Burst this time, but he did activate the Black Flash. However, Mahito activated his own, which ended up sending Yuji flying as a chuckle came out from Mahito. As Yuji was being sent flying, the serpent had grabbed Yuji and pulled him back towards Mahito, as Mahito landed a punch on Yuji's chest, as the sound of ribs cracking could be heard. Mahito definitely broke something this time, and Mahito was laughing and cackling at Yuji, as he said, "Did you really think you could beat me alone? You needed Todo's help against Hanami, you needed 4 other sorcerers against Jogo, and now you tried to deal with me, the one who surpassed them both, on your own?" As the serpent slammed Yuji down hard on the ground, Mahito then walked towards Yuji while forcing his mouth open. "I was going to kill you originally, to even the playing fields, but now, with everything, I believe we need it to be a bit more even. I need my own ally. Besides, no better way to make you suffer than forcing you to become the vessel of Sukuna once more." And he forced Yuji to consume the 2 fingers of Sukuna, allowing Sukuna to take control of the body while taking a step back, as he was curious to see what would happen, curious to see if this would even work. As it was then all across Shibuya, an evil source of curse energy could be felt. Mahito especially could feel it considering how close he was. It was so evil and so potent that even Mahito himself had to take a step back. He had to take a couple steps back in genuine fear before moving to bow properly. Thanks to landing a total of 4 black flashes, his body had successfully finished healing fully, in his true form, as he deactivated his true form, returning back to his normal form as well. As out from that evil wave of curse energy, Sukuna walked out, his body fully had healed, as he had to admit he was impressed. He was impressed by how much Yuji and Mahito were able to push each other, because this ended up helping Yuji's own body improve, which by extension ended up helping out Sukuna when he was active right now. While Yuji's control of blood manipulation wasn't on his level, he was still impressed with the battle that had been going on. And because Sukuna was in such a good mood, especially considering the fact that he knew where the rest of his fingers were, he decided to grant Mahito one wish, as he asked Mahito why did he make him manifest once more and what he wanted. He wanted Sukuna to take Yuji properly as his body. After all, there was no way to make Yuji suffer more than knowing he lost complete control to Sukuna, and considering right now it would be fully possible for him to make a binding vow or force Yuji into making a binding vow to give him complete control. However, Sukuna decided not to do that. After all, he had a different vessel he already wanted in mind. After all, while blood manipulation was most certainly interesting, he did want a bit more. So he did have a different vessel in mind in order to take. But he did make Mahito one offer. He said that if Mahito could land a total of 1 hit on this body, then he would kill every single person in Shibuya. And Mahito got back up, entering back into his true form and taking this challenge head on. After all, he knew that he would need to use his true form in order to stand a chance against someone like Sukuna. Nobara, Nobito, and Nanami would spot a transfigured human begin to approach them. This transfigured human appeared to be humanoid in look, however Nobara in particular recognized the design. While she never fought it herself, she did see it for a moment, as she had to question if that was a finger bearer or not. However, she realized very quickly that this was definitely not a curse. This was a transfigured human, as the 3 of them stood on guard and ready to kill the transfigured human in front of them. The transfigured human started by lifting up both of their hands, with the group immediately able to spot that on both hands there was a mouth each. And out from those mouths, several flesh spears were sent flying towards both Nobara and Nanami. The human was able to see that out of the 3 of them, that Nobito was the fastest of them, so it wanted to try and go for the slower of the 3. Nobara and Nanami would have quickly hopped to the side in order to avoid the flesh spears. While Nobara was able to dodge it, Nanami did get slightly cut by the flesh spear, however he was able to avoid it, but the transfigured human's arms moved with the 2's movements, rapid firing out the flesh spears towards Nanami and Nobara to try and catch up to them. Nobito, although, felt a little bit insulted. After all, the transfigured human wasn't even going for him, so Nobito quickly disappeared and appeared behind the transfigured human, as Nobito was about to go for a punch on its back, but a moment before the punch landed, the transfigured human changed its shape, as small spikes rose out all across the transfigured human's body. Nobito was just barely able to stop himself from landing the punch and getting impaled by a spike. The transfigured human was much smarter than they thought. They had underestimated its intelligence. But to Nobito, what was even more impressive was the fact that this transfigured human was able to detect Nobito before he could even reach him. After all, it would be one thing to be able to activate the spikes and set this up as a trap, another thing was actually reacting to Nobito to begin with. This transfigured human was a test that Mahito was making to use specifically to fight against faster opponents, a transfigured human with a more sensitive body that would detect changes in the air based on movements, while also turning its body into a trap via making those spikes. However, while Nobito was able to avoid the spikes rising from its body, the transfigured human wasn't done with its counterattack yet, as one of the mouths that were firing at Nanami faded on the transfigured human's hands before rising on the transfigured human's back, as it then fired 2 flesh spears towards Nobito right off the bat. And while Nobito was able to avoid the first one, the second one stabbed into Nobito's left arm as he winced a bit in pain. Nanami, Nobara, and Nobito were surprised and impressed. From what they had seen of transfigured humans so far, they weren't smart. They were brain dead, but this one was smarter than normal, though it made Nobito begin to question if it was actually thinking, or if it was like a computer program based on commands. As the transfigured human quickly turned around, focusing curse energy towards his fist, which that shocked all 3 of them, as they could tell that in this transfigured human's composition, at least one of them was a previous sorcerer, as it went for a punch on Nobito, trying to take advantage of the fact that Nobito was injured. Nobito was just barely able to activate his technique on time to move himself out the way and avoid that strike. Nobito could tell in that moment this beast had quite good levels of physical strength, as he landed next to Nanami and Nobara. As Nobara then took a step forward while throwing up 10 nails into the air, before saying, "Come up with a plan, I'll hold off this thing," with a confident grin present on Nobara. She knew that planning wasn't exactly her thing, so she decided to take this thing on herself. Plus, she was already a good counter, and she knew she would certainly be able to last, as she smacked each of the nails in rapid succession to launch them towards the transfigured human while rushing towards them herself. Nobito and Nanami nodded as they decided to move back a bit and out of the transfigured human's view for now. As the transfigured human saw the nails from Nobara coming, it entered into a fighting stance, before punching each of the nails and colliding with them. However, each nail the transfigured human hit was met with an equal force. This thing's punches were equal to the nails. But this is when Nobara changed up her strategy and caught it off guard, by sliding underneath the fist and quickly slamming her hammer at the beast's side, or at least going for it. However, it countered via launching another flesh spear towards Nobara from the same side. This was what Nobara was actually hoping it would do, as she decided to meet it head on. She surrounded her hands completely in curse energy and caught the flesh spear. However, catching the flesh spear did make Nobara get pushed back quite a bit, and burned her hand somewhat. It was nothing too major, just a small friction burn. However, this was when Nobara dropped the spear and focused curse energy towards her hammer, smacking it against the spear to launch it towards a transfigured human. To Nobito, Nobara, and Nanami's shock, it didn't try and block or dodge the attack. The spear went right through the transfigured human's shoulder and pushed it back. At first, Nobara, Nanami, and Nobito thought that it was just going to reabsorb the attack, but no. It took clear damage from it. While the hole was quickly healed, it did end up taking some damage. They all had to wonder why. Why did it not try and dodge or block this attack? It then lifted up both of its hands and began to rapid-fire spears at Nobara. While Nobara did have enough time to move out the way, as a result of the shock from it deciding not to dodge, it did end up cutting her arm. As she suddenly was thinking about that, what weakness did it have that they could exploit? As suddenly all four of them felt the entire subway around them shake, causing Nobara and the transfigured human to almost lose their balance for a moment. However, Nanami and Nobara were both able to recognize at least one part of why the subway was shaking, as Nanami was impressed and amazed. After all, he knew it was Yuji. He could feel the clash that was between Mahito and Yuji, and Nobara couldn't help but think that's the power Yuji has now. Nobito, though, was by far and away the most surprised out of them. After all, he had never seen Yuji's strength until now. But this black flash had some unintended side effects, as the transfigured human began to shake and twitch a bit, mutating while curse energy rose off its body, becoming more and more refined. After all, this thing was still connected to Mahito and was one of his creations. It would also feel the side effects of Mahito landing a black flash. While most people would be terrified, a different expression rose on Nobara, an insane glee. Not just did Yuji get significantly stronger, but now this opponent had too. There was no way in hell she was going to let either stay ahead of her for too long, as Nobara's eyes almost glowed a bit with determination and insanity. She truly was a jujitsu sorcerer. However, this was when it clicked for Nobito as he noticed something. This transfigured human did have a weakness, and it was what he fought. The transfigured human functioned more like a machine rather than an actual person, which meant its moveset was more than likely limited as well as counters they could do. But more importantly, if it was attacked by its own body, it wouldn't register it as a threat, which made sense because it was its own body. Nobito then explained this to Nanami while Nobara was fighting against a transfigured human. As the transfigured human then changed its strategy, now instead going for a melee approach rather than a ranged approach and rushing at her. At the same time, Nobara also decided to take this chase head on. However, while she ran, she did scatter several nails all around the two of them. And before the two can reach each other, she threw two nails high up into the air as the transfigured human went for a punch on Nobara's face, but Nobara jumped over the punch and landed on her nails, as she then pushed them down while snapping and activating hairpin. The transfigured human's eyes would have widened in surprise as it moved back in an attempt to move away from the hairpin. However, part of the transfigured human's body did get stabbed, and while it wasn't anything too major and it got healed, it was still damaged nonetheless. However, that was when someone else attempted to take advantage of this opening, as from behind the transfigured human, Nanami then went for the attack, slamming the ratio cleaver into the beast. However, the ratio cleaver was met with the human's arm, as it used it to clash its fist against the ratio cleaver. As the two fists clashed, Nanami was pushed back as it then lifted up its other hand, preparing to fire another flesh spear, until the sound of a snap echoed all throughout the room, as the nails all around the transfigured human pointed towards it, and out from each of them a hairpin activated to impale into the human. This allowed Nanami and Nobara to make some distance, as now the transfigured human had countless holes in its body from this attack. Nobito could see that it was now in a damaged and weakened state, so it was going to take advantage of the state it was in. As Nobito grabbed one of the flesh spears already impaled into the ground and rocketed towards it. His goal was rather simple. He was attempting to stab it right through its chest. However, the holes in the transfigured human were quick to repair, as at the same moment that Nobito landed the stab, he suddenly felt a large amount of pain in his left arm. The transfigured human had rapid-fired flesh spears towards Nobito's left arm, seeing it as the weakened part of the body, which it was correct about, as this attack was enough to completely sever Nobito's left arm. However, this did not come without cost, as the transfigured human also got brutally damaged from the flesh spear. As the transfigured human was about to go in for another punch on Nobito's body, it suddenly was met with a pain in its side, as Nobara landed a strike on it with her hammer, focusing curse energy towards the hammer and launching it away from Nobito. Her nails she launched out from earlier flying back to her now, floating around her as she then said, "You two are a bit too injured for this. Head back to Shoko and get healed."
then leave this to me.
This was true. The both of them definitely needed healing. Nobito was heavily impacted by the loss of his arm. He was no longer the second fastest sorcerer because of that. He also could feel that he might actually start bleeding out the longer and longer they fought if this was not dealt with. Nanami was still recovering from the damage he took in the Dagon fight, however Nanami decided to stay. He wanted to make sure the next generation would do well and would live. While Nobara was slightly worried for Nanami, she could see there was no changing his decision, so instead she was going to make sure that Nanami didn't die. Nobito on the other hand left, knowing that the longer he stayed here, especially with his arm injury, the more he was risking things. He did focus on using curse energy to at least reinforce his body to slow himself from bleeding out. The transfigured human would have then gone back up while looking to Nobara and Nanami. It was able to see that Nobito had chosen to leave. It was going to hunt down and kill Nobito after it was done with these two. This is when Nanami rushed towards their opponent. Taking the offense, the transfigured human lifted up both of their hands to begin firing out the flesh spears towards him. A focus entered into Nanami's eyes, focusing on hitting the ratio with each of the spears that he hit. As he hit the first spear and destroyed it thanks to hitting the weak point, then he hit another and another. He was focusing on keeping the spear's attentions to himself. Nanami knew he wouldn't be able to actually get a hit on the transfigured human, but he still needed to keep going. As the transfigured human began to change, where the mouths were going on its body, changing spots to make the direction the spears were launched out of from less and less predictable. Nanami was now struggling to actually properly keep up with the spears, but even with that he was handling it just barely. However, while Nanami was playing defense, Nobara was not doing nothing. Instead, she was setting up several nails, tens of them all with curse energy imbued into them. They had potent amounts of curse energy inside of them as well. As she said, now. This was the trap. Nanami was the defense, so Nobara could get a large amount of nails ready to fire. This is when Nanami moved out the way as Nobara began to rapid strike each of the nails. With each strike, the nails got more and more potent, the first nail clashing evenly with a spear. But as they continued to clash, Nobara's nails eventually overpowered the spears, as Nobara began to zone in on the final nail. A wide smile forming on Nobara as she recognized the feeling overwhelming her, as that final nail was not just one ordinary nail, but one amplified by the power of the Black Flash. Several nails struck the transfigured human, pushing it back further and further before the final nail struck. The final strike tore right through the transfigured human, doing a heavy amount of damage to it thanks to the Black Flash. Nobara then rushed towards it, picking up one of the flesh spears as she was moving. She then jumped high up into the air, jumping over the heavily damaged transfigured human as she then focused curse energy towards her hammer, before smacking it against the spear. Once the hammer hit against the spear, it was another Black Flash, as it pierced right through its head. Nanami was watching this wide-eyed and amazed. That was the second Black Flash she had landed consecutively, as the transfigured human coughed up blood, feeling quite a bit of pain. It was almost dead as curse energy surrounded its fist, aiming to do one more hit and trying to spite Nobara with that one hit, as Nobara landed and smacked her hammer against the transfigured human's side. This strike being the third Black Flash. And with the third Black Flash, the transfigured human was completely pulverized as it hit the wall. Nobara's nails then flew back to her body, catching them as she smiled a bit. She was still in the zone. Nanami had to admit that he was amazed by Nobara's performance. The fact Nobara landed 3 Black Flashes, he could see that there was a pretty big chance Nobara would have landed a 4th Black Flash as well consecutively if it wasn't for the fact the transfigured human was already dead from that attack. However, as Nanami watched this, he was left to realize something. Nanami couldn't take on this transfigured human. He needed Nobara to win. He was tired already, even more injured, but he could also see that Nobara had gotten even stronger. Nanami was outclassed, but he did have a prouder smile. This was a bitter pill for him to swallow, the fact that he wasn't strong enough now to be of much help. But, well, this was different. These students were already stronger than him, surpassing him, which meant that they were able to protect themselves now. He then told Nobara that he was going to deal with the transfigured humans that were present throughout Shibuya. Then he would head to Shoko, telling Nobara that she's got it from here and to go back up Yuji. Nobara then gave him a thumbs up before starting to head in Yuji's direction in a hurry. While all the commotion in Shibuya was happening, Kenjaku was currently sitting down with the prison room, waiting for the sealing process of Gojo Satoru to be finished completely, with the absorbed and now fully healed Jogo currently staying next to Kenjaku in order to assist as a guard. Kenjaku had also enhanced him with a little bit of his own curse energy just in case, in order to enhance its power. As Kenjaku sensed Mahito transform into his true form, and he realized in that moment that Mahito had been holding back his actual amount of power that he had access to all this time. Realizing that Mahito was already more than ready to be absorbed in order to activate the culling games, so he was preparing himself to get up properly. However, he could sense that Yuji was evolving against him and that both of them were evolving, so because of them still evolving, he decided he was going to stay where he was for now and continue to watch the show. And when he sensed that Yuji was on the verge of defeat, he was about to intervene, until he suddenly sensed an evil curse energy wash over the entire city of Shibuya, one that made most people quake in fear.
However, instead, this made a wide smile rise onto Kenjaku's face, as he was going to look to see what the true full potential of his experiment could be. After all, he had designed Yuji to be an amazing vessel for Sukuna, one with a great amount of versatility, as well as ability and physical strength, and now he was going to see that on full display in action. While of course Sukuna was only going to be at 13 fingers, this would be more than enough of a test to see its current progress. After all, it also served as a test to see what their current abilities were capable of. While of course he did know what his sons could do, he did not know how Sukuna was going to advance it, and he knew for a fact Sukuna was going to advance their abilities no matter what. That was just the type of skilled monster that Sukuna was. So he had a small cursed spirit rob some random movie people's popcorn as well as drinks in order for him to watch the show. As we now return back to the crater, the battlefield where Mahito and Yuji's battle took place, and now the battlefield of Mahito and Sukuna. Mahito then attempted to call back the two transfigured humans he had sent against Nobara and Todo. He was going to need as much backup as possible. While he wasn't too sure they would last for long, any help against Sukuna would be better than no help against Sukuna. However, calling them back didn't work, as Mahito realized right in that moment that both the transfigured humans that he had made to fight Nobara and Todo were dead. He would need to be careful as the deal between himself and Sukuna entered into his head once more. He would need to land a single hit on Sukuna, as both of the serpent heads began to chant, saying body, will, soul. Sukuna would tap his chin, a curious expression entering onto his face. After all, he could tell that this was the chant purposefully made to amplify Mahito's body for one attack. As Sukuna then activated Flowing Red Scale, while lifting up both of his hands in preparation for hand-to-hand combat, as Mahito rushed at Sukuna moving at full force and full speed, taking the first move and attempting to grab Sukuna by the face and trying to use his extra hands to land a punch on his chest. But a moment before Mahito reached Sukuna, a blood thread surrounded all four of Mahito's hands, tightening around them. Then Sukuna waved his hand to the left, launching Mahito through several abandoned buildings from that strike, now bringing Mahito to a nearby area where the battle against Jogo had taken place. Mahito slowly got up from the impact as he pat his body. That throw and impact was strong, stronger than most of Yuji's blows other than the Flowing Red Scale burst as well as Yuji's Black Flash. But this really put it into perspective for Mahito, as he could tell Sukuna was only using Flowing Red Scale, and especially not Flowing Red Scale burst, which he should be capable of using. Small cracks were now in Mahito's body from that impact, but it wasn't anything too bad, as the serpents chanted to repair Mahito's body once more. Flesh and bones, marrow, death god. Each of the cracks were repairing themselves. Though Mahito had to admit that he was surprised that Sukuna didn't continue his assault. Once Mahito looked up, he did get the answer to his question, as he saw several small compressed blood orbs rising all throughout the sky, tens of them, as Mahito blinked, realizing that this was the supernova attack that Choso used. However, this confused Mahito, as he had no idea what Sukuna was planning right now. Mahito also really did not want to find out either, as he then looked down to see what looked like a red steam rising out from the area where Sukuna was originally standing. Mahito realized what Sukuna was doing. He was heating up the blood to the point it evaporated and made steam. He was astonished by this, as he never even saw Choso pull off something like this before. Sukuna smirked a bit, as he then moved his finger slightly, resulting in the blood strings still wrapped around Mahito's hands, pulling him into the wave of steam. Mahito was so entranced by what Sukuna had just pulled off that he had completely forgotten about the fact that there was blood strings around his body even now. However, once Mahito was inside of the wave of steam, the blood strings decided to let go of him. As Mahito looked around, he was confused as to why Sukuna let go of his hands. All around him he could just see red, a red mist that was surrounding him, as well as several floating orbs around them, but none of them were triggering. As he then heard a voice say, "I will admit, Patchface, you've impressed me so far." A voice would come from behind Mahito. Upon even hearing the voice, the two serpent heads opened their mouths wide. Mahito himself began to make hand signs with all four of his arms as fast as he could. He just needed to land one hit, as both of the serpent heads fired a powerful flesh spear towards the direction of the voice. Mahito would have turned around at the same time to see if he landed the strike, but as he looked over, he could see something similar to Sukuna, but pure red and made of liquid. That was a clone made purely out of blood with crimson red eyes that were now staring at Mahito, before it turned to a puddle of blood, as he felt a weight on one of the serpent heads, as a voice came out from that direction. "In terms of power, you are not half bad in comparison to sorcerers, humans, and curses I fought 1,000 years ago." With Mahito turning his head to look over to see what that was, but he could see it was another clone made out of blood, that turned into another puddle of blood. Before suddenly Mahito felt a punch land on his gut, and a hard one at that, as it sent Mahito skidding back. When Mahito looked up to see what caused the punch, he could see the real Sukuna now standing in front of him, before he then said, "You have the hunger, the desire to become more, but don't tell me this is all you can do." As out from the sky, the several blood orbs that were already made began to fly down towards Mahito, before they all began to rapidly explode, with Sukuna tapping his chin, as he said out loud to himself,
I believe this was the second eldest brother's extension technique. Wait, no, he had the Vexor lines. This was the oldest brother's extension technique. Sukuna so far had used 3 techniques that belonged to the Death Paintings. The first technique that he used was Supernova, which belonged to Choso. The second technique was known as Blood Mist, which was one that belonged to the 6th brother Tanzo, and the third technique he used of Blood Cloned belonged to the 5th brother Shoso. Sukuna had been able to learn all of these curse techniques simply by being a silent observer over time, both by observing Yuji's previous memories while also observing the brothers trying to teach them in the dreamscape. Of course, none of the brothers were innately good at teaching, so Yuji could only really pick up things that he was innately good at. However, with Sukuna's jujitsu skill and ability to copy anything he sees, copying these techniques were child's play for him. Even techniques that took over 100 years to develop was nothing for Sukuna to learn and use and maximize it to its full potential. As Mahito was hit by the supernovas, causing him to be launched around like a pinball machine while those words echoed in his head, several cracks formed on his body, but right now he didn't even care about that. He knew he wasn't done. He was still in the zone from the 4 black flashes he landed earlier. Sukuna had to admit he was impressed at the fact that Mahito was still standing even now, as he was curious before he then said, "Heal yourself," while moving his hand behind his head. Sukuna definitely wanted to see more of what Mahito was capable of, if Mahito could really try and take the offense or not. This is when the 2 serpent heads began to chant while Mahito started to make hand signs. However, the serpent chants were different, as Sukuna recognized this chant as the one that amped Mahito's power, but as he looked at Mahito performing the hand signs, he could see that Mahito's body was repairing itself. Sukuna wondered what exactly was Mahito planning. As Sukuna wondered for a moment if he was choosing to take a slower method of healing in an attempt to potentially stall out and come up with a better plan. Of course, Mahito did have to know that Sukuna would not let him do that and would probably just attack if he felt like Mahito was stalling, but it was pretty clear he wasn't, as Sukuna looked a little bit curious and waited for a little bit longer. As he saw something absolutely disgusting, which was Mahito opening his mouth and vomiting out 3 transfigured humans into his own hands, before he then crushed the transfigured humans in between his hands as the flesh began to stretch in order to surround his body. A secondary armor began to form over the first body that looked bulkier, similar to the true form of Sukuna in height, as Mahito's 4 arms were forced together, before being covered by a large amount of flesh. Mahito now having 2 bigger arms, he had sacrificed 3 polymorphic soul isomers and fused them to his body in order to amplify his power even further, as his body became darker, taking on a dark gray color. Sukuna then raised up his hands in preparation for hand-to-hand combat. He was curious and excited to see what this new form of Mahito was capable of, though he did look a bit confused as to why he went with this type of form. From what he could tell, Mahito could no longer make hand signs while fighting at the same time, which was a massive advantage of having 4 arms. As Mahito rushed towards Sukuna, now moving even faster than when Mahito rushed at Yuji after chanting, as he attempted to slam his fist down onto him. Sukuna was impressed by the speed as he deflected Mahito's fist into the ground, causing a crater to form on it before Sukuna then aims a kick on Mahito's face, but he was able to lift up his other hand in order to block the kick. While Mahito was pushed back by the kick, his armor was only slightly cracked now, as Mahito smirked a bit while looking towards Sukuna. This was Mahito's evolved form that he called Absolute Form. Unknown to Sukuna, in this form he could still do hand signs. Mahito was controlling his soul to still do hand signs with his original 2 hands underneath the larger hand he now had, as both of the serpent heads began to rapid-fire flesh bullets towards Sukuna, these bullets also moving faster than they were previously. Sukuna would then swiped his hand, using Slicing Exorcism in its Fred form in order to cut through each of the bullets and deflect them as well. He was enjoying using blood manipulation and the freedom it provided him. It was significantly more versatile than Cleave and Dismantle, so he was going to have fun with it for now. As Mahito rushed towards Sukuna, closing the distance, he changed the form of the flesh around his body to be like large hammers, before attempting to slam them down on Sukuna, focusing curse energy towards the large hammers in order to amplify the strike. Sukuna then jumped high above both of the large hammers, with both of his hands in his pockets, as Mahito then sent both of the serpents towards Sukuna in an attempt to bite him on both sides, but Sukuna was able to kick both of them away with relative ease, as he then hopped off air and landed on the serpent, skating down the serpent and kicking Mahito in the back. This is when Sukuna opened up his left hand, instead creating another Slicing Exorcism, this time in disc form rather than in the Fred form, as the disc began to spin faster and faster, but noticeably as well, steam was coming off of the disc. He had advanced the ability to heat up blood, now using it alongside Slicing Exorcism as well, something that not even Shoso or Tanzo, the one who created the blood steam technique, could do, before he then threw the Slicing Exorcism towards Mahito. As Mahito's eyes widened, he knew for a fact if that hit him, that would dismember a limb, so he then jumped out the way.
However, even though he did move out of the way of the slicing exorcism disc itself, the heat and steam emanating off of the disc burned a slight bit on Mahito's side. This variant of slicing exorcism was rather dangerous, as not just did it have extreme cutting force, but even being near it would cause damage to a person. As Sukuna opened up both of his hands to create 2 more of these slicing exorcism discs, before throwing them both at Mahito's direction. All the while, the one he had already threw began to spin around and go for Mahito's back instead. Even in a distance, Sukuna was still able to control them. In order to move out the way, Mahito chose to dodge by sending out one of his transfigured humans below him, and having the transfigured human explode to launch Mahito high up into the air and give him even more momentum. This also showed Mahito that Sukuna could control the discs even after they were fired, as Sukuna then pointed upwards in order to send all 3 slicing exorcism discs towards Mahito. However, as they were sent flying up towards him, they suddenly lost control and dropped to the ground as normal blood, as Sukuna felt a small shake in his hand, before he thought to himself, "Oh, the bride is starting to wake up." Mahito looked confused as he had no idea what just happened, but he wasn't going to question this. However, he did take advantage of this opportunity as he vomited 8 transfigured humans before combining all of them, activating Soul Multiplicity and Body Repel at the same time to send a wave of several serpent heads down towards Sukuna, each of them attempting to bite down on him. On their way there, they began to rapid fire flesh spikes towards Sukuna as well. And as Sukuna looked up, a devilish grin began to form on Sukuna. As he decided he might as well have a bit more fun for the time he had left, Sukuna then activated Flowing Red Scale Stack, rather than just Flowing Red Scale like he was using the entire time. Before Mahito could suddenly hear Sukuna's heartbeat begin to increase rapidly, which filled Mahito to the brim with terror. After all, if Sukuna hit him with a Flowing Red Scale burst, he would be atomized. Nothing would be left. However, the heartbeat began to decrease in sound, still audible but more like a quiet beat rather than the potent drum that was Flowing Red Scale burst. The spears now looked like they were coming at him in slow motion, as Sukuna's eyes focused on the spears coming at him. What Sukuna had done was rather simple. He found an in-between state of Flowing Red Scale Burst and Flowing Red Scale Stack, a safer variant to use that only required minor constant healing of the heart, in comparison to the heart attack that needed to be healed after the performance of a Flowing Red Scale Burst. Before he jumped off the ground, the jump alone causing a large crater to be formed, deepening the crater already present even further. Sukuna looked like he was a red bolt of lightning as he was jumping off each spear while making his way up to the serpent's head coming at him, before suddenly the sound of his heartbeat echoed throughout the area, activating Flowing Red Scale Burst. As he rushed right through the serpent heads and punched through it, this punch was enough to cause the entire beast to explode, as Sukuna made his way past Mahito in the air, returning back to his base form for a moment as he lifted up his hand like a finger gun, before hitting Mahito with a dismantle, launching Mahito right back into the ground and causing Mahito to cough up some blood. As Sukuna got an idea while he landed, before walking towards Mahito and lifting up his hand, surrounding Mahito's legs in blood strings, then Sukuna began to spin and threw him towards the city. Sukuna had sensed people present there, and in truth he kinda got bored of fighting in the crater that Yuji and Mahito had made. Sure, there was some buildings, but they were all abandoned. Mahito was sent rocketing through 3 buildings, and as he was sent flying, he could hear the screams of tens of people all around Mahito. This made him blink, as he questioned why Sukuna would bring him there, considering he could use all of these civilians as new weapons. Furthermore, this also caused some screams of terror, because while not all the civilians could see Mahito himself, all of them could see the armor around Mahito due to that being people he infused into his body. These were real people, not cursed spirits. Mahito was about to try and get up in order to reach the people and turn them into weapons, but before he could, one of the burning slicing exorcisms were thrown right into the building, but this one was different, as it was just as big as the building itself, cutting several civilians in half while at the same time burning the rest that had been able to avoid the disc. Thankfully, due to its massive size, Mahito was able to dodge it, mainly because it did get slower as a result of being that big, allowing him to jump out of the way and jump out of the collapsing building. And this was when Mahito realized what Sukuna was truly planning. He was going to turn Shibuya into a graveyard in its entirety, just for fun. Both of the serpents would have then opened their mouths, releasing a polymorphic soul isomer as Mahito clapped his hands, making them both grow to the size of buildings before Mahito himself landed on one of the buildings, as both of the massive polymorphic soul isomers rushed towards Sukuna in an attempt to punch him. Meanwhile, Mahito was moving away from the area so he could prepare his next move. As Sukuna then rushed towards the Titan, as he jumped onto his arm, avoiding the blow resulting in buildings collapsing from that strike. As he jumped, he released a large amount of blood across the Titan's arm, as he began to slide down the Titan's arm to reach it, using the blood as a slide to enhance his speed even further, as he then landed a punch straight on the Titan's face, launching it right through a building. The other Titan attempted to take advantage of this, trying to punch Sukuna while Sukuna was midair, but Sukuna released a small amount of curse energy from his feet, air hopping in order to avoid the blow. While he was midair, he clapped clapped his hands together, firing out a piercing blood right towards the Titan's head, this piercing blood having steam coming off of it while it fired, as it pierced and burned right through the Titan's body. Sukuna then walked over to the first Titan that was still barely just alive, as he had to admit he was impressed that they could survive, considering they were still humans that were just transfigured. As he put a hand on its leg and used cleave on its body, turning it to nothing more than mincemeat, and then its body was completely destroyed. Sukuna left no remains of the body. However, this was when Sukuna heard massive groans of pain that was all coming towards him, as several buildings were beginning to collapse in its approach, and he looked into the distance to see a towering mountain of flesh approaching him. This made the previous two Titans look pretty small in comparison, as Mahito said, "This is my maximum technique, maximum soul dance." Sukuna looked intrigued for a moment as he analyzed it, considering he had the capability to see the soul. He wanted to see how many souls were infused into this, and his eyes widened in surprise and shock. Now, Sukuna wasn't terrified by any means, but he still was surprised nonetheless, as he realized the amount of humans that were infused into this beast, with a total of 1,000 humans that were infused into this massive transfigured human conglomeration. Before a wide grin rose on Sukuna as he then said, "I might as well grant you a reward for entertaining me for so long, so allow me to show you something that I haven't gotten to use in a while." Before Sukuna opened up his hands, as fire began to form and he molded it into the shape of an arrow. Sukuna had fulfilled the conditions in order to use the flame arrow on Mahito, as he had used dismantle in their battle, and he used cleave on one of Mahito's Titans, and under normal circumstances the Titan would not be considered as part of Mahito, but because of the fact that they were being controlled by Mahito's curse technique, they were considered as a part of Mahito's body. As Mahito looked wide-eyed and very confused for a moment, he could tell that Sukuna was swapping back to his own curse technique, but based on everything that he knew, Sukuna could only slice and dice things. He shouldn't have access to fire manipulation. But he realized he did not have time to focus on that, as he quickly began to move away from the maximum technique that he had launched at Sukuna. As Sukuna then released a divine flame, burning the massive mountain of flesh to ashes in less than a second, and before the flames could reach Mahito, they suddenly stopped, as the flames went across Mahito's body and began to burn away all the transfigured humans that Mahito had. However, they didn't attack Mahito at all, which that confused him, before Sukuna then appeared right in front of him and the flames faded away. As Sukuna then said, "You know, when you fought the brat, you made quite an ironic statement, at least in my opinion. After all, you said that he couldn't ever hope to achieve anything on his own, and yet you, in order to win, needed to use polymorphic soul isomers to catch him off guard so you could land a black flash on him while he was focused on another opponent. In fact, there were several points in that fight where you could have died if you didn't have your own polymorphic soul isomers. In fact, the strength of your technique requires a lot of people to be around. That's when it's at its peak. So I want to see if you can do anything on your own as well. Beat the brat on your own. Once you do that and reawaken me, then and only then I will help you. If you can't even achieve that, then you're not worth helping." However, just to make sure that Mahito wouldn't be able to get anyone he could transfigure, Sukuna suddenly grew out what looked like blood wings. At first they were modeled after Esso's blood vector lines, however they began to change shape into something more akin to something like an angel, as the Fallen had now truly reawakened, before flying high up into the air. As people all across Shibuya began to look up and saw what looked like hundreds of red stars beginning to form, all the while they could see the Fallen staring down upon all of them. Before those stars began to rain down, each of them being hundreds of blood arrows, raining down in every single direction that he could sense, causing tens of buildings to collapse, people to be killed, people to be injured and in pain, and a lot of people got hit by these blood arrows. And once Sukuna was done, a 100-meter radius of Shibuya was completely destroyed. All of the buildings were collapsed, and the only thing that remained untouched was Mahito. Tens of thousands of people were damaged or killed by those attacks, as all the blood arrows that were fired down quickly began to fly back towards Sukuna, going into the wings that he was using to hold himself in the air, as he then told Yuji to take a good look at the destruction that he caused, before he gave Yuji back control, as he was rather curious to see what was going to happen. How much rage was Yuji about to feel? How broken was Yuji about to feel? This was all going to be an amazing show for him, and he couldn't wait to see it. Todo was then pushed into a rather big room, one of the waiting rooms in Shibuya filled to the brim with chairs, escalators, and elevators, as Todo blinked before patting himself as he noticed in that moment that two of Sukuna's fingers were stolen. Realizing that this was Mahito's plan, as he was about to move in order to help Yuji out, the transfigured human entered into the room. Now that Todo could see it,
Now that Toto could see it properly, he could see it tens of eyeballs all across its body as well as several hands. A total of 8 were present on the human, this model named as Chimera Beast, as it snarled at Toto while staring him down. Toto would have then lifted up his hands as he began to think. While he was thinking, it was almost like time itself was moving slow. In his seduction, he was able to realize quite fast that this was made to counter his curse technique, due to its several eyes and arms. Thanks to that, disorienting this type of creature was going to be near impossible due to the fact it could look anywhere and everywhere all at once. Furthermore, thanks to its several limbs, it would be able to counter any move or anywhere Toto could appear because it could attack everywhere. And to make it even more annoying, Toto was fighting alone. His curse technique, while good on its own, was certainly much better when he had several people fighting alongside him. But he knew he could, no, that he would make this work. Right now, his brother was putting his very life on the line in order to beat a special grade curse, a disaster curse like Mahito, who was a massive threat to all of humanity. He was going to beat this beast so he could join his brother in taking on Mahito. Then together they would stand a much better chance. And while he was thinking, he did notice a very critical flaw within the beast, which made him smile a bit. He knew what his plan was, and he knew how to beat it. Even in the face of his natural predator, Toto would find a way to win. The Chimera Beast then released a loud roar as 2 of the massive arms were sent flying towards Toto, both of them attempting to land a punch on him. All the while, the eyes of the transfigured human were looking in every direction, making sure they could detect the very moment that Toto decided to clap and swap places. However, Toto wasn't nervous. No, he was smiling, as a massive amount of curse energy flared around his body, as he then said, natural for a curse to only think about one aspect of combat. It's not the technique that makes the sorcerer, but the sorcerer who makes the technique. As the Chimera Beast's attack rushed towards him, aiming to slam one of its massive fists into him. And while the beast was expecting Toto to swap, he surprised it by choosing not to, instead clashing fists right off the bat with it, as his eyes locked with several of the Chimera Beast's eyes. And the 2 were clashing at a surprisingly rather even level of power, which was definitely impressive for the Chimera Beast in Toto's eyes, but also it showed the Chimera Beast that Toto was actually stronger than he had expected. This was because the Chimera Beast was built to counter a stronger Toto than the one in Goodwill, and that was his expectations, but Toto had managed to grow even stronger than what they could expect. As Toto then hopped back, moving his fist away from the clash, but the Chimera Beast attempted to slam 2 more of its fists down on Toto in an attempt to crush him. However, this was when Toto picked up one of the chairs while he kept his eyes on the Chimera Beast. As Toto jumped high up, avoiding the strike from the hands, before he then punched the chair, breaking it completely and sending the remains of the chair all over the place. As the Chimera Beast's eyes began to look in several directions, following each of the shards of the chair and where they were, processing them and noting them down in its head. And in a few moments, Toto was able to figure out that this thing operated more like a computer than an actual human, which was something that would be rather useful for him to know. After all, that meant it likely didn't have the same adaptability that humans would have, making it a bit more easier to predict its patterns. One of its programs were to look at objects that had curse energy and register them, in preparation for if Toto attempted to swap with them, and be prepared for any of that. After all, that seemed to be a very common tactic for Toto. However, in spite of that, Toto didn't actually swap with any of the objects that he had just scattered all over the place. So it just registered it in the back of its head as something to be wary of, however they weren't too concerned about it. However, while clapping would have been a perfect way to escape this clap attack, Toto didn't swap, as he kicked both of the hands away before landing on one of them and beginning to run up the Chimera Beast's arm. As it then attempted to counter Toto by pushing him off the arm, sending one of its arms flying at Toto in order to smack it off. However, Toto elegantly jumped right over it, landing on the ceiling before using the ceiling to launch himself down. This time when he landed on the ground, he picked up 2 chairs, as he threw one of the chairs at the Chimera Beast, while at the same time he broke the other chair, scattering even more pieces of that chair everywhere. The Chimera Beast would have blinked, as it then smacked away the chair, deflecting the chair into one of the walls. However, this was immediately followed up by Toto throwing another chair at the Chimera Beast, and another. Toto was now starting to rapid-fire chairs with one hand to throw them at the Chimera Beast with one hand. The other hand was breaking more chairs and scattering all the pieces of the chair around the area. The Chimera was beginning to process every single one of the chair shards that were thrown, and while the chairs weren't doing any damage to the Chimera, it was starting to annoy it. After all, it had no idea what Toto was planning or why Toto was throwing around all these chairs. Sure, it might have made sense if Toto was going to swap around with them, but it didn't. Toto didn't swap around with any of them, so he was starting to get annoyed that he couldn't figure out. So instead, it decided to do a gamble, and sending all 6 of its hands right towards Toto at the same time, attempting to land all 6 of his hands and trying to destroy him in one hit, or at least do a critical amount of damage in one hit. However, Toto met the charge head-on, and this confused the Chimera Beast. After all, if these hands ended up hitting Toto, it would have caused lethal damage. Was Toto about to swap at the last second with one of the chair pieces around? That would make sense. So its eyes began to look around, darting all across the place in preparation to move its arms in order to hit that location. However, while Toto did clap, he didn't actually swap.
No. But what ended up swapping was the Chimera Beast with one of the chair pieces, as now his Chimera Beast was standing beside Todo rather than going for him directly. While Todo did not have a domain expansion, he had effectively made this area into his domain expansion, as he focused cursed energy towards his foot and then kicked the Chimera Beast in the head. This caused the Chimera Beast to groan out in pain as it turned around attempting to slam its fist into Todo once more, but Todo ended up swapping his places, making it so the Chimera Beast was now behind Todo instead of in front of him. After that, Todo focused a large amount of cursed energy towards his fist and punched it in the back. The Chimera Beast then realized what Todo's strategy was. He himself wasn't going to swap places. No, what Todo was going to do was force the Chimera Beast to swap places with the ground so he would alter his positions so Todo could repeatedly land hits on him. As Todo then hopped back while making a motion towards kicking the air. However, a moment before the fit would have landed, he ended up clapping once more, swapping the Chimera Beast with one of the chair pieces, this time swapping him into a hit. Todo was a true genius of jiu-jitsu, someone who was able to turn an advantage, a foe who was meant to be the perfect counter to him, into an advantageous situation for himself. And now it was just a battle of attrition. He just needed to stack up enough damage on the Chimera Beast in order to permanently put him down, as he landed blow after blow, until suddenly he felt a massive shockwave come, as Mahito and Yuji had now clashed black flashes in a different room, sending shockwaves all throughout the subway. However, this ended up making the Chimera Beast begin to evolve. It was shape-shifting, starting to grow more durable armor around its body, changing more and more of its abilities and updating its tactics. However, Todo, seeing that Yuji landed a black flash, ended up putting him in the zone. He didn't want his brother to leave him even more behind than he already did. He felt a need, a desire to catch up to him, and that was part of what motivated Todo to become so strong. He did not want his brother to become alone, so he ended up tricking the Chimera Beast one more time, and landing a black flash kick right on the Chimera Beast's face, sending it flying through a wall. Todo knew that this battle was not done, as he had his cursed energy raised in preparation. He could feel the control of the black flash, that familiar feeling of it, all flow throughout his body, that strength, and he was preparing to face off against the Chimera Beast once it rose again. However, a few seconds passed where it didn't end up rising, but instead, two hands rose out from underneath Todo and grabbed him by the leg, dragging him down to the next floor and getting rid of all the chair pieces, or at least scattering them even further throughout the new room that they were in, a waiting station for the trains to arrive. As Todo looked up and saw 6 massive red fists flying towards him, preparing to slam down on him and try and finish him off, but Todo was able to clap and swap places with one of the chair pieces and get out the way. As Todo looked over to see all of the Chimera Beast's eyes glowing red with a hatred and anger towards Todo, it wanted Todo dead. As cursed energy was blazing off of its body from anger, it did have a sorcerer within its own composition similar to the Chimera Beast that Nobara had fought against. While it was a lot more machine-like in terms of its tactics, it still had the human mind and ability to get angry. However, it didn't really have the ability to adapt, at least from what Todo could tell. But Todo was also able to tell now its tactics were updated. Now it was going to be even harder than it was before. And the two opponents began to rush at each other once more. Todo was making sure to note down where all the chair pieces were in preparation for swapping. While this would be a bit harder now the chair pieces were more scattered for his tactic to work, it was still possible. However, suddenly the Chimera Beast's hands were sliced off, and this wasn't because of Todo, as the Chimera Beast began to groan in pain before looking to see 2 glowing red eyes in the shadow beginning to approach him, and those 2 glowing red eyes slowly revealed themselves as Choso. As Choso then said, "Any brother of my brother is also my brother." Todo smiled a bit. He was happy to see that Choso had arrived. This would mean they would be able to deal with the Chimera Beast quickly and be able to back up Yuji just as fast, as Todo took advantage of the fact that it was caught off guard while rushing towards it and slamming his foot right into the Chimera Beast's chest, launching him back even further. As the Chimera Beast quickly reattached its fallen off hands towards its body, and the arms went back to it as it was knocked back. It was staring at its 2 opponents, beginning to analyze and figuring out a new way to fight against them. It was not prepared to fight against someone like Choso. After all, it was made to counter and battle against Todo, but it did also know that Choso wasn't that physically strong, so if you get into close quarters combat with Choso, it wouldn't be that hard to deal with them, and then they could finish off Todo. Though also finishing off Todo would likely be the better move in this case because of how useful Todo's curse technique is when it comes to being paired with other people. As Choso then created a large amount of blood that he scattered all over the place. Thanks to having fought against Jogo with the likes of Yuji as well as Mimiko and Naniko and Todo on their side, they were able to figure out how to fight well alongside each other and now were much more adjusted. This is also going to give Choso attacks all around the area that he would be able to use, as both Choso and Todo focused, preparing to battle off against the Chimera Beast. As the Chimera Beast sent 2 of its arms towards the ceiling, breaking off 2 parts of the ceiling and throwing them immediately at Choso and Todo, as Todo clapped twice, swapping both his and Choso's places, with some of the blood that Choso had already made, firing out a piercing blood aimed for the Chimera Beast's shoulder. Thanks to the Chimera Beast's vision, it was able to see the piercing blood coming, as it was just narrowly able to move out of the way of the piercing blood. However, a moment before it did attempt to move out the way, Toto clapped and swapped its places, swapping it with one of the blood that was near the Chimera Beast, making it force to let its other shoulder get hit by the piercing blood. As the Chimera Beast glared at Toto before sending 4 of its arms right at him, and Toto swapping places with Choso this time, who Choso used the Fred form of Slicing Exorcism to cut off the arms immediately. As Toto then rushed forward, taking advantage of the fact that it was now in pain, and landing a punch straight on the Chimera Beast's chin, sending it rocketing forward as Toto then clapped, swapping Choso's places again with the blood, as Choso focused blood towards his hands, activating flowing red scale stack as well as blood armor in order to land a hard punch on its cheek. And despite Mahito making the Chimera Beast to not get disoriented, it was getting disoriented. It was getting overwhelmed by Toto with the help of Choso. And as the Chimera Beast was sent rocketing backwards, suddenly 3 blood orbs rose up around it that began to compress heavily before exploding. Choso had just used the supernova attack. As the supernova had ended up causing some holes to form on its body. Not too big, but it was still holes nonetheless, as it was trying to focus on regenerating, as both Toto and Choso took advantage of this chance, both of them rushing towards it and not giving it a chance to recover, as Toto focused curse energy towards his fist, preparing to use the Black Flash. However, suddenly all 3 of them were able to hear a heartbeat from Choso. As while this technique wasn't anywhere near as good as Yuji's flowing red scale burst, it was clearly inspired by it, as Toto smiled a bit. He was able to see that Yuji had given Choso some inspiration for an ability. While Choso's heartbeat wasn't beating anywhere near as fast as Yuji did with flowing red scale burst, it was still beating pretty fast, as Choso decided to call this move flowing red scale Nova. As the 2 of them synced up perfectly with each other, Toto landing a Black Flash while Choso landed his own punch, resulting in the Chimera Beast being torn apart completely. And just to make sure that it didn't regenerate, blood exploded all around the Chimera Beast, tearing it completely apart, destroying its body, as Choso and Toto had finished it off, and Choso's blood all flew back towards his body. As Toto then thanked Choso for coming, though we did have to admit he was a bit surprised. After all, he knew that he was dropping Mimiko and Naniko back, so he questioned if they were with him as well, and Choso told him no, he already finished dropping them off. However, during their time there, they did briefly end up meeting with another sorcerer, one with blonde hair who was rather tall, who Toto immediately recognized who they were talking about, which made him smile a bit, as Toto then told him that was his teacher Yuki Tsukumo, and that was someone that they could most certainly trust. He also then went on to thank Choso for coming in order to back him up. He actually wasn't too sure that he would be able to beat the Chimera Beast on its own, especially after it went through that evolution and figured out how to counter his ability. But he also mentioned that the 2 of them did not have time to rest. They needed to make their way over to Mahito right now in order to back Yuji up against him. While they were pretty certain about Yuji's power, and the 2 of them had just gotten stronger themselves, they weren't too sure if Yuji was capable of beating Mahito on his own, especially with what Choso had told them that Mahito had been getting stronger. Choso did nod in agreement to that, and the 2 of them began to go up the subway in order to head back to where Mahito and Yuji were fighting. On their way there, they ended up encountering Nobara, who joined with the group as well. Nobara was kinda in a hurry right now and ran as fast as possible to reach them, causing her to lose her breath a little bit and Choso to carry her on his back, giving Nobara some time to recover their stamina properly. However, that was when all 3 of them felt an evil wave of curse energy wash over them, and a massive amount of fear rose into them as Toto remembered something. 2 of Sukuna's fingers were stolen. And upon sensing that curse energy, he realized exactly what was happening, as he told Choso to stop and the 3 of them were going to wait over here for now. This confused them before they realized exactly why. They would be detriments against Sukuna than they would be help. Especially if any of them died. The self-blame that Yuji would go through would be a potential avenue for Sukuna to have his body permanently, and if Sukuna got control over Yuji's body, especially right now while Gojo was sealed, it would be game over for everybody. And all 3 of them hated that they had to stay here for now, but it was the best option. It was the best way to guarantee that they wouldn't die. Fortunately, Sukuna wasn't really one to hide his curse energy, so it would be pretty easy to notice when Yuji got back control forcefully. Meanwhile, on the surface, Nanami was fighting against transfigured humans. They weren't that difficult to deal with, but he was able to do it, and he was saving multiple people right now. And while he did sense that wave of curse energy and was a bit concerned by it, he knew it would be better to not get too concerned and just be focused on the job. After all, he was an ant. Why would Sukuna even care about him? Animaki was also helping him as well, using his curse energy to evacuate people into the subway station, as that would be a safe place for them to hide, considering the fact that Mahito was no longer present inside of there.
While neither of them would be fully able to help against them, the best they could do right now is evacuating people. Meanwhile, Panda and Kusakabe were battling against members of Geto's family. This battle had been going relatively uninterrupted, and Kusakabe had been holding back in order to stall for time, though he was also able to sense the battle between the two behemoths going on, and he quickly decided, yeah, this is enough, I need to get out of here. However, suddenly all three groups noticed something in the sky. Several, tens of blood stars beginning to form, and in the center of that was a boy with pink hair with blood wings that almost looked like an angel, and at first they were confused, but Nanami was the first to realize what was about to happen, as Kusakabe also activated Simple Domain in preparation for this, while he looked up to the several blood stars that began to rain down, several blood arrows that were aiming for each civilian on the surface. Inumaki was just barely able to narrowly escape this by going inside of the subway. He just barely managed to avoid one that was aimed for his head. The other members of Geto's family that were on the surface were skewered through by the arrows. Kusakabe, through using the properties of Simple Domain, was just narrowly able to deflect it. It took everything that he had, but he was able to deflect the blood arrow. Panda also ended up getting pierced by several of the blood arrows as well. And then finally there was Nanami Kento, who pushed a civilian out of the way into one of the subways in order to shield their life. As Nanami was preparing to die, he was happy now, happy he could live a life, a satisfied life. As memories came back to him of all the people that he had saved, the people that he had helped today that were all so thankful for him, even the bread maker that he had met a while ago, how he had lived a rather normal life and tried to live both sides, but he ultimately came back to being a jujutsu sorcerer. His goal was ultimately to eventually one day retire in Malaysia and just live a normal life, but that wasn't going to be an option. This was where he died. And as Nanami was preparing to feel the embrace of death, he closed his eyes, before he opened them, seeing a light shining in his eyes. And oddly enough, the afterlife looked a lot more like a subway than he was expecting. Furthermore, he was also surprised that he didn't end up feeling the pain from being impaled. He was expecting to feel that, but he didn't. Maybe he died so fast that he didn't end up feeling the pain? Or he died of shock before it could even hit him. However, as he looked around, he saw 3 people standing next to him. Those 3 people being Nobara, Choso, and Todo. Now for a minute, Nanami felt worried. He had to question if all 3 of them died as well, but they were quick to tell him no, and that Todo had managed to clap and teleport Nanami in order to save him. At the last moment, they were able to move Nanami out the way and teleport him down here. After all, saving Nanami was a priority. If Sukuna, while taking control over Yuji's body, killed Nanami, who knows how deep of a depression that would put Yuji into. And Nanami was thankful for the 3 of them saving him, before he decided he was going to begin making his way to Shoko in order to get properly healed. However, Nobara, before he left, gave him a pat on the back telling him that he had done well, and that he did make an impact saving a bunch of people. But not every sorcerer made it out of here unscathed. After all, there was one sorcerer they didn't have enough time to save, nor could they find, and that sorcerer was a one-armed man, Naobito. As several blood arrows had impaled Naobito through the chest, killing him, and as Naobito's life was slowly draining from his eyes, he began to remember everything about his life. And upon reflecting, he couldn't help but admit this was most certainly a death worthy for him. The Zenin clan leader, someone who had been responsible for so much pain, just simply turned into collateral damage. But at the very least, he could at least say that he lived a life he enjoyed. Yuji slowly began to open his eyes, and as he opened his eyes, he saw the wreck of a destroyed city. Countless impaled bodies that were impaled by Sukuna using Yuji's blood, and several collapsed buildings, all these people that were killed by Yuji, as several memories began to enter into Yuji. Because of the fact that it was Yuji's blood that was utilized to wipe out that many people, Yuji could almost feel it. He could feel every single time someone was wiped out by one of the blood arrows, every single person who had died by Yuji's own hand, and it was so many, thousands of deaths all around them. The only amount of relief that Yuji was allowed was the fact that he would know that he didn't kill anybody he cared about, because he felt every single person who did die to the hands of his blood arrow. Time and everything around Yuji almost felt like it was moving slow, as Yuji was forced to have to process through every single memory that had happened, everything that had happened during Sukuna's battle against Mahito. All of the blood manipulation that he had used to effectively torture Mahito while at the same time killing every single civilian he could see with no remorse. All he could feel was that murderous glee, one that was toxic, one that was coursing through his body, and he absolutely hated this feeling. Of course it was not his own, it was Sukuna's, but he hated being able to feel it by proxy, as the blood wings that Sukuna had formed on Yuji's body were still remaining even now. And Yuji was angry. He was angry at Sukuna for causing all of this death. He was angry at Mahito for being the one to reawaken Sukuna and cause all this death to happen, but most of all, he was angry at himself. There had to be something more he could have done, some way he could have won against Mahito. Maybe if he hunted him down before Shibuya and killed him, then none of this would have happened. Maybe if he never consumed Sukuna's fingers, Sukuna would have never gotten the chance to re-emerge. Maybe if he just waited for the other sorcerers and had all of them join alongside him, then Mahito would have died. Why did he think he could take Mahito on alone? Why did he try that? These questions kept riddling in Yuji's head. What could he have done that could have prevented this? What could he have done better? What could he have done in order to avoid the path that they were on today? As a rage and anger as well as self-hate began to steep inside of Yuji and steep deep inside of him. One that the King of Curses was reveling on right now. The king was intrigued to see how far Yuji's rage would end up pushing him, which is why he decided to give Yuji one final push, as he decided to interrupt his thoughts. Those questions of what could have been done, of what could have been done to avoid this, are now irrelevant, brat. Everyone here is dead. Dead because of that cursed spirit's actions, because he released me, and because I chose to kill those people. So stop blaming yourself, or at least stop blaming yourself right now. After all, while you were too late to save these people, you are not too late to avenge them. And the longer that you stand up here, the more and more you're going to make their lives that were lost go to nothing. Shut the hell up, Yuji would respond. A clear rage was evident in the voice in his mind. As that caused Sukuna to go silent, however, internally he was laughing. He was laughing hysterically as he was enjoying this. He could see that he had done it. Even though Yuji wanted him to shut up, he could see that his words had hit for Yuji. And Yuji's self-guilt was put to the back of his mind for now. He still blamed himself. He still blamed himself for causing everything that happened, but right now that wasn't important. A total of 1 second had passed, 1 second since Yuji had woken back up. A confident smile was rising on Mahito. After all, he had beaten Yuji on his own and he had transformed since that point. He had gotten stronger since that point. Sure, Yuji had consumed 2 fingers and landed just as many black flashes, but he had not unlocked a new transformation like he did. He still had a pretty good chance to win this. However, when he looked back at Yuji, he looked a bit different. There was something different about the look in his eyes. Of course, Yuji always had a hate for Mahito. That was always present in his eyes, and Yuji always had a desire for revenge against Mahito for what he had done against Junpei, for all the people he had killed. But now the determination he had to kill Mahito before was like a river, in comparison to the ocean of determination that was present in Yuji now. As cursed energy began to flare off of his body and flare off of it rapidly. Cursed energy generated from the negative emotions towards Mahito, towards Sukuna, and most of all towards himself. Though Mahito still remained confident as he told Yuji, "You can generate as much cursed energy as you like, and you can hate me as much as you want. It is not going to change a single thing about this battle." But there was still one more thing that was slightly concerning to Mahito, beyond the fact that determination was present in Yuji, but also the fact that Yuji still had those blood wings that Sukuna was utilizing earlier. But most of all, the most intimidating thing to Mahito was the fact that when he said something, Yuji didn't even give him a response. As suddenly out from Yuji's back, a secondary pair of blood wings began to rise out, and this pair of blood wings was significantly bigger than the original 2 wings that Yuji had on his body. The wingspan of these new wings were twice the length of Yuji's height. Before they then all flapped, as they suddenly launched a barrage, a massive barrage of blood arrows right towards Mahito's direction, and these were all of the blood arrows that Sukuna had launched into Shibuya. Launching all of them at once, using all of the blood for those bigger pairs of wings. He did still have the smaller pair of wings, but those bigger pair of wings were gone. Thankfully though, they weren't being launched by Sukuna, which made them not as fast, but Mahito still knew that this was not something he'd want to get hit by, considering the massive abundance of these blood arrows that were flying towards him. So Mahito began to move backwards, starting to repeatedly dodge each of the blood arrows until a few of them did pierce into his arm. However, while they did pierce into it, it wasn't that deep of a piercing. However, as he tried to look up to Yuji's direction, he could see that Yuji was no longer there. Before, he suddenly felt a hard impact land on his back. And while the punch was hard, it was still manageable, as both of the serpent heads turned around in order to begin firing flesh spears at Yuji. However, Yuji continued on his charge, as he focused blood around his hands, enhancing his blood armor even further, to begin punching away at each of the spears coming at him before he caught one of them. And after he did catch one of them, he threw it high into the air with blood around it in order to keep it floating, as Mahito turned around and went for a punch on Yuji. Yuji was just narrowly able to lift up his arms in order to block the blow, but it did send him flying. Before, Yuji then flapped his own blood wings, stopping his own momentum, as Yuji then opened up his hands, creating 2 slicing exorcism discs. Before he then threw the both of them right at Mahito's direction, and they were speeding at him quite fast as well. Mahito then jumped to the side in order to avoid both of the slicing exorcisms. However, as he moved to dodge it, he felt a burn against his side. While this burn wasn't anywhere near as potent as Sukuna's burn, it was still something he could feel, and he realized in that moment what this meant for sure. Yuji remembered everything that Sukuna had done in his body.
which meant there was a pretty good chance that Yuji could just access all the techniques that Sukuna had used against Mahito in their fight. While it wouldn't be anywhere near as potent as when Sukuna utilized them, it would still be rather deadly and something in Yuji's arsenal for him to use, as he realized that Yuji was definitely going to be a different beast in comparison to what he had fought before. Furthermore, Yuji was also fully healed, his body was adjusted to Sukuna now, and finally, most of all, he was still feeling the effects of the 4 black flashes he had landed earlier. As now Mahito was planning to go in for close quarters in a rush on Yuji, as he began to chant, "Body, will, so," and suddenly, the serpents were interrupted, as both of the slicing exorcisms turned around and sliced at the serpents on the back, causing their chants to be interrupted and for them to be damaged. Not completely torn off, but damaged, as Mahito also felt a pain on his back from both of the blood discs hurting his body. As Mahito then realized exactly what Yuji was targeting, he was going for the serpents on Mahito's back. After all, if those could be removed, then Mahito would be significantly easier to handle. As Yuji then lifted up both of his hands, creating several blood strings in order to begin launching them towards Mahito. At the same time though, this was made to be a distraction, so the slicing exorcisms that he launched before could turn back into normal blood. As the blood began to slowly sneak its way into the serpent mouths for now, while at the same time the blood strings were being launched at Mahito, he was going to have to dodge each of them rather carefully. After all, this was much more precise in comparison to the discs. But he was pulling it off just narrowly. It was rather hard for him to avoid, but he was doing it, as Yuji then decided now was the time to swap tactics as he flew high up into the air while continuing to send the strings down at him. Mahito was just narrowly dodging right now, but he was starting to figure out its movements and get more and more adjusted to the blood strings. However, as he looked up to Yuji, he would see one of the flesh spears that he had launched out fly back towards Yuji. But at the same time, Yuji had clapped his hands together, preparing to fire off a piercing blood, as he used piercing blood in order to propel the flesh spear at Mahito at an insanely fast speed. Mahito was just barely able to lift up his hands in order to prepare to block it, while at the same time he had his serpents prepared to chant, as they said, "Body, whip." But then, the blood that Yuji had snuck into the serpents had suddenly exploded, as Yuji used Supernova on the flesh serpents. And while it did not destroy the flesh serpents, it did end up destroying the organs inside of it that would allow it to speak, as now Mahito was no longer able to use the flesh serpents to chant, as the flesh spear propelled by the piercing blood went through both of Mahito's arms and pushed him back heavily. If Mahito had not lifted up his arms, that would have gone right through his chest. As Mahito looked up to see the glowing yellow eyes that were staring down on him, staring down with a massive amount of bloodlust for him, and Mahito could now truly see the message his eyes were telling, which was it didn't matter what Mahito would do, Yuji would kill him. And those eyes sent a chill down Mahito's spine. Now Sukuna had a large amount of bloodlust, a near unrivaled and unparalleled amount of bloodlust, but Sukuna's was for everyone. It wasn't focused. It wasn't focused on a singular target, but this was focused on Mahito and ending his life. However, Mahito forcefully snapped himself out of this bone-chilling feeling, as he began to jump up high at Yuji, almost in his attempt of defiance, trying to defy that very fear that Yuji was putting into him right now. As both of the serpent heads opened wide, and Mahito put even more curse energy into it than usual to rapid-fire flesh spears towards him, and powerful ones at that. Yuji met this charge head-on by spinning around each of the flesh spears and catching 2 of them, before throwing them back at Mahito. Mahito was able to release enough flesh spears in order to counter those that were coming at him, as the 2 of them then clashed fists with each other. The 2's fists pushing against each other, and Mahito was able to notice that his fist was only slightly more powerful than Yuji. The 2 of them were rather close right now, but Mahito still had an advantage in physical strength. As the 2 of them began to rapidly exchange blows, Mahito attempting to take this chance to go on the close-range offense, with Yuji being able to deflect each of the blows. However, Yuji was currently still the defending party. However, suddenly during one of the times the 2 of them clashed fists, blood rose up off of Yuji's fist around Mahito's arm, before it began to compress and then expand, exploding and using the supernova on Mahito's fist. And while the damage was minor, this did end up surprising Mahito nonetheless, but this little moment of opening was exactly what Yuji needed, as Yuji then created 2 supernovas behind his own back in order to propel him forward so he could land a punch on Mahito's chest. This was followed by another punch and another. He was rapid firing these punches, sending Mahito back further and further, but he didn't let Mahito get any distance as he continued to catch up to him. And as both of the serpent heads prepared to aim at Yuji, Yuji then clapped his hands together and used piercing blood right on Mahito's chest, sending him flying into the ground and making a crater. As Mahito then looked up to see several slicing exorcism discs coming towards him.
each of them wielding the same heat property from before, so Mahito very quickly pushed himself out from the crater and began to start dodging each of them. But he also knew that Yuji was able to control them from a range, which meant he would have to constantly be on his toes and make sure he could continue to dodge them. And while Mahito was succeeding in dodging them, he wasn't dodging them far enough. They were still landing several burns on his body, damaging the absolute form further and further. Mahito also knew that he would not be able to repair the absolute form. Normally he would be able to if he could get other humans around him, but Sukuna had eliminated everybody in Shibuya that was close enough for him to add to his absolute form. However, suddenly Yuji landed right in front of him with a large amount of curse energy focused towards his fist, but at the same time Mahito was able to hear that heartbeat echo all throughout Shibuya, that familiar heartbeat of the flowing red scale burst. As now Mahito was 100% focused on this. After all, this was by far and away the most dangerous move in Yuji's arsenal. He knew that he had to deal with this, and now, he couldn't let that hit him. As Mahito then focused curse energy towards his own fist, preparing to clash with Yuji once again. However, suddenly, Mahito's focus was completely interrupted, as all 4 of the slicing exorcisms that Yuji had launched out from before sliced right through the serpents, destroying them and cutting them off of Mahito's body. And this caused Mahito to enter into a large amount of pain. After all, that was his true soul, that was the true form of his soul that was now just cut off. Now if Mahito had time to regenerate it, he would have, but he did not have time right now, as his focus was then brought back to Yuji, who landed a flowing red-scaled burst on Mahito. But this wasn't just an ordinary one either, this was also a black flash. This attack had sent Mahito flying, completely destroying his absolute form and killing it, and now he was left in his true form. He was also now left without his serpent heads, leaving 2 exposed points to his true form on his back. As Mahito then raised his guard, preparing all 4 of his arms. While he knew he didn't stand that much of a chance now, especially considering his absolute form was destroyed, he wasn't going to give up that easy. But before the two could continue their battle, Yuji had something he wanted to say to Mahito. He had something that he wanted to say to his face, which is why he was waiting until he tore off the absolute form. I wonder if you were part human like me, would you have ended up being the same way? Would you have had actual value for life? Though asking questions like that is irrelevant. After all, something like that will never happen. But I do want to tell you what will happen. No matter what form you take, no matter how you reincarnate, no matter what cursed spirit you become again, I will kill you over and over and over again till the end of time. And because I am a part curse, that means I will live till the end of time. Yuji was not a human, but he was also not a curse. He was both, but at the same time neither. And because of that, he could transcend human limits. He would be able to make sure that Mahito would continue to die over and over and over again with every life that he had reincarnated into. Now in truth, Yuji wasn't sure if he was going to live forever or if he was just going to have an extended lifespan. After all, Choso and his brothers did have an extended lifespan, but he wasn't sure if they were immortal to age or not. But what he was certain about was that he would make sure that Mahito would continue to die over and over again. The only cursed spirit that he truly despised was Mahito. After all, the other cursed spirits that he had seen, like Jogo and Hanami, were able to form value for other cursed spirits. But Mahito would never have value for other cursed spirits. All he would care about is himself, and he would be willing to end any life so long as it was for his own entertainment, and that was something that Yuji absolutely despised. And Mahito hearing that declaration angered him. He absolutely despised how confident that Yuji was being. Mahito had trained for so long in order to achieve a level where he could beat Yuji, where he could finally kill him once and for all. There was no way he was going to accept defeat here, as he lifted up all 4 of his arms and prepared for combat. Yuji's blood wings then changed shape, changing into a ring that was floating behind Yuji's back. However, this was when Mahito casted a binding vow, as he said no more cheap tricks, and the 2 extra arms that he had made for his true form faded away, in order to give his true form an even better buff. While he would no longer be able to constantly make hand signs, he was going to make sure it was more than worth it. He wanted to beat Yuji his own way. As the 2 opponents immediately rushed at each other, starting out with the both of them clashing fists against each other, resulting in the ground underneath them breaking. As the 2's fists began to move back, with Mahito attempting to land a punch on Yuji's face. However, Yuji ducked underneath that punch, and when he rose up, he landed an uppercut on Mahito's chin. And as Mahito attempted to use both of his arms to grab onto Yuji, Yuji landed a punch on his chest as well as a punch on his stomach with both of his fists, sending Mahito flying backwards. As Yuji then continued on his barrage, now attempting to go for a knee on Mahito's face, but Mahito was able to catch it and use his tail to smack Yuji away. However, while Yuji was sent flying, he lifted up his hands, revealing several blood threads that were connected to Mahito's tail in order to pull Mahito into a hard punch in the face. And while Mahito was stunned by this attack, Yuji decided that he was going to deal with that tail right here and now, as he opened up both of his hands, creating 2 more slicing exorcisms and throwing them down at Mahito's tail to begin cutting away at Mahito's tail. And this caused quite a bit of pain to echo throughout Mahito's body. His tail would have been sliced off in a normal circumstance if it wasn't for the binding vow that he had just made. However, cracks were starting to appear on his armor. Furthermore, with each of the punches that Yuji had landed up to this point, cracks were appearing on Mahito as well, as Mahito forcefully snapped himself out of this pain and went for a punch on Yuji's face. At the same time, Yuji also went for a punch on Mahito's own, resulting in both Yuji and Mahito taking a punch to the face, as they were both sent flying away from each other, and even more cracks were starting to form on Mahito's armor, as Yuji then spat out some blood from the blow, as 2 very small blood orbs began to form behind Yuji's feet. 2 small blood orbs that immediately compressed, being the supernova, as Yuji then jumped forward using the supernova in order to launch himself forward at an even faster speed, as Yuji landed in front of Mahito and immediately landed a punch on Mahito's chest. When Mahito attempted to grab him with his other hands though, out from the blood ring on Yuji's back, both of the blood wings ended up rising out once more, smacking Mahito's hands away, allowing Yuji to land another punch on Mahito's face, which is followed by another hard punch on Mahito's chest, and finally a punch to Mahito's stomach, as Mahito attempted to jump away, but Yuji did not let him get away, as he went forward, blocking one of Mahito's punches that he attempted to land on him, while at the same time landing another punch in the same spot on the chest. With each punch, Yuji was tearing away at Mahito's true form slowly and surely, and now Mahito had no way to regenerate it either. As curse energy began to flare up around Yuji's arms, Mahito could tell that Yuji was going for another black flash. He could feel it, he could sense it, and he didn't know when he was planning to land it, as Mahito felt that he needed to end Yuji right here and now. He needed to find a way to win. If Yuji landed another black flash, it would be over for him, as Yuji went on the offense, landing a barrage of punches on Mahito's arms, as Mahito was able to block each of them. However, with each punch that Yuji landed, he was slowly and surely cracking away at that armor, as Mahito then attempted to use his tail in order to grab Yuji, but that was when Yuji's blood wings flapped, giving him some momentum in order to jump over it as well as Mahito, as Yuji mid-air created another slicing exorcism and used it to cut off Mahito's tail, removing that limb completely. Now, Mahito was a cursed spirit, so regenerating a lost limb like that would have been easy. However, it would have taken a large amount of curse energy. Not as much as recovering those 2 serpent heads, but it would have taken a large amount nonetheless. And right now, against someone like Yuji, he couldn't risk losing that amount of curse energy, as Yuji then landed behind Mahito, focusing a great amount of curse energy towards his fist. This curse energy was so focused and so potent. It was rather deadly, and Mahito knew this was something he couldn't let him hit him. He was going to need to block it or at least land his own hit first. However, as the 2's fists began to rush at each other, suddenly Mahito felt tens of blows land across both of his arms. Each time that Yuji had punched his arm, he had used the divergent fist in order to delay the curse energy that was landing on Mahito, which allowed Mahito to be open as Yuji focused the curse energy towards his fist and punched Mahito straight in the chest, landing a black flash on Mahito and completely shattering his armor, as well as wearing Mahito out completely of curse energy. As Mahito was now on his knees, forced to look up to the opponent in front of him, he tried to use the very last of his curse energy to change the shape of his arm into a blade and try and stab Yuji, but that was a bad idea, as suddenly blood threads surrounded Mahito's arm and cut it clean off. And when Mahito looked up to Yuji, it was almost like you could see hundreds of souls behind him, all of the faces that he had turned into transfigured humans, everybody that he had killed. All the people that he had turned into his own puppets, his own weapons in an attempt to kill this man, as it ultimately amounted to nothing. No, it amounted to worse than nothing. After all, Mahito had created this. Mahito had spawned this desire to get stronger in Yuji. If Mahito never fought Yuji back then, if Mahito had never done anything to Junpei, then Yuji would not have any motivation, or at least anywhere near as much motivation to kill him. Then Mahito would have been able to kill him later. Hell, if Mahito had just killed Yuji when he had the chance, when he had defeated him, then he would not be in this situation. What was he thinking? Why did he do this to himself? He felt so helpless, as there wasn't a single thing that he could do. He had no transfigured humans left that he could use. He had no abilities left. He was out of curse energy completely. He was going to die. His arm was torn off, as suddenly a kick landed on Mahito's chest from Yuji, as he was sent into the ground, before Mahito was then picked up by his hair and punched in the gut, as Yuji began to land a barrage of punches on Mahito's gut. While it was hurting him, he was making sure that Mahito was able to stay alive through all of these punches, as each of the punches that he had just landed on Mahito was a punch for every soul that Mahito had taken in Shibuya, for every soul that Sukuna had killed in his body. And once he was done, he put his foot on Mahito's chest, beginning to step down on him in order to crush him slowly. But suddenly Yuji felt a hand on his shoulder. As he looked over to see his brother, he saw Choso, with Nobara and Todo a bit more in the background and on guard, as Choso then told Yuji that he needed to stop, that torturing Mahito wasn't going to help him. He understood that Mahito had done several bad things. He had killed so many people and caused Yuji so much pain, but giving into it and torturing him wasn't going to help him. It was just going to make him feel more empty in the end. He knew Yuji had went through a lot. He was forced to grow up thanks to all the circumstances around him, despite still being only 15 years old. But as Choso was his older brother, it wasn't just his role to protect him from physical threats, but also to protect him from himself, and that was what he was doing right now. He was trying to make sure that Yuji wouldn't give in to a desire for revenge, that Yuji wouldn't be completely consumed by it, and thanks to hearing those words from Choso, it did help him. Now Yuji still was going to kill Mahito, and Choso wasn't telling him to stop doing that, he was simply just telling him that torturing him wasn't the way. As Yuji then prepared to fire a piercing blood, clapping his hands together, this was going to be the final move, the final thing that was going to kill Mahito once and for all. However, they were all interrupted, as suddenly a wave of lava bullets were fired down towards them, resulting in Yuji having to lose focus and both Yuji and Choso moving away, but this confused the both of them. After all, Jogo was dead. However, as they all looked back to Mahito, they saw someone else beginning to approach him, Suguru Geto. That was Kamo Noritoshi, the parent of both Yuji as well as Choso, as he used cursed spirit manipulation in order to absorb Mahito and consume him. While at the same time, Jogo landed right next to Kenjaku, as the two of them were preparing to face off against their 4 opponents. Kenjaku would have then consumed Mahito, absorbing him through cursed spirit manipulation, as he said, "I must admit, Itadori Yuji, you are a marvelous experiment. You and Mahito pushed each other to heights I wasn't expecting. If I had to battle against Mahito as he was, it would have been quite the risk for me." Jogo was standing on guard as well, as Kenjaku had summoned him in order to use him as backup. And while Choso and Yuji didn't need any more confirmation, this confirmed it in certainty for the both of them, that the one standing in front of them was their creator, as both Choso and Yuji said, Noritoshi Kamo, at the same time, which caused a bit of confusion to rise on Nobara and Todo's expression for a moment, before Todo then connected the dots. Noritoshi Kamo was the one who made the death paintings. The confusion faded, being replaced with focus, as all 4 of them knew they were in front of a special grade sorcerer threat, that they would need to do everything they could to defeat him right here and now, and especially not let him use Mahito. And while Kenjaku did want to continue talking, he could tell that both Yuji and Choso were getting ready to fight as well as everybody else. Both Choso and Yuji clapped their hands together, firing a piercing blood immediately at Kenjaku as a rage began to fill both Choso and Yuji, as they both had hate for Kenjaku and what he had done. In Choso's case, it was because of what Kenjaku had done to his mother and what he had done to make their brothers. Furthermore, he also knew it was because Kenjaku was planning to turn Choso against his brother. Of course he was going to fail, but he still hated him for even attempting to do something like that. For Yuji, it was the same, but there were some additional reasons as well. After all, Yuji did partially blame Kenjaku for Mahito's actions. Kenjaku was the one who set up this entire plan. Kenjaku was the one who set up this battle to happen, which caused so much death, which made Kenjaku partially responsible. Now, he still put most of the blame on Mahito, but he still felt Kenjaku was responsible. But most of all, he also hated Kenjaku for sealing away Gojo. All the death that happened today was because of Kenjaku and his plans. Whatever Kenjaku's twisted goal was, he deserved death, and that was something that both of them were certain of. As out from both Kenjaku's sleeves, several curse spirits began to rise out, most of them being grade 2 to 3 level curses. However, there were tens of them. Todo was about to clap, but suddenly he fell over on the ground, as Kenjaku had activated the catfish curse spirit in order to interrupt his curse technique. At the same time, he used the curse spirit wall in order to delay both of the piercing bloods being fired towards him, using that to his advantage in order to move out of the way of the piercing bloods. This was when Nobara began her own assault, attempting to take advantage of this chance, as the moment she saw Kenjaku move out of the curse spirit cover, she threw one of her nails up, focusing a great deal of curse energy into it and slamming her hammer into it, sending that nail flying right at Kenjaku. But as it was being sent flying towards Kenjaku, something else intercepted the nail before it could reach him. That was a small dragonfly. Or at least it looked like a dragonfly, but in reality it was one of Jogo's ember insects. As the dragonfly exploded, causing a large burst of lava to rise out and melting that nail completely down. Everyone had been extremely focused on Kenjaku, allowing Jogo to do some of his own preps. Of course, this was by Kenjaku's own orders, but it still was something that Jogo was able to do, as Jogo had made his way high up into the air while lifting up both of his hands.
before he began to rapid-fire bursts of lava down towards his 4 opponents. Each of these bursts of lava were around the same size as Jogo himself. Jogo was taking advantage of the fact that their focus was on Kenjaku, using this in order to make an opening for his attacks. The whole thought entered into Yuji, Todo, as well as Choso's heads. After all, they had all battled against Jogo. They were the one who put Jogo in such a weakened state that Kenjaku was able to absorb them, so they knew that Jogo was able to make these bursts of fire bigger, which they were all questioning why. Why weren't they making much bigger bursts of fire right now? However, unknown to them, the reason was because Kenjaku didn't want to kill any of these sorcerers. After all 4 of them had managed to evolve from Shibuya. Even Choso, although Choso didn't evolve as much as he wanted, which did somewhat disappoint him. So we wanted to see how far they would be pushed through the Culling Games. How strong would they get through evolving in the Culling Games, as well as the other sorcerers as well. They had all managed to get much stronger, and in an event like the Culling Games, they were only going to evolve and blossom into much stronger sorcerers than they were even now. Especially his own son, Yuji Itadori, considering the growth that Yuji had shown off in his battle against Mahito. Choso, Nobara, and Todo were forced to move backwards in order to make some more range and distance between themselves, as well as the burst of fire coming towards them. But Yuji instead used a blood explosion underneath himself to launch himself at Jogo. In truth, a small part of Yuji did feel bad. After all, because of the fact that he didn't properly kill Jogo, he was able to be manipulated and used like this against his own will by Kenjaku. He was a bit more empathetic towards Jogo. After all, Jogo wasn't anywhere near as bad as a curse in comparison to Mahito, but he did also know that he had to put Jogo down, and he was going to do so, in order to make up for the fact that he didn't properly kill him before. As Yuji then focused curse energy around his fist, this time Yuji wasn't going to miss. This time Yuji was going to finish off Jogo once and for all, especially after the strength he had gained from his battle against Mahito. He already knew he could win against Jogo so long as he made sure Jogo didn't use his domain, as Jogo then clapped his hands together, firing a large beam of lava at Yuji. However, that was when the blood wings reformed on his back, to allow him to fly around the lava beam while keeping his momentum. As he flew around Jogo, setting himself up to land a hard punch on his back. As he began to increase his heartbeat, planning to use the flowing red scale burst in order to try and finish off Jogo with this hit. However, a pillar of cursed spirits ended up rising in between them that got completely ripped through by Yuji's punch, but also gave Jogo enough time to make sure he didn't get hit by the blow. After all, Kenjaku was still also focused on Yuji, as Yuji was the only person he actually considered a threat right now. Todo was annoying because of his battle intelligence as well as his insanity. It was something that Kenjaku definitely respected about the sorcerer, but it wasn't enough for him to call him a threat. Nobara was someone he would have to be cautious about because of the fact that these nails could be scattered everywhere, but he still didn't consider Nobara strong enough to be a threat yet. And Kenjaku simply considered Choso to be an irritation. After all, he was just a massively inferior version of Yuji. Where while Choso was certainly strong in his own right, in comparison to Yuji he was a lot less impressive. Even with that though, he was still sensing all 4 of their curse energies nonetheless, making sure that he was keeping eyes on them, but his primary focus and concern was Yuji. However, it was almost like Choso could feel the fact that he was being underestimated, that he was being looked over like he was nothing, which in a way insulted him even more. After all, he felt an immense amount of hatred and desire to kill Kenjaku, and yet Kenjaku was just ignoring him. As Choso then moved both of his hands onto the ground, sending a large deal of blood into the ground. As a large pillar of the ground was launched out underneath Kenjaku, Choso's own blood launching a large amount of the ground up into the air, with the intention of drastically reducing the amount of area that Kenjaku could move in. As Kenjaku did have a slightly intrigued look on his face at what they were doing before it was replaced with that normal confident grin that was present on him all the time. At the same time, Todo saw his own chance for an opening as he clapped, swapping with one of the cursed spirits in the pillar that was used in order to defend Jogo, swapping that cursed spirit with Nobara. Before the cursed spirit could realize what was going on, Todo kicked it and killed it in one shot, as Nobara jumped high off of the cursed spirit pillar while taking out several of her nails. As Nobara began to rapidly smack several of her nails, sending them down towards Kenjaku at a rapid pace. At the same time as well, since Yuji was already still there, he did send out some blood underneath Nobara in order to give her a platform to stand on so she could continue sending out nails towards it without needing to worry about falling. And while Jogo did attempt to try and rush at Nobara in an attempt to interrupt what Nobara was doing, Yuji closed the distance and punched Jogo hard in the face, launching them completely away from Nobara. And as Jogo was being launched, he suddenly felt 3 things on him, those 3 things being supernovas from Yuji. Yuji had managed to sneak 3 supernovas onto his fist in that punch, before all 3 of them exploded, launching Jogo into the ground and making a crater where Jogo landed.
Kenjaku, seeing that Jogo was definitely going to be in a weaker state as a result of those attacks, chose to unsummon Jogo. After all, he knew Jogo was a bit lacking in durability and he didn't really want to risk losing him that fast. He still had other curse spirits he could use if he wanted to. Before Kenjaku's focus then returned to the blood pillar that he was currently on. Considering how much blood was needed in order to launch up that pillar, this was certainly not a good thing for him to remain standing on, as he summoned a curse spirit that looked similar to a stingray in order for him to fly off of the pillar from. And he got off of it right on time as he saw the pillar completely collapse before the blood got launched high up into the air, before the blood suddenly began to split and change into tens of arrows that Choso was manipulating as he threw his hands down, sending all of those arrows down towards Kenjaku's direction as he was gliding around each of them, sensing each of the arrows that were coming at him. But then as he was flying, because he was only focused on what was coming above him, something grazed past his cheek. He was just barely able to notice it on time, but it still managed to land a cut on his cheek, which was a nail. Nobara had managed to launch out a nail and cut Kenjaku's cheek. As Kenjaku blinked, tapping his cheek for a moment and feeling a slight amount of blood before the wound healed, as he couldn't help but smile a bit wider, as he looked towards Nobara's direction before beginning to speak. As he then said, "Not bad, Kugisaki. Certainly worthy of being considered a first grade to be able to land a hit on someone like me." And while it did sound somewhat sarcastic, it actually wasn't. This was Kenjaku's natural tone of voice. And he was certainly impressed that someone on a grade 1 level of sorcerer was actually able to hit him, as he had to admit that Gojo's dream might have had a little bit more merit than he gave it credit for originally. Now granted, the damage was negligible and it didn't actually do anything lethal, but the fact they could do anything at all was still impressive. However, Nobara wasn't quite done yet, as she sent out a second nail that ended up going through the cursed spirit's wing. This is when Todo saw his chance, as Kenjaku heard 2 claps, as the nail that had went through the wing of the cursed spirit was replaced with Choso. However, the nail that had landed a cut on Kenjaku's cheek was replaced with Yuji, as curse energy flowed around Yuji's fist, while at the same time the sound of his heartbeat could be heard. He was about to use the flowing red scale burst on Kenjaku at such a close range. At the same time, Choso clapped his hands together in order to use a piercing blood and fire it off at Kenjaku. Kenjaku had to admit this was most certainly a brilliant tactic from the 4 of them. He was impressed that the 2 of them could work that well together, as he entirely focused on Yuji in that moment, focusing curse energy towards his arm and lifting them up in order to block Yuji's punch, while at the same time the piercing blood went right through his side. The combination of both attacks ended up sending Kenjaku flying as he was sent tumbling to the ground, as Yuji, Choso, and Nobara all landed next to Todo, as they all looked towards the dust where Kenjaku had landed as Kenjaku stood up. He had healed off the wound to his side while he said, "Smart, smart. Using a combination of your abilities to land a hit on me like that, you all have improved quite a bit through your battles, so for that I give you props." He did also have to admit that he was happy he went for blocking Yuji's blow rather than focusing on Choso's blow. After all, his arm still ended up getting broken from having to block a blow like that from Yuji. He was still able to heal it, but it still did some damage to him nonetheless. And if that punch did properly land on him, that would cause quite a great deal of damage, which Kenjaku definitely wanted to avoid as much as possible. Kenjaku decided he was going to take things up a notch, as what looked like several small portals began to open, and out from them were several cursed spirits, each of them being on the level of grade 1 sorcerer. And there was a total of 3 of them that Kenjaku had just manifested, one of them looking like an electric eel, one looked like a large bear that was twice the size of Kenjaku, and one looked like a rusted knight. With Kenjaku knowing how much stronger his son had ended up becoming, and by extension everybody else, Kenjaku went out of his way to collect some additional stronger cursed spirits in case he needed to enter into combat. As Kenjaku then thought to himself, "I just need a little bit more time to stall, and the prison one will finally be complete and I can start the culling games." Now this was definitely much more worrying for all 3 of them. After all, it took quite a bit of effort in order for them to just land this damage on Kenjaku. Furthermore, Nobara, Todo, and especially Yuji were a bit drained on stamina, because while Nobara and Todo did have some time to rest, Yuji did not after his battle against Mahito. Choso was the only one who had fully recovered so far from their battle against Jogo, considering he was mainly just focusing on getting the others out of here rather than actually joining in any fights. Well, of course, other than Kenjaku himself, who Kenjaku, on the other hand, was completely fresh stamina-wise, and now he had released even more powerful cursed spirits to aid him. The one saving grace they had right now was that Kenjaku seemed to be fighting more defensively and not attempting to kill any of them right now. The electric eel curse would have been the one to make the first move, as it smacked its tail against the ground. Then a large wave of electricity was sent right towards the group, one that was expanding in width the longer it went. As a result of that, the 4 were able to figure out quite fast how this cursed spirit worked, figuring out the electric eel was primarily made to be a long-range combatant, but they also knew the longer it stayed around, the more and more annoying it was going to become, so they would need to eliminate that curse as fast as possible. As Yuji and Choso nodded to each other, releasing a large wave of blood around the group of 4 in order to shield themselves from this electricity attack. Blood was a rather good conductor, which made it good for countering against lightning abilities, allowing them to send the electricity towards the ground through the blood.
Toto was right now trying to think on the cursed spirit's techniques, break them down in order to figure out how to use them against Kenjaku. Choso and Yuji then deactivated the blood orb, and they saw the electric eel didn't smack its tail against the ground again, which told them that it did likely have some type of cooldown, or else it would be constantly smacking its tail against the ground in order to send out lightning attacks. However, they also noticed that the bear cursed spirit was now running towards them, and with each step it took, it made the ground quake underneath it. With each step it took, it ended up cracking the ground, showing the group that this bear definitely had a large amount of physical force. At the same time, the night cursed spirit had also jumped high into the air, as it was now rocketing down towards Choso and sliced at his arm. Choso was quick to use blood armor in order to block the slice, as the rusted knight and Choso both stared each other down, while the bear cursed spirit rushed towards Yuji and Toto, attempting to tackle the both of them, but Yuji was able to punch the bear before it could reach them, sending it flying backwards. However, as it was sent flying backwards, several cursed centipedes ended up flying towards Yuji. At the same time, the electric eel then smacked its tail against the ground again, sending lightning into the centipedes this time in order to amplify their speed that they were rushing towards him at, as they ended up sending Yuji flying backwards, delivering several shocks to his body in the process, stunning him for a little bit. However, Nobara, seeing an opening, she jumped high into the air and launched out several nails towards the electric eel cursed spirit's direction, aiming to try and take it down while it smacked its tail against the ground, using this as an opening to try and kill it. But as the nails were rocketing towards it, suddenly a massive cursed spirit that looked a lot like a serpent got in the way of it, taking the blow as it stared towards Nobara. It was a black cursed spirit with what looked like several red cracks all across its body, and it did give Yuji a slight flashback, as it reminded him of the cursed spirit that originally attacked his high school before all of this began, that he met Megami and fought alongside him against. As Yuji then activated Supernova, destroying several of the cursed centipedes around him and freeing himself from their grasp, and in that moment something else clicked for Yuji, that Kenjaku was behind him consuming a finger, and that Kenjaku was the one who manipulated everything to happen even back then. As Kenjaku then sent Yuji a little knowing smirk, almost as if to confirm that Yuji's suspicion was entirely right. As free moths that were each the same size as Nobara began to fly at her, all of them rocketing towards her at rather fast speeds. As Nobara was able to smack the first one of them with her hammer, sending it flying into the ground, however didn't die from that strike, as the other two ended up hitting Nobara, causing some damage to her and sending her back into the ground as well. The bear cursed spirit was about to rush at Toto to attempt to slash at him when Toto clapped his hands, swapping places with one of the moth cursed spirits and making the bear slice right through the moth and kill it, as Toto landed next to Nobara and then both of them synced up their attacks, landing an attack on the final moth cursed spirit and killing it in one shot. Or at least they thought that it was the final moth, but suddenly Toto and Nobara saw a wave of moths coming towards them, as Kenjaku has absorbed a lot more than just 3. Meanwhile, Choso parried away the blade of the Rusty Knight, as he was about to try and use Slicing Exorcism to slice at the Cursed Spirit, but before he could even get the chance, another wave of weaker and Cursed Spirits slammed into Choso's body, hitting him into a wall. And once Choso looked up, he not just saw the Rusted Knight was still there, but there were also tens of humanoid cursed spirits that were standing next to their Rusted Knight. These were all rather weak in comparison to the Rusted Knight, but at the same time there were so many of them, and they were going to fight alongside it as well, which is going to make it even more difficult to be able to handle, considering there were so many opponents. As Yuji was now facing off against the Serpent Cursed Spirit, as it decided to rush at Yuji while letting the moths deal with Nobara and Toto. At the same time, the bear was also rushing towards him as well in order to offer some support to that cursed spirit. The four of them were all now truly experiencing the horror that was cursed spirit manipulation. After all, it was able to give Kenjaku a near limitless amount of cursed spirits he could add to his arsenal, but more than that, it could potentially give him a near limitless access to cursed techniques. Furthermore, it also allowed Kenjaku to use several at the same time, as he was using it through the vessels of several cursed spirits rather than just himself. Most of all, he could synchronize these cursed spirits up with each other. Even cursings that would seem weak on the surface when used right would be quite a massive threat to anybody. This was something that the group knew well. After all, they had used a similar tactic in order to battle against Jogo and deal with him with no casualties and no injuries. And now they were facing off against a sorcerer that had a much grander arsenal. After all, they had no idea how many cursed spirits he had, but they could tell bare minimum they did have over 1,000. After all, they did know Geto was capable of picking up 6,000. But Kenjaku decided he might as well give them that little bit of information, as he told them that he had over 1,000,000 cursed spirits. As that made all of their eyes widen in that moment. Sure, they were prepared to deal with a couple thousand curses, but at least 1,000,000? That was something completely insane. It was honestly a number of curses that none of them could really conceptualize in their head. Little did they know, Kenjaku had over 10 million curses within his arsenal. as Yuji then lifted up both of his hands, creating 2 slicing exorcisms that had a steam coming off of them, replicating the move that Sukuna had used earlier as he threw one of them towards the bear curse spirit while throwing another one of them towards the serpent. And the disc was able to take out the bear curse spirit, killing it in one shot. However, as it was sent flying towards the serpent, something else wrapped around the serpent's body, making it have a much more metallic-like skin. As Kenjaku then explained that this cursed spirit's technique was steel skin, allowing it to harden its body heavily and surround it and coat it in a layer of steel in order to amplify its durability, and through that he used the revealing one's hand binding vow, resulting in its durability being amped even further and it being able to survive against that attack. While it did slice a little bit into the steel skin, it didn't end up fully destroying it. It was going to take a lot more than that, as Yuji was thinking on a way on how to beat it before realizing that more than likely the inside was a lot less durable than the outside due to it mainly being steel skin around its body. But then he saw the electric eel curse spirit land on top of the serpent, realizing the electric eel curse spirit was likely going to send constant lightning waves through the serpent curse spirit's body, using it as a conductor to attempt to land lightning on Yuji's body. And while Kenjaku was watching all of this, he began to speak. You see, this is why I find curse spirits to be so interesting. They can vary in such shapes and forms. Fear can cause them to spawn. Negative emotions of something can cause them to spawn. Whether it's hatred from another individual, fear from something that will never exist, or a completely rational fear, it can end up causing such a variety of cursed spirits and by extension abilities to utilize. Todo and Nobara were handling these wave of cursed spirit moths quite well. After all, none of them were actually quite strong. They were all around a grade 2 to grade 3 level. Furthermore, they were also able to tell which one was going to attack them. As for them to be able to even do some damage, Kenjaku did have to put a little bit more curse energy into them in order to give them that buff. However, Kenjaku was always going to win when it came to a war of attrition, thanks to how much he had in his arsenal, especially after revealing that he had over 1 million. As Chosen activated Piercing Blood, slicing through several of the humanoid curse spirits that were around them. Even though the Rusted Knight was able to jump over it, the other humanoid curse spirits weren't so lucky as they ended up being cut in half and dying. As Shoso was about to try and put his hands on the ground again, he knew he needed to clear everything out, and he would be one of the better people to do so considering how many blood arrows he could produce. Yuji would also be in a good position to do so, but Choso right now had an opening and a chance, so he was about to try. The key word being about to, as suddenly a large amount of tree bark rose out underneath Choso and launched him backwards, as a curse spirit completely made out of wood rose out in front of Choso that looked to be humanoid in form. While this curse spirit did most certainly resemble Hanami, it wasn't anywhere near as powerful or as potent as Hanami due to it being made from a lesser amount of negative emotions, as it was only made from a forest where negative emotions had ended up dwelling in comparison to Hanami, who was the general fear of Mother Nature as a whole. However, they did have a similar curse technique to Hanami, which did allow them to create large amounts of trees. It wasn't similar in a lot of the properties that Hanami had, but it was able to do that nonetheless. It would have been classified as a grade 1 curse normally, however Kenjaku was amplifying it even further with his own curse energy. As Choso focused the blood around his hands, using blood armor once more in preparation to battle against the 2 cursed spirits, as the Rusted Knight curse spirit rushed towards Choso to continue on its close range battle. Meanwhile, Yuji was rushing towards the large serpent at the same time he was rushing towards him, but Yuji then activated his blood wings as he flew high above the blood serpent and clapped his hands together, firing out a piercing blood and going right through the electric eel, killing it in one shot as he began to fly high up into the air. As Yuji was remembering the tactic that Sukuna had pulled inside of his body, the ability to create so many blood arrows and have them fire down from the heavens, and he was going to do that himself in order to help clear out the area and give his friends a little bit more of a chance. However, suddenly as Yuji was trying to do this move, he was slammed back into the ground, as Yuji was just narrowly able to block 2 massive hands coming towards him, as Kenjaku had released a rather massive cursed spirit, one that would tower even over the size of Jujutsu High. As Kenjaku then deactivated that cursed spirit and said, "You do know I watched all of the fights, right? I know what you're going to pull." As Kenjaku looked back to Nobara and Todo in order to see how they were doing, and they could see they were moving through the swarm of cursed spirits. Some progress was being made, but it was rather slow. So Kenjaku decided that he was going to split them up a little bit more, as he summoned up another cursed spirit. This cursed spirit was one that was completely made out of ice, as it rushed towards Nobara, with the ground freezing underneath it with each step, as it then punched the ground, sending a wave of ice spikes towards Nobara's direction, as Nobara was quick to move out of the way, before it then lifted up both of its hands, beginning to rapid-fire bullets of ice towards Nobara, leaving Todo to deal with the swarm of cursed spirit moths. As the serpent attempted to take advantage of the fact that Yuji was now on the ground, attempting to consume Yuji. However, as it attempted that, Yuji clapped his hands together and fired out a piercing blood, firing it right through his body and killing the serpent cursed spirit. However, Yuji was starting to feel it now. His exhaustion was starting to set in. All the while, he could see that Kenjaku was starting to manifest even more cursed spirits. This was a war of attrition that they couldn't win. They needed to find a way to win, but this was not something that they could do. And Choso, Nobara, as well as Todo were all in a similar boat. They were all currently on the defensive right now. While Choso and Todo were the best stamina-wise right now, even they were starting to feel the drain on it. As Kenjaku then was about to increase the number of cursed spirits rushing towards all of them, until suddenly, tens of normal arrows began to come down from the sky and land on each of the cursed spirits. While several of the stronger cursed spirits didn't die from this and get injured, they ended up returning back to Kenjaku, but most of the weaker cursed spirits, including the ones that were swarming around Todo, were now dead. The Frost Giant cursed spirit, the Tree cursed spirit, as well as the Rusted Knight were still all alive. However, Choso did take advantage of this chance to finish off that Rusted Knight cursed spirit with a piercing blood, as Kenjaku couldn't help but smirk a bit, noticing now that the backup had arrived, as Yuji and Todo both recognized who that arrow was from. That was from Kamo Noritoshi. At the same time, a wave of water was launched down towards Kenjaku as Megumi had arrived, now fully healed and using Max Elephant as well as Nue to send a wave of water and electricity towards them. This massive wave was going to make it much harder to dodge, as Kenjaku did end up unsummoning the two cursed spirits that he had still left, as he summoned his own bird in order to fly out the way, but that bird was shot through the head by Maizenin. At the same time, Yuji also offered his own support by firing out a piercing blood at its head. The combination of those two attacks ended up piercing right through the bird and killing it, as Kenjaku was sent towards the ground. Before Kenjaku then felt a simple domain activate behind him from Miwa, as Miwa had casted a binding vow in order to make this the strongest simple domain she could ever muster. In exchange, she would never be able to use a sword again. But a wide smile rose on Kenjaku, as he realized the time had come. The prison realm was now finished. As Kenjaku stopped that attack by catching it with his hand, completely breaking Miwa's sword, before he decided to in turn respond with an Uzumaki. Both using it as an attack against Miwa, but also to extract Mahito's curse technique so he could utilize it to begin the culling games. Kusakabe was just narrowly able to save Miwa and move her out of the way from the attack, moving them back towards the group as Panda, Utsuhime, as well as Momo all arrived. Yuji was starting to feel a little bit more confident. Of course, he did know what they were up against, but now there were a lot more of them, as he did warn them in advance that Kenjaku had over 1 million cursed spirits. With them also explaining that this person was not Suguru Geto, but actually Noritoshi Kamo. Not the Noritoshi Kamo that they knew, but the Noritoshi Kamo known as the evilest sorcerer of all time. However, it was then someone with white and red hair arrived. That appeared to be a rather short monk, as they looked towards Kenjaku with a slightly annoyed face, as they questioned, "Why haven't you killed them yet?" With Kenjaku giving a shrug, as he said, "I was intrigued to see how far they would go. Plus, I wasn't really intending to kill any of them. After all, I was going to need a messenger in order to go back to the Jitsu world." And that just ended up annoying Urame more, as Urame then said, "Itadori Yuji will be enough." As they activated Frost Calm in order to freeze all the sorcerers present. The only ones that were able to avoid it was Momo, Yuji, as well as Megumi, thanks to all of their abilities to fly. Normally Todo would have also been able to avoid it, but he was starting to bottom out in curse energy, and he wouldn't be able to swap yet, as Choso and Kamo began to heat up both of their own blood in order to melt the ice that was around them. And while Urame was about to try and launch out some more ice at the two of them, instead Yuji fired out a piercing blood right at Urame's direction. Now he was even more infuriated about this, as Urame did have to lift up both of their hands in order to block this attack, but it ended up sending them flying backwards and piercing through both of their hands. It did cause quite a bit of damage to Urame, but Urame was still able to heal it off nonetheless, as they looked up to Yuji with an impressed look on them. After all, they could tell that this was Sukuna's vessel, and they had been proved much greater than they were expecting. As Yuji, Choso, Megumi, Kamo, as well as Momo were all preparing to face off against their opponents. Yuji then told Choso to start heating up some of the ice to free some of their allies. After all, Choso was right now the most drained out of them other than Yuji himself. But even in this drained state, Yuji was still stronger than his brother. But Urame had no intention to let that happen, as they activated Ice Fall, attempting to kill everybody here other than Yuji in one fell swoop. But the Ice Fall attack was broken through by another sorcerer who entered onto the field, this sorcerer being Yuki Tsukumo. And seeing a special grade sorcerer arrive like that, it did give them a bit more confidence, as Yuki then told them that Yuji should back him up, while at the same time Kamo should assist with freeing a few more people. Which Kamo did agree with, as he began to free several of the sorcerers from the ice prison, so now it was just going to leave Yuki, Megumi, as well as Yuji to face off against the two of them. This also leads into the conversation between Yuki and Kenjaku playing out nearly identical to how it plays out in canon, other than the fact that in the background that Kamo as well as Choso are freeing people, with Yuji acting as a bit of a deterrent for Urame. Mainly because anytime Urame is going to try something, Yuji is prepared to counter against it. until suddenly all the ice melts away as Urame falls down on their knees. This is because of the fact that Yuji's poison had activated inside of Urame. Due to Yuji being part cursed, his blood is poisonous towards sorcerers. On top of that, because of the piercing blood they had blocked, Urame had taken quite a great deal of blood into their system from Yuji. However, that talk was more than enough time, as Kenjaku decided it was now time to activate the Culling Games as he released his 10 million cursed spirits. Yuji activated Flowing Red Scale Sack, attempting to rush at Kenjaku as fast as possible as he saw the prison realm once more. He was trying to get it, but he wasn't on time. After all, the cursed spirits weren't going to let him get close, as Kenjaku disappeared after activating the Culling Games, taking away Gojo with him. As Yuji began to curse himself, he was feeling so weak for not being able to save Gojo, even though he had done well, even though he was able to defeat tens of cursed spirits, defeat Jogo, and defeat Mahito, he ultimately ended up falling right into Kenjaku's hands, as he felt like it was because of him that Kenjaku was able to succeed in his plan. As we now turn back to the higher-ups, who the higher-ups are currently discussing the chaotic state of this world. With the release of all of these cursed spirits, as well as the showing of what Sukuna had done and the chaos that Sukuna had caused, there was going to be quite a massive outbreak of chaos in the world. However, it wasn't all bad. After all, while the world was now in a much more chaotic state, Gojo Satoru was now sealed. The person that was a thorn in their side was now sealed away once and for all, as they had released an order for the crimes of Yuji killing thousands of people in Shibuya, as well as Yuji being a death painting. He is to be executed by Yuta Akotsu. Furthermore, anyone who attempts to free Satoru Gojo is to be executed on sight, as Yuta Akotsu declares that he will kill Yuji Itadori himself for putting all of his friends' lives in danger. As now the hunt for Yuji Itadori begins, with Yuta Akotsu being appointed as his executioner. Ultimately, Shibuya was a success for Kenjaku. While there were some things that did certainly go wrong, he did lose some of his allies, it was all negligible. After all, he was able to seal away Gojo, he was able to start the Culling Games with Mahito. He wasn't even sure if he did need to extract Mahito's curse technique, considering how much Mahito did evolve, but it was rather better to be safe than sorry, as he had also gained Jogo and added Jogo to his own arsenal as well, as now he can move on to the next step of his plans, in order to make the golden era of Jujutsu return, and he could already see it was well on the way to returning. Considering how much all of the sorcerers had grown, it was only going to be a matter of time until they returned to such a peak era, and then surpassed it. As Kenjaku couldn't help but be excited to see the path that these new sorcerers were going to take. How were they going to get stronger, and how would they evolve to deal with these circumstances? All of this anticipation and excitement excited him even further, as he hoped that this new generation was not going to disappoint him, and this was not their peaks. But he also knew only time and the Culling Games would truly tell. Especially with the news of Special Grade Sorcerer Yuta Akotsu returning as well, he was also intrigued to see that fight, the battle that would break out between Yuta and Yuji, since he knew it was coming with Yuta being appointed as his executioner.